Suddenly, the young man awakens in an unfamiliar world with a man watching him. Confused and dazed, his gaze reveals all of his astonishment. Crouched on the ground, he still doesn't move, showing all his mental confusion. The quiet and peaceful village reveals a different environment from what he was used to. The man beside him wonders where he could start the conversation. First, he asks the boy to listen carefully. Ignoring him, the boy simply begins to remove his clothes, feeling something strange in his body. That world was Iria, filled with swords, magic, and all kinds of monsters and demons. Due to the existence of such creatures, the world turned into a war zone where everyone fights for survival. The greedy place summons various people from other worlds across all dimensions. Moreover, that was the first place reached by the summoned Xenovis, the City of Beginning. It was there that he opened his eyes without having learned any magic or martial arts. To the warrior, the boy was a true classless. The protagonist introduces himself as Lee Sunman, while his new companion offers him some food. Hungry, the young man thanks the stranger for his kindness. As they walk, he receives a bit of drink. Quickly, the boy gulps down the canteen, showing gratitude for the help. The young man fills his mouth with the drink, but notices something unusual in the taste. Suddenly, he empties his cheeks, spitting out all the liquid. Someone realized it was goblin paralytic poison and spat it all into the man's eyes. The poison changed taste when diluted in water, but still had a very distinctive fishy smell. Someone understood that the man intended to deceive the newcomer and sell him as a slave. Revealing his powers, the old warrior realized he wasn't a summoned. But behind the fragile appearance hid an experienced soul, even without any class. Someone strikes his opponent right in the stomach. While fighting, the young man revealed he had 13 long years of experience. Suddenly, he grabs a dagger with his hands and lunges at his opponent, striking his throat. The main rule of Iria was not to trust others easily, as that world was nothing but trash. With little money, Someone considers his next steps. Despite everything, 100,000 and a simple dagger were better than nothing, but his body wasn't good enough. His body returned to its original state, without muscles or scars. The boy went back 13 years in the past, to when he was first summoned to Iria. His gaze reveals the attempt to find the reason for his regression. His name is Lee Sunman, a veteran C-rank mercenary of 27 years old who had lived an ordinary low-class life. For lacking special talents in his previous life, without background or unique skills, he was never able to reach the top. While walking a fine line, he found an unknown dungeon. After much suffering, he found a chest, hoping it contained some valuable treasure. However, there was only a simple stone inside, and he just took the item and left as he didn't know how to use it. Before his death, a message showed that he would return 13 years into the past, to the beginning of it all. The stone was some kind of item that returns its bearer to the past, a regression stone. At that moment, he reflects on his situation and opens the status window. He is disappointed to realize that nothing had changed despite all his high expectations. To him, this was a useless regression as he had the same stats as the first time. Despite everything, he still had the memories of the 13 years he spent in Iria, recalling great hardships. Walking, he arrives at the Healthy Bone Realignment Clinic and realizes he would have to make some changes. In Iria, there were all kinds of summon ones. Mages who use magic, martial artists who use martial arts, and among them, the most common were the classless. Even though they were capable of learning anything, they were the weakest, dying before even learning something in Iria's wild environment. Lee Sunman had lived as a C-rank mercenary, suffering all kinds of humiliation for the past 13 years. But in the end, he died having lived a poor life without any grand achievements. A very old man observes the young boy before him, who desired a skeletal remodeling procedure. Knowing the opportunities he missed, he decides to act different at this time, determined to become much stronger. With his plan in motion, the young man obtains the low-rank martial skeleton and the celestial cultivation technique. Even without skills or resources, Lee notices the transformations in his body as he leaves the establishment. The protagonist secured one of the 3 chances that could improve his pathetic status in Xenovis already 13 years ago. The martial skeleton caused a bodily modification that made it easier to learn martial arts. He was the first in Xenovis to undergo that procedure with an acupuncturist who created artificial skeletons. The conditions to receive a skeletal remodeling were to be classless and to have learned 0 skills. The Lee Sunman from the past couldn't receive it as he had already learned his skill, but in his new life it was possible. Knowing that the doctor would die soon, few classless individuals would have that same opportunity. In addition, he also acquired the true celestial cultivation technique, a technique that allows the accumulation of internal energy, the basics of a cultivation technique. The young man knew of the existence of a first-class technique hidden in the small library of Xenovis. The owner was unaware of the value of that book, so he managed to acquire it for a bargain. Among the 3 chances he missed in his past life, he managed to grab 2 of them in a single day after being summoned. The 3rd chance would be the prize for the winner of the Colosseum that would open a year from now. His standards weren't very high because only the classless could participate. Thus, it was more than possible to improve his skills during that 1 year in Xenovis. The next step would be to earn enough money to get accommodation, so he decided to hunt monsters. Tired, the man paid no attention to the child in front of him. Someone observed the armors and items laid out on the ground. With shining eyes, he stated that he would like to buy some of them. Confused, the vendor asked if the boy had enough money. but the young man would need at least 300,000 to acquire all those objects. Finally, he tried the tactic of putting it on credit, but it didn't work and he was thrown out. The vendor observed the protagonist's determination. Sunmin offered his clothes as a means of exchange. Claiming they were high-quality garments from a highly developed dimension, he tried to convince the man. However, the vendor just let out a loud laugh. Sunmin didn't like the man's expression and started to get a little irritated. Determined, the vendor stated that he wouldn't sell the items cheaper just because he was classless. To him, that brat had no shame. Saying he didn't need his dirty clothes, he decided to put it on credit. The vendor liked his attitude, fighting desperately, even though he was just a brat. With foresight, he realized the boy wouldn't die so soon and would become a loyal customer. With his battle gear, the young man gazed at the dark forest. It was a good choice to buy armor, even if he had spent everything he had. He was happy to receive a favor from the vendor, thinking he was lucky in his new life. As he walked, the boy remained on high alert. In the middle of the forest, he thought about his next moves. Being in the hunting grounds made him remember 13 years ago, when he was just a defenseless youth without armor and without skill. At that time, he was a completely pathetic person. The system reported various acquisitions, such as the lightning step technique, a strong skeleton, and the destruction palm. In the distance, the sun began to set, changing the colors of the sky. Suddenly, something started moving quickly. Within the forest, a goblin tried to hide from the boy. But Lee Sunmin was already using the soul-chasing sword technique against the monster. With a single strike, the spear pierced the goblin's face with the movement one shot, one kill, which the goblin couldn't defend against. After hitting the target, the protagonist tried to rest a little. However, he felt a strong pain in his body. Looking at his hand, he noticed something strange. One shot, one kill throws the spear using the left hand for support, but his untrained hand could suffer burns. Smiling, he decided he would need to build up some calluses on his hands through training. Even if this was a useless regression, it was still a new beginning. In a dark place, a red smoke could be seen. Sitting on the ground, a mysterious young man used his powers. The magic enveloped his body completely as he sensed something strange in the environment. Sunmin returned to the simple lodging where he had been staying since being summoned to the world of Iria. Upon entering, he was greeted with a smile. Jack Atrusi, the middle-aged innkeeper, awaited him eagerly. Carrying with him a newly acquired dimensional pouch, he handed over today's lodging fee. Jack found it strange to see such a rare item in the hands of a classless, but Sunmin simply replied that he got it for a good price. The old man, already used to eccentricities, didn't question much and inspected the goblin teeth and bodily fluids. Jack allowed him to stay for 2 more days, accepting the materials as payment. Still, he was impressed by the protagonist's persistence and considered him an incredible talent, for being a young man with no apparent talents who had arrived in Xenovis with no skills or class. Even after 2 weeks, he survived by hunting daily, always returning with something valuable to cover his stay. Jack says that a normal classless person wouldn't be as good as him. The innkeeper claimed that with that talent, he could become someone like Xian. Tired of the conversation, the young man turns his back and goes up the stairs, saying he needed to rest after a long day of work. Upon entering his room, he reflects on the man's words. He was just a determined boy, a survivor with no talent whatsoever. Opening the status window, he notices his newly acquired techniques. Even having started over from scratch, he carried with him the knowledge and techniques he had learned in his past life. He knew that although it was possible to reuse techniques just by remembering them, the ones he had mastered were second-rate. No matter how hard he trained with those martial arts, he still wouldn't be able to surpass anyone. Among them, only the celestial cultivation technique represented a glimmer of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it could take him further if combined with truly powerful martial arts. At that moment, he decided to focus his attention on improving the technique. The next morning, he was preparing to go out again when he was stopped by Lula, the innkeeper's daughter. Worried, she asked why he always returned to the forest, risking his life day after day. Lula said the boy could simply accept the safe job right there. But Sunmin had already made his choice, and since he was from another world, he needed to hunt to make money. Still, the girl thought he was very stupid and said he should find a job. Concerned, she offered a job at the inn, saying her father liked the boy a lot. But tasks like cooking and cleaning weren't his thing. Lula still didn't understand how he preferred to risk his life rather than have a secure job. Sunmin remained silent, thinking about that new life. Turning his back, he said he would be back for dinner. In his previous life, he lived making compromises and knew he could do it again. However, he would not accept living the same way. He promised himself that this time he would achieve what he deserved. For that, he was willing to do anything, wanting to live better than in his past life. As he left for another hunt, the afternoon bell rang in Xenovis. That sound signaled the arrival of a new summoned. Watching from a distance, he recognized the energy forming. It was a child apparently the same age as Sunmin. Just like in his case, the child looked vulnerable, an easy target for scammers. Men were already trying to persuade the summon with the same bottle used on the protagonist. For a moment, he wondered if he should help children, but he preferred not to get involved in those matters. As he turned his back, he bumped into someone standing beside him. Looking up, he saw how huge the man was. Before he could act, he was caught in a trap and accused of breaking a bandit's collarbone. Angry, the giant punched him in the face. The young man fell to the ground, not having time to react to the blow. The commotion drew curious glances from people nearby. Trying to divert the citizens' attention, the attacker claimed the boy had broken his bone. Therefore, you should pay in the same way. Even confused, the townspeople turned their backs on the situation and walked away. Determined, Hyung-nim decided he would break the boy's collarbone in revenge. Furious, Sunmin realized that all those men were part of the same group, and the bandit in front of him was a third-rate martial artist who couldn't tell the difference between a rib and a collarbone. Martial artists can be distinguished by levels of martial arts, and the third was a level reached with minor mastery. Sunmin had just regressed and hadn't even reached the third category yet. The boy would need help to win that fight, but he knew the people of Cenovis were heartless and wouldn't help. Realizing the child would be sold as a slave, he intervened, asking the boy not to drink the poison. The child was confused, but no longer brought the canteen to his mouth. Confident, he wanted the help of the boy, who seemed to know some combat techniques appearing to be from Murim. At that moment, the drink was completely spilled on the ground. Standing in front of him, Hyung-nim said the protagonist would be perfect for nobles with strange tastes. Bending his knee, he tried to strike the boy with a blow, but the young man knew he couldn't let things end that way. Determined, he used the lightning step technique to confront his enemy. His second move was the strong exoskeleton steel break skill, which left the opponent confused. With one strike, he hit the attacker's rib. From a distance, his companions observed the battle. His destruction palm and other techniques were effective, but the opponent seemed to have an absurdly resistant body. The two paused for a second, regaining their strength. Despite his experience, he was still far from being a match for higher-level martial artists. Hyung-nim did not feel intimidated by the young man's abilities. Considering the protagonist's weight and strength, he wouldn't be able to endure the fight for long. Meanwhile, the other henchman commented that the commotion would attract the guards. Determined, Lee Sunmin moved in for his next strike. From afar, the child watched the battle attentively. The fight forced him to use his spear, as he wouldn't win with his bare hands. Without wasting time, he grabbed his spear with determination. Suddenly, the child was by his side, asking him to repeat a phrase he had said earlier. Confused, the protagonist didn't understand the situation. Asking the child to wait 1 second, he tried to defend himself from the imminent danger. However, the boy stopped the giant's hand with a single touch. Using his powers, he launched Hyung-nim as far as he could. I can't believe those insects of mine challenged you in such a rude way. The bandit fell on top of the pile of wounded bodies on the ground. The palm strike infused with internal energy was not a second or first-class technique. Lee Sunmin realized that standing beside him was a peak martial artist despite being his age. After the fight, Sunmin was surprised as the boy might be Wiji Hoyan, the little celestial demon. The demon cult has representatives from unorthodox sects who worship power itself. The strongest in the sect becomes the leader and is called the celestial demon, and his son is referred to as the sect's young master. That summoned one was the little celestial demon, Wiji Hoyan. Coming from an ancient era, he was the same age as Sunmin, but there was a huge gap between them. At that moment, the protagonist recognized the person who had made a name for himself in area. Although he knew who it was, Wiji Hoyan introduced himself to the protagonist. The two talked in the room and Lee Sunmin said his name. The boy had shared extremely interesting things, such as the fact that Iria was a completely different world. In that place, there was no demon cult. Laughing at the situation, the boy seemed to be enjoying himself. Deep down, his gaze revealed a certain concern. Remembering the fight in the square, Wiji Hoyan asked what the boy had been yelling at him. Not understanding the reason for the question, he replied that he had warned him not to drink the water containing goblin paralytic poison. However, the little celestial demon did not accept being spoken to so informally by the young man. Lowering his body, he asked for forgiveness, saying he didn't know that he was the young master. Inside, Lee Sunmin couldn't believe he was bowing to a 13-year-old. Smiling, Wiji Hoyan showed all his satisfaction. Pointing at him, he said the boy had been using martial arts earlier, and he called his techniques trash, saying the way Sunmin fought was ridiculous, and he didn't understand where he had learned that. Dazed, the protagonist didn't understand Wiji Hoyan's words or what his goals were with that conversation. But surprisingly, instead of scorning him, he offered help, saying he would teach him martial arts. Standing in his room, the young man remained silent. Confident, the little demon claimed that with his techniques, he would improve very quickly. However, there was a single condition for Lee Sunmin. Stunned, the young man feared that condition. The little celestial demon wanted the protagonist to be his friend. Sweating cold, Sunmin didn't know what to say and was extremely confused by the situation. Since a very young age, the heir of the demon cult's celestial demon wanted a friend. His father didn't understand where that desire came from. But little Wiji Hoyan learned from a book that if you have a friend, you can overcome anything. But his father said that only applied to ordinary people, which wasn't his case. The leader of the demon cult, celestial demon Wiji Hak, said his son would rule the myriad demons without a friend. Wiji Hoyan was always surrounded by intense training and rigorous preparation. His father, an authoritarian and inflexible figure, saw any desire for human connection as weakness, something unacceptable. For practical training, those 50 people were annihilated by a 10-year-old child. Being the son of Wiji Hak, those feats were not surprising at all. Even so, his expression did not show much dissatisfaction. Unexpectedly, this desire to have a friend came true when he saw Lee Sunmin, a man returned from time. Born as the sex heir, high expectations had always been placed upon the boy, who began training early. Deprived of friendships during his childhood due to strict and relentless training, he never had time to meet people. Despite the unusual circumstances, the two made a friendship pact. Wiji Huiyan showed all his happiness upon realizing he had a new friend, Li Sunmin. Even at nearly 28 years old, the regressor became friends with a 13-year-old child. Huiyan would teach Sunmin the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn, a special technique of the demon sect that had a unique characteristic. Its internal energy appeared in a violet hue. Confused, the boy thought he was going to learn demon arts from Wiji Huiyan. Now that they were friends, the little celestial demon said the young man could speak to him informally. As he changed his tone of voice, the boy's expression revealed his complete satisfaction. The demon arts could only be practiced by the cult leader and heir, so he would learn the other techniques. While walking through the forest, the young man realized that some time had already passed. Wiji Huiyan himself had taught him the mystic arts of the Violet Dawn for an entire month. Even though he had defeated several monsters at once, his goal was still to become stronger. His current level was between the third and second category, which was progress compared to his previous life. Although his progress was evident, Huiyan's critical gaze never failed to emphasize his flaws, which pushed him even further. In the middle of the forest, the boy thought about collecting the spoils of his victories. Suddenly, a huge creature appeared among the trees. A terrifying monster was ready to end the boy's life. If he hadn't dodged in time, he would already be dead. Looking more closely, he realized it was a terrifying orc. Looking to his right, then to his left, he realized he was completely alone in that forest. He would have to fight that orc on his own. Using his spear, he delivered an attack to the creature's chest. Shortly after, he managed to open a hole in its body. With a jump, he moved in and realized he had won the fight. Confident, he stated that killing that creature was quite easy, but he remembered Huiyan's irritating comparisons. Even so, he began analyzing the strange appearance of the orc, since those monsters didn't usually live in that area. A voice said that despite his young age, he was already a strong warrior. Suddenly, a man approached the boy cautiously. That was Woon Hyeryung, a renowned warrior once known as the orchid-destroying sword in the central district. Confused, the protagonist didn't understand what the man wanted. Pointing to the fallen beast on the ground, he said he had been in the region searching for an orc causing trouble. In the city, clouds covered the blue sky. The small monkey, Du Sangriang, asked if the boy in front of him wasn't too young. But Woon Hyeryung said he had seen that warrior fighting with his own eyes and that he had interesting abilities. Wang Pei, Dagger of the Black Rain, believed Woon's words and introduced himself. Another girl introduced herself as Rainier and said she had come from the Vela's magic school. Curious, she asked if the young man had any idea what kind of job was ahead. Recently in that area, an orc faction had established a new village, invading nearby villages and killing adventurers. As such, the guild offered a reward of 20 million to exterminate the orc village that had been causing trouble in the area. If they succeeded, the reward would be equally divided into 5 parts. Reflecting on the proposal, the young man realized he would earn around 7 million. Although the reward was high, Sunmin was apprehensive about the reliability of his companions. Woon Hyeryung waited attentively for the young man's response. After thinking for a moment, he accepted the mission. Glad to have the boy on his side, the warrior said that thanks to him, everything would be easier. Despite being grateful for the hospitality, Sunmin had his reservations. Curious, he asked who the 2 seated people were. But they were just pack mules, a couple of nobodies without any class. When they realized the new soldier came from Murim, they bowed. The men were responsible for carrying the bags for the expedition and were paid with leftover money. After receiving some coins from the girl, they went out to buy apples. Rainier enjoyed the fruit as they walked. The group of adventurers approached the orc village. They estimated there were about 50 enemies in the area, but expected to face only 30. Du Sangriang was confident in the orcs' slowness and stupidity, planning to eliminate them quickly to secure the reward. The plan was to divide the group in 2. The young warrior would stay with the experienced swordsman, while the rest of the team would organize on another front. The essence of the plan was to lure the orcs out of the village and then divide and conquer. Rainier would spread their scent using wind magic, since orcs were very territorial. They would hide, waiting for the exact moment to ambush, while the mage prepared her attack spell. The little warrior and Woon would light the signal that would attract the rest of the orcs outside. That was the final plan, which seemed quite simple. Sunmin thought that for a small group, it was a reasonable plan, even though he knew it would be better to set a trap. Woon Hyeryung realized they were getting close to orc territory. From that moment on, everyone would have to be very careful and fight properly. The first group headed toward the destination. Tired, the so-called nobody carried all the gear on his back. During the journey of enemy territory, the young man reflected on the difficulty of the mission, especially for classless members. Seeing the man's expression, he remembered himself from his past life. Stopping for a moment, he became curious to know the man's name. The baggage carrier introduced himself as Brass. Skeptical about his ability to protect himself, someone warned him about the imminent dangers once the attack began. That's why he asked Brass to choose between running or staying with the group. He knew the leader wouldn't help at all, as he wasn't even paying attention to the conversation. Panting, Brass replied that he couldn't run. He didn't know what kind of punishment he would receive from the guild if he abandoned the mission, so he would have to protect himself. Spotting the village, Woon informed the young warrior that they had arrived. Avoiding patrols along the way, they observed the stakes among the trees. Now would be the perfect moment to light the signal. However, the young man asked to wait a minute and started searching for something inside his dimensional pouch. Confused, the leader didn't understand what the boy was doing. Suddenly, he poured some water so they could rub mud on their bodies, removing some of their scent. While rubbing his body with mud, Summon said he learned that trick from his master. Woon Hyryung should camouflage his scent too. Listening to the boy's advice, he threw himself into the mud. Later on, the boy would make more mud so Brass could rub himself as well. In the middle of the forest, the signal flare was activated. The orcs noticed the unusual flame. However, the leader came up with the idea of sending the pack mule as bait. His plan was to send the man to distract the creatures, allowing for an attack from behind. Hearing them talk about him, Brass became desperate. The man definitely didn't want to die, but Woon assured him of his safety during the mission. Despite that, he warned that if he didn't do what he was told, he'd likely end up dead. However, it was nothing more than a mere joke from the leader. Meanwhile, the two awaited the next steps in the dangerous journey. The young warrior took responsibility to go first, demonstrating courage and determination. Understanding the boy's objective, the commander accepted the suggestion. The plan began to work, and 13 orcs were lured out of the village, being eliminated one by one without further problems. In the middle of the forest, the protagonist displayed all his skills with the spear, delivering precise blows and attacks while more creatures came out of the forest. As he fought, Summon reflected on why he was doing all this. But regaining his focus, he realized he needed to help the classless comrade. Even without understanding if it was just sympathy, he decided to protect the man from the imminent danger. There was no true friendship between them, they weren't even friends. There was only mutual identification due to the marginal position they both occupied. The creatures waited for the boy's next attack. Reflecting on something he had learned, he attacked with his weapon in hand. Even with his master's harsh words echoing in his mind, the warrior stayed firm in his mission. His thoughts took him back to when Wiji Hoyan taught him his techniques. His master taught him the only proper way to wield a spear. The young man mentally repeated the lesson about stabbing from a distance. With determination, he executed the soul-chasing spear technique, the third form called lightning split strike. With that, he defeated a large number of orcs that had been lured out. Alongside him, Woon Hyryung fought relentlessly against those monsters. On the other side, a massive creature threatened to end Brass's life. Not knowing how to defend himself, the man simply awaited his end. Suddenly, the young man stabbed the orc with his spear, saving his comrade. With a smile on his face, he was grateful to have saved the classless man. The scene was one of war with countless orcs dead on the ground. The leader cut off the orc's ears while counting the total number of creatures that had been defeated. The ears would be used as proof of the hunt, assuming the other group had taken care of the rest. Throwing a sack to the pack mule, Woon ordered the classless man to collect everything. Now they were to rejoin the rest of the group. With an expression of admiration on his face, Brass thanked Summon for the help. Entering the forest, he went to fetch the luggage. The protagonist observed that gratitude poured onto his back. Meanwhile, the group eagerly awaited the arrival of the three. Despite the mud covering their bodies, the humor and relief were visible. The first part of the plan had worked. The leader said that thanks to the little warrior, they had managed to finish everything earlier. But the real problems were only just beginning. Suddenly, something was thrown toward the group. A dagger hit Renner precisely in the chest. Confused, the girl didn't understand what had just happened. The mage was using her powers to attack her friends. Noticing the danger, the warriors grabbed their weapons, ready for a new fight. The young man used his spear to prevent the enemy from advancing. Suddenly, he had a memory from his past life. Carrying a huge sack, the boy approached to receive a few coins. Looking to the side, he saw many people gathered in one place. It was an execution, but it wasn't something the boy was familiar with. The accused was a truly bold person, a mercenary from Murim. He had gone on a mission and killed all of his companions to keep the reward, but ended up getting caught. Attentively, young Summon observed the man's head stuck on a piece of wood. Returning to the present situation, the accused was the man standing before him. Surprised by the protagonist's reaction time, Woon Hyryung praised his quickness. However, the boy already knew everything, having witnessed his execution in another life. Even though it happened 13 years ago, he still remembered the first execution he had seen. The leader said the boy's skills were impressive for his age after watching how he fought the orcs. The second category, martial artist, challenged the young warrior, saying he was still weaker than him. Even knowing it would be a tough battle, Summon wouldn't give up easily. Despite the level difference, the boy showed superior skill and movement reading. He anticipated the attacks and used the reach of his spear with precision. Observing the flow of his movements, he managed to strike the opponent. With his past experience and Hoyan's training, he would be a worthy adversary. Woon Hyryung was impressed by the boy's abilities when seen up close. Even so, he knew the protagonist wouldn't last much longer in the battle. But there was a trap, because the boy had poisoned the leader. By mixing a bit of poison into the mud where he lay, he knew that without being injected directly, it wouldn't be lethal. That poison was enough to compromise his strength and stability. Now, Woon Hyryung was at a disadvantage and would need to think of a new plan. Quickly, he threw himself to the side. Lee Sung-min realized that the man had made a risky move. As his hands trembled, the enemy tried to exploit the weakness by taking the carrier hostage. The commander declared he would kill the man with a single blow. Worried, the boy didn't know how to escape that situation. But Woon Hye-ryung was sure that man was a weak point for the boy, who had grown sympathetic toward him. Standing still, the boy still couldn't move. Even nervous, the warrior did not retreat. Definitely, using the carrier as a hostage would not be a good tactic. For all those years, he had worked as a mercenary and only helped Brass because he remembered his own past. His gaze revealed all of his fury and rage. On the other side, Woon felt the poison spreading through his body. Internally, he battled his emotions, physical exhaustion, and moral dilemma, but he needed to stay grounded in reality. He knew he couldn't win in that state and had to conserve energy in case the monkey died. If he missed, he'd be giving himself to the enemy. If he waited too long, Brass the carrier would die. But against all expectations, Brass intervened in the situation. With a strike, he managed to buckle the leader's knees, trying to make him lose balance. The boy noticed the courage of the classless man who was trying to do the impossible. Holding Woon Hye-ryung's body, he used all of his weight in his favor. However, the opponent managed to stab him with a knife. As he screamed, the look of satisfaction on the man's face was evident. Shortly after, the young man was already by his side. The enemy panicked and tried to beg for his life, but was quickly killed. On the other side, the monkey had defeated the mage Wang Pai after a hard battle. The threat had been neutralized, but the cost was high. Brass was dead. Lee Sung-min remained standing over the two, his spear piercing the enemy's body. After the deaths of Woon Hye-ryung and Wang Pai, they were taken to the mercenary guild to receive 35 million. Wiji Foyan was happy to see that the warrior had returned safely. Curious, he wanted to know the reason for the delay since he was quite late. Tired, the protagonist threw himself onto his bed, hoping to rest a little. The death of Brass, however, weighed heavily on his spirit, as with a little more energy he could have saved the boy. Back in his shelter, he reflected on his actions, feeling dirty, tainted by decisions he didn't want to make again. Wiji Foyan confronted him, asking if he had killed someone. His friend claimed he could smell human blood on his body. Lee Sung-min began to talk about the second-rate martial artist who was trying to kill him, forcing him to fight back. Even so, the little demon still felt that his companion was hiding something. What truly haunted him was the unspoken question. What exactly was he hiding? Hearing those words, the boy stood up. Not even he knew what he was hiding, realizing his friend's distrust. Curious, he asked if it was strange that someone like him had defeated a second-rate martial artist, but Wiji deflected. Looking into his eyes, he knew this was a special person. Wiji Foyan was strolling through the city, trying to understand more about that world. Along the way, he saw many things and ended up learning about the situation of the classless. The vast majority of them were miserable people who didn't even have decent food. It was understandable that humans would kill insects while needing to build the resolve to kill a small animal. Amid the intense routine of training and challenges, Hoyan carefully observed the boy's behavior beside him. However, on the first day he was summoned, Sung-min went straight into the forest to hunt monsters. To him, his survival depended on it. But maybe the other classless didn't do that because they weren't capable. Otherwise, they knew it, but were unable to put their lives on the line to kill another living being. His friend was confused as to how he managed to do all that in one day despite being a 14-year-old classless boy. After hearing that the boy had adapted quickly, he moved on to his second suspicion. Wiji Hoyan stated that the boy had no talent. If he taught 10 things, he'd be able to learn about 3 or 4. Even so, in just 2 months, his spear skills had surpassed the level of common beginners. He did make typical rookie mistakes, and his mastery of internal techniques was too refined for someone with so little experience. That's why to him it was very strange that someone with no talent could learn a martial art in just 2 months. Hoyan's intuition, shaped by years of experience, insisted there was something more behind that serene face. The protagonist didn't understand that kind of conversation. Faced with all this, Hoyan made a risky decision by stating he didn't like lies. Inside the room, the two remained silent. Lee Sung-min stated that everyone had secrets they wanted to keep to themselves. Therefore, trying to uncover them wasn't an appropriate attitude for a friend. In front of him, the child didn't know how to respond. He only said that he also had a secret, like everyone else. Trying to exchange secrets, he said he would tell his to Sung-min, but he wasn't interested. Even so, he tried to persuade his friend with a top martial technique. But being someone without talent and with so little internal energy, he knew he would be unable to use it. Intrigued, the child no longer knew how to convince his companion. Finally, he said he would give 20% of his internal energy. That statement left the protagonist completely shocked. Deep down, that child was just curious to understand what his secret was. Being his only friend, he wanted to know everything about him. Looking into his eyes, he said that this was the definition of friendship for him. Sitting on the bed, Sung-min asked Hoyan to make a promise. If he told his secret, the child couldn't kill him. But Wiji wouldn't be capable of killing his friend. Letting her hair down, she said that in fact she was a girl. The protagonist was shocked by that revelation, showing it was something quite unexpected. She said her father wanted to keep it a secret from the sect, having to live as a boy to follow her path. The revelation was so great the protagonist remained silent. When summoned to that world, she kept the disguise because she had lived that way for so long. That was the truth she hid from everyone, but now she trusted him with the secret. Coming to terms with his thoughts, Subman said they would need separate rooms from now on. With the air still heavy with revelations, the protagonist felt he also needed to be honest. Gathering a bit of courage, he decided it was time to tell his secret. The young man took a deep breath before saying he was a regressor. Wiji's eyes widened at that information, but the girl didn't believe in that nonsense, not even knowing what it meant. He was a regressor, had died, gone back in time, and now carried with him the knowledge and memories of a previous life. Now his abilities made a lot of sense, even if it was hard to believe. Since that world was so different, anything was possible. Curious, the girl asked why she would have any reason to kill him after hearing that. Although he was trapped in the body of a 14-year-old boy, his mind belonged to someone who was 27. Despite everything, he felt bad for lying about his age, his identity, his story. But to Hoyan, that didn't matter at all. She was the one who chose to get close, the one who told him to learn martial arts, and the one who decided to offer friendship. None of it had been a deception, since he merely agreed with what she herself wanted. Therefore, she had no reason to kill her friend or end their friendship. During the 2 months they spent together, she had seen him as a friend, and that wouldn't change because of a revealed secret. In the end, that was the meaning of friendship for her. Emotion took over her shocked face as she sincerely thanked him for the connection. Their bond had become something real, solid, built on trust and mutual respect. Lightheartedly, she teased Subman about the fact that even with an extra life, his current level was still low. Besides, the girl had countless questions to ask, but they would leave that for later. From now on, she was ready to transfer her internal energy to him. Shocked, the protagonist didn't expect that promise to be real. Internal energy was something accumulated inside the bodies of martial artists. It was with it that they performed superhuman feats. There were no shortcuts. Only with cultivation techniques could one increase this energy. That's why many dedicated their entire lives to sharpening and strengthening this inner force. When Hoyan began to transfer part of her internal energy, she noticed his blood vessels weren't clean. In fact, they were filled with a lot of accumulated impurities. Even so, she would start the transfer confident that he could at least absorb part of the power. He would have to use the Violet Dawn arts to try to retain about 20%. Placing the palm of her hand on the boy's back, she began the transfer while he resisted bravely. Looking at his body, he felt the energy flowing inside him. Even tired after the process, Hoyan only smiled and was curious to know her friend's first impressions. The strength, heat, and pressure of the internal energy flowing through his meridians made his body vibrate. That 20% of internal energy was more than he had accumulated in his past life. He retained half of the energy in his body, transforming his entire physique. The rest of the energy would enter through the meridians. If he continued to cultivate the Violet Dawn arts, that power would become a true part of him. Collapsing onto the bed, Hoya needed to rest a little after the procedure. Beside her, the boy reflected, trying to understand her motivations. Curious, he asked why Wiji Hoyan did so much for him. With a smile on her face, the girl said it was because he was her friend. Everything she did for Subman was out of friendship by her own choice for her own satisfaction, not out of obligation. While she rested, she reflected on her own satisfaction. Hoyan also decided to teach one more martial art, the supreme spear technique of the 9 heavens used by the Spear King. Although she knew Subman's limitations, she was willing to give her all so that he could master it. Besides, she always emphasized that her actions were for her own satisfaction. After all, he was the first friend she had in 13 years, and she didn't want to see him die in vain as he had in the past life. The protagonist was touched by the girl's sensitivity. Suddenly, she held his face, stating that he shouldn't bow his head to his friends. Touching his bruised face, she couldn't believe he had taken a punch. Suddenly, she grabbed him and pulled him closer to her body. With a smile on her face, she said she wanted something more fun. As they exchanged confidences about the past, the bond between them grew stronger. She was curious to know what she was like in the past life. However, the boy said he only heard rumors that claimed she ruled with tremendous power at the peak of Iria. After being summoned, she left the city in less than a month. And after that, she remained missing for a long 3 years. Reflecting on that life, she imagined she must have traveled a lot during those 3 years. She had always wanted freedom, and being in the cult meant she only had freedoms within the leader's operations. That's why she was so happy to have been summoned to that world and for having made a friend. Finally, she revealed that she wished to leave that place in a month. Dreamy, she wanted to feel the world and all its freedom. After teaching him the supreme technique, he would set off on a journey like in the past life. Now she wanted to know what Subman's plans were. She was curious to know how her friend wanted to live that life. Hearing those questions, not even he knew how to answer properly. Remembering his past life and everything he had suffered, he didn't want any of it to repeat. Compared to his previous life, he simply wished to have a better one. To the girl, that was a very ambiguous thing to say. Determined, she wanted to find out what Lee Subman's goal was. Resting his head on the bed, he said he wasn't sure about anything, but she would be eager to hear his goal when he eventually found one. In addition, she wanted to know about his past life in the smallest details. Embarrassed, the protagonist said he didn't have much to tell. Reflecting on that, Subman also realized that in his previous life, he had never had someone he could call a friend. Hoyan was his first friend in all his lives. The night passed, and they talked about many things. Then a month passed quickly. without them noticing. Before her departure, the girl wanted to test how much Sunmin had learned in a month. It was the final training session before goodbye, and he needed to show everything he had learned. It was the moment to prove his worth with every drop of effort and every trace of the newly acquired energy. Hoyeon, on the other hand, kept that confident smile, knowing he wouldn't be able to defeat her easily. Sunmin was ready with his eyes burning with determination and his spear in hand. As always, she proposed something unexpected, giving him an advantage of 20 strikes. Even so, the young man was extremely suspicious of the gift. Sunmin hesitated as he thought about which move to use, but remembered the supreme spear of the 9 heavens adapted for him. Hoyeon had named it after him, making it more than a technique, a symbol. Even if it wasn't his intention, that was a recognition, a way of saying he was unique. The technique represented a fusion between the supreme spear of the 9 heavens and the devastating soul-chasing spear. Now, with personalized movements and postures designed for Sunmin, he would begin the fight. Wielding his spear, he tried to use the learned technique followed by the soul-chasing strike. Patiently, the girl waited on the other side. With just a light touch, she was able to dodge the attack. He advanced with precision, more strength, more technique, more control. His second stance was the lightning-splitting pursuit. Compared to his previous version, that boy who barely knew how to handle a spear was now someone else with more control in his attacks. He had learned about force, which spun and swung the opponent's attack, control to pressure and block the opponent's strike. In addition, subtle attacks were essential to pierce the opponent. That was the basic for his spearman, but the boy had learned it all on his own. Therefore, he would need to practice those movements every day until he could master them. In the fight with Hoyeon, he was able to show everything he had just learned. Even with all his evolution, he still wasn't able to use his back. Frustrated, the boy tried to mix each spear strike with explosive energy following her tips. Wiji Hoyeon was pleased to notice that he had listened to her advice. Tired, he realized there was a vast gap between the two. Even advancing to the second category, thanks to Hoyeon's internal energy, she was able to block with just her right hand. In front of him was a peak martial artist. Confident, she didn't show the slightest bit of fatigue as she ate. Meanwhile, her opponent couldn't do anything. Not giving up the fight, he attacked again with his spear. But quickly the girl blocked all his strikes, one after another. Each blow was stopped with ease by her right hand. And then one by one, the 19 attacks were delivered, and with none landing, he realized he had lost. However, the child didn't expect the final strike, which brought the spear's tip very close to her face. With a smile on his face, the young man thought he had achieved his goal. But quickly, the girl vanished from his sight. Without understanding anything, she appeared behind him, showing he had lost the fight. Even so, Hoyeon praised him, recognizing the potential in her friend. With the internal energy he now carried, Sunmin was born for martial arts. And even without realizing it, he had sensed her presence before, something reserved for those with talent. She believed in him so much that she said one day his weapon would become something exceptional. The girl was looking 10 years into the future, prophesying what could happen. That fight had been extremely easy. Even so, she was satisfied with her friend's skills for showing much more than what she had taught. Therefore, they would meet again in 10 years. A month ago, she asked what Sunmin's goal in life was, but he still wasn't sure. In that case, he should make her his final goal. Humans need goals, and his life would be nothing more than drifting aimlessly. As a challenge, she wanted him to come back in 10 years, strong enough to defeat her. But Sunmin hesitated, saying he would never be able to become like her. He couldn't do it because he had no talent, unlike his friend, who was a genius and had taken several elixirs. The two of it started from different lines, making comparison impossible. He was being swallowed by that old sense of inferiority from his past life. Hoyeon didn't hide her frustration, stating that she hated that. That inferiority complex from his past life was not a good thing. Suddenly, fury was written in the protagonist's eyes. He had nothing and was summoned to Irio with empty hands and no talent. He had risked his life fighting a boar in the mud, living a lowly life until the day of his death. Hoyeon pointed out that he had learned mystical arts and become a second-rate warrior in just 3 months. Even after receiving his second chance, he refused to aim high, to have a goal, not allowing himself to dream. In every way, she tried to make her friend open his eyes, but he only got angrier. Hoyeon was shocked to realize how angry he was. The protagonist couldn't believe he was getting a lecture from a 7-year-old child. Then, and even reluctantly, Sunmin accepted the challenge, making her his goal, piercing her heart with a spear. Frightened, Hoyeon declared that wasn't what she wanted, because she didn't want to die. To her, friends didn't kill each other. After the euphoria passed, Sunmin agreed with the girl. Suddenly, his expression turned into pure shyness, but the girl teased him again, leaving him completely irritated. In the end, they sealed the deal, and 10 years from now, they would meet again. With a smile on her face, the child said she would be looking forward to his spear. Pausing to think about that phrase, the young man found her words strange. Despite her young age, the girl teased him with her jokes. The two had a large age gap, but she only played with the situation. Getting closer, the girl began to intimidate the warrior. Determined, she stated that in 10 years she would be so grown up he would have nothing to comment on. Sunmin defined 3 goals: survive, seize every opportunity his memories could offer. With a bundle resting on her shoulder, the child said goodbye sincerely. Sunmin said the two of them would meet again in 10 years, eagerly awaiting that day. In addition, his last goal, but the most important of all, would be to not die until that day arrived. As a promise, he told Hoyan that he would stay alive because now he had something and someone to live for. The friends went down different paths, separating for a while. In Xenovis, Lee Sungmin was able to achieve 3 important things: the martial skeleton, the true celestial cultivation technique, and finally in the third, the tournament of the classless. In the tournament of the classless, only those who have no class are allowed to participate. 10 months after Hoyan's departure, Xenovis held another edition of the tournament. During that time, Lee Sungmin's martial arts had become first grade, making it easy to win the tournament. As a prize, he received a secret energy elixir, capable of enhancing internal energy. He drank the elixir on the spot without hesitation. However, compared to the energy he had received from Hoyan, that elixir didn't feel valuable. With that, Lee Sungmin felt he had achieved everything he could in Xenovis. What remained now was to depart, and on the way he ran into Hans, a street vendor. The man congratulated him on his victory and asked what he wanted to buy. But that, in truth, was a farewell, since the boy was leaving. Understanding the situation, Hans smiled with a mix of pride and sadness. Sungmin had become someone special, having known the classless boy from the beginning. The man was certain the protagonist would do well outside that city and survive for a long time. Before leaving, he handed him something. It was a second-hand dimensional bag with 50% more capacity than the one he had. Confused, Sungmin didn't understand why the vendor was giving him something so valuable. Han simply replied that when someone gives a gift, it's better to accept, and besides, the bag wouldn't be worth much for resale. That was a farewell gift, and when the young man became famous, he could repay it 100 times over. He wanted Sungmin to spread across area that at the start of his journey, he owed a lot to a simple street vendor. With gratitude in his eyes, Sungmin thanked him for the kind gesture. Before leaving, he returned to the inn where he had been staying. He was surprised by Lula, the innkeeper's daughter, who worked at the place. Quickly, she noticed that the boy was leaving. It wasn't too hard to guess since he had left the room way too tidy. Talking to the boy, she said her job as an employee was to tidy the rooms. The protagonist realized how grateful he was for all the time he had spent at the inn. The girl knew that everyone summoned to the city ended up leaving one day, and she was already used to it. When he said he had to leave, her expression showed a bit of sadness. She didn't want to believe Sungmin was leaving so suddenly. Before he could go, she wished that he would die a horrible death in some random place. Angry, she left, stomping her feet on the ground. Jack, the innkeeper, and her father noticed his daughter's fury. The two men were left confused, realizing how unpredictable women could be. Jack apologized for his daughter, saying she was still very young. But the protagonist wasn't shaken by the situation, as he had a lot of maturity within himself. The man gave him an old cloak, one he had used when he was young. The cloak contained temperature retention magic and sword magic, making it very useful despite its simple appearance. Sungmin thanked him once again, and Jack advised him to get the cloak adjusted, as it was too big. He concluded by saying Sungmin had been the best classless person to ever stay at the inn. Emotional and with tears in his eyes, he asked the boy to be careful out there. Wearing the cloak, the boy left the inn. However, he stopped walking for a moment when he heard noises coming his way. At the moment of departure, Lula was shouting Sungmin's name and running toward him. Turning around, he saw the girl standing behind him. Tired, she had run to him and was breathless to say what she wanted. As she rested a bit, she caught her breath. Lowering her head, she said she took back what she had said earlier when she wished he would die. Sweat ran down her face as she wished for him to live a long life and not die. Impressed, Sungmin couldn't believe the girl had run all that way just to say that. From the bottom of her heart, Lula wished for him to live a long life, and when he grew tired, to return to that city. Thanking her for the words, he smiled at the girl, admiring her kindness. Before he left, she confessed that at some point she started looking at him differently. She didn't know exactly why, nor did she understand the feeling, but she believed she had started to like him. After confessing that, the two remained silent until Sungmin said he had already figured that out. Worried, Lula didn't want him to die, and he asked her to be at ease. And so the two said their goodbyes. Realizing they would be apart, the girl broke down in tears. In his past life, Sungmin had taken 3 years to graduate from Xenovis, and in this life, it took only 1 year. If before he had no good memories of that place, this time he left carrying precious ones. Looking back, he wondered if he would be able to return to Iria, and with those memories, he departed, carrying with him the one promise to never die. Lee Sungmin reached Mount Mercy as a very young practitioner. His next step would be to choose a type of prohibition, and to avoid dying, it was something he had to do. In his memory, Hoyan had asked where they would meet again, admitting she didn't know the geography of that world very well. Thinking of a place, the hero decided they would meet in Behenger. There were still 9 years left until the promised day, but the question now was different. Where should he go? He didn't need to rush straight to Behenger, considering returning to being a mercenary, but that would mean living the same life. This time, he wanted to do things differently. He needed time to train, to truly grow. The Mountain of Mercy, the god of trials and tribulations of Iria, came to his mind. It was said that in that god's territory, it was possible to increase training efficiency hundreds of times. Besides, he was sure that Mount Mercy was nearby. Decided, he chose what his next step would be. Upon finding the mountain, he immediately began training under the prohibitions imposed by a priest. He received 2 of them. The first was the prohibition of weight. Everything became heavier, his body, his clothes, even the objects in his dimensional bag. Even the bread felt like lead. The second prohibition was even crueler. Upon tasting the bread, the boy immediately became ill. Suddenly, the taste of food was something different, totally disgusting, making him vomit. That was the second prohibition he received, which affected his sense of taste. In truth, you don't lose your sense of taste, but everything that enters your mouth tastes disgusting. Not just the taste, but also the texture of the food. You could even feel the body fluids of a squirming insect. At that moment, he was weak upon realizing that he wouldn't be able to eat or drink anything. Reflecting, the protagonist thought about giving up, believing he didn't meet that mission. If he went straight to Behendra and became a mercenary, he'd probably reach rank B quickly. That would already be better than his past life. However, he still thought a lot about Wijihoyan. Remembering the girl, he tried to force himself to eat the piece of bread. He tasted all the worst flavors in his mouth, but he didn't give up halfway. Even while cursing Mershi for that terrible prohibition, he decided he would try. Beside him, the goddess whispered in his ear, considering him an insolent human. Suddenly, the warrior sensed the energy circulating through his body. Turning around, he couldn't see anyone, thinking it might be an illusion. A week passed, and during all that time, the weather became increasingly merciless. Still, he could try to hunt and spotted a deer ahead of him. Grabbing his ring, he hid and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Suddenly, he sprang from hiding and launched himself at the animal. However, as he got closer, the creature turned out to be so cute that he couldn't bring himself to kill it. Frozen, he was unable to act. Thus, the deer hopped away, grateful for being spared. Lee Sungmin's journey was becoming more and more difficult. The protagonist didn't know how much longer he could endure the mountain. Tired, he set his spear down and reflected on his current life. Without enough nutrients, his only food was bread and water. On that mountain, he had to fend for himself, finding clothes, food, and shelter while bearing the prohibitions. In addition to the extreme temperature changes, the orbs were strong and fast as well. The weight prohibition kept him from hunting, and even if he managed to, the taste prohibition kept him from eating. With his body weakened, he intended to train there for at least 2 years, but was already reaching his limit in the first week. While he reflected, he noticed an unusual presence approaching. Then something unexpected happened. A woman appeared before him. Not recognizing that face, he wanted to know who she was. On that mountain, there was a prohibition that prevented practitioners from hurting one another, so perhaps he wasn't in danger. However, the woman had a prohibition that kept her from speaking. She could only communicate using gestures. Sungmin quickly realized that the woman carried the voice prohibition. Suddenly, the same deer he had seen before appeared dead before him. Using a stick, the woman began to write something on the ground in Area's official language. She had been watching him for days and knew that, at this rate, he would soon die, so she had come to help him. Despite his gratitude for the help, Sungmin was suspicious, wanting to know what she wanted in return. But the woman didn't expect any kind of repayment for the gesture, showing she was simply a kind person. That woman who had appeared out of nowhere helped him completely. She had introduced herself as a kind person, and every time he was in trouble, she appeared again. One day, he wanted to know her name and was surprised by her answer. He was shocked to learn that it was Baksogo, a legendary figure he knew from his past life. She was known as Baksogo, the Lightning, famous for her exceptional mobility, fast as lightning itself. But what truly shocked him wasn't meeting a future celebrity. He knew that in the future, 8 years from now, she would be murdered, killed by Wijihoyan, the little celestial demon. On Mount Mershi, practitioners received severe prohibitions every 6 months and couldn't harm one another. Sungmin tried to understand the mystery behind Baksogo's death, wondering if it had been an incident inside a dungeon. Beside him, the woman observed his thoughts carefully. Suddenly, a boy was startled by the woman's appearance, as she used her fingers to write something directly on the stone. She was observing his condition and showed concern, thinking he might be starving again. Even with her high level in martial arts, her prohibition also prevented her from using sound transmission to communicate. Confused, the boy noticed something different in her body. That was her new prohibition after a year and a half on the mountain. It prevented her from feeling her left arm. Just like him, who had lost his sense of taste and bore intense weight on his body, she too faced limitations. Baksogo felt sorry for the boy's hardships, especially that he had lost the joy of eating. Curious, he asked about the prohibitions of other practitioners. Then she decided to introduce him to the other mountain dwellers who had been training there for over half a year. Without time to think, Baksogo vanished like lightning. Startled, the protagonist wondered how he'd ever be able to keep up with the woman's speed. Even without the weight prohibition, he wouldn't be able to go as fast as her. With his body heavy, he should focus more on movement techniques. Intrigued, the young man tried to ask Baksogo to teach him some techniques, but it wouldn't be possible. With a smile on his face, he said it was just a joke. With her right arm, the woman held the boy's body and carried him. Because he was too slow, she would have to carry him on her back. Nervously, he asked the woman to wait 1 second so he could process everything, but she didn't listen to his requests and began to run. Baksogo, the mute, took Sungmin to meet the other practitioners, but upon arrival, they smelled a terrible odor. Scarlet, a future Grand Mage, had prohibitions that kept her from bathing or changing clothes. Bijun, the future Phantom Sword, had lost vision in both eyes. Baksogo had restrictions in her left eye, left arm, and was deprived of speech. Lee Sungmin quickly realized he was surrounded by individuals he knew very well. In the future, they would become powerful figures in area respected by all. However, at that moment, they were still complete unknowns. Scarlet asked what the boy's prohibitions were. She expressed doubt and judgment about him, starting with 2 prohibitions, questioning how long he could endure. For entering Mount Mercy in search of power, Jun believed that those 2 prohibitions were understandable. The old man said the young man wanted to surpass his limits, no matter the cost. Impressed, the boy agreed with everything said, even if it gave the other practitioners chills. Jun explained that all kinds of random people gathered on the mountain, that only 4 remain in the past 6 months. Saying he was eager to see the boy's next steps, the old man would keep an eye on him. Besides the protagonist, Baksogo had also started with 2 prohibitions. Now that everyone knew each other, they could return. But the woman had said there were 4 people who had trained for more than a year and a half. Among them, a 5th figure was mentioned, someone named Flam, whose name inspired caution. Jun said that Flam was a very dangerous person who shouldn't be introduced to the protagonist. Confused, he didn't understand all that fear of the last practitioner, but let the story go. Time passed, and 4 intense months of training made him stronger. The prohibitions became more severe, increasing the weight on his body and making food unbearable. Even so, his progress was remarkable, growing stronger each day. After 4 months of training, his mastery of the Violet Dawn mystic art rose to 3 stars. In addition, his strikes became much more precise and powerful. Mount Mercy was harsh and challenging. Despite everything, the trials were rewarding. During the day, he used the Supreme Ring of the 9 Heavens, summon style, and at night he practiced the Violet Dawn mystic art. He accepted this suffering as part of the path he had chosen, feeling like his bones would break at every moment. The protagonist was destined for that fate, for it was the goal he had chosen. His body grew and changed. His clothes no longer fit too tight to contain the new strength emerging within him. Then he met a new face, someone his age, watching him with curiosity. The young man was impressed by the interesting spear-throwing technique he had just witnessed. Standing on a rock, the newcomer said he had never seen someone his age on the mountain. The boy introduced himself as Flam, the very name that had been mentioned with fear. Curious, he wanted to know the name of the stranger who had such enviable skill. Scarlet was sitting, practicing one of her spells reflecting on geniuses. B explained that Flam surpassed others while laughing at them. That was his kind of talent. Thus, the advice the protagonist had received was to not meet the boy, or he would end up falling into a bottomless pit of despair. At that moment, the young man remembered the wise words of the old man. Nervously, he introduced himself as Lee Sungmin. With a smile on his face, Flam realized the boy had already heard his name from others. Turning his back, he said he needed to train with his spear and didn't have time for conversation. The protagonist couldn't believe that small child was a true genius. Walking away, he didn't want to waste his time with a guy like that. But the boy didn't seem to want to leave him alone, asking countless questions while following him. Saying he would train with his spear, Lee Sungmin realized the weapon had disappeared from his hands. Looking back, Flam was holding his battle weapon as a form of provocation. The smile on the boy's face was frightening and strange. The greatest humiliation possible for a martial artist is to have their weapon taken. But before getting angry, Sungmin was lost in confusion. Flam claimed he would return the object after using it a little, borrowing it temporarily. Suddenly, the boy began to imitate his techniques and movements. Using the supreme balance of the 9 Heavens Sungmin style, he attempted a new strike. All of a sudden, he perfectly remembered the technique used by the protagonist to cut down a tree. Wielding his spear, he unleashed thundering blows in the middle of the forest. With a fluid movement, he copied exactly the technique Sungmin had created and refined over months. Realizing the destruction caused, he admitted it was a very good spear technique. Lee Sungmin looked very frightened when he realized the boy had been able to use a spear technique he had seen only once. With a smile on his face, Flam watched his companion's reaction. With a burst of laughter, he realized he was better than Lee Sungmin. At that moment, the protagonist became hopelessly embarrassed. Flam didn't understand why so many people came to the mountain to train hard, since he could easily surpass them all. Even so, none of those people were like him. Confused, the protagonist paid attention to every word the boy said. Calling Baksogo, Scarlet, and Jun weird, he claimed he could copy all the practitioners' techniques. Even so, not even Flam knew why he was that way. While others seemed talented in Sungmin's eyes, Flam shone like a sun that outshone all the stars. In that way, how could the protagonist ever hope to reach geniuses if he was just an ordinary person? He felt different from the time he had spent with Hoyun, even though she never flaunted her genius. With a superior air trying to appear as a normal person, Flam wanted to know what Sungmin's prohibition was. He revealed that he had 4 and mocked a prohibition based on humility, causing Sungmin to back away. Flam tried to return the spear, but was immediately rejected. Sungmin no longer wanted contact with him, consumed by anger, shame, and helplessness. Not understanding the hostility, he suggested Sungmin descend the mountain, and he was too weak for that place. Upon hearing that, the protagonist tried to punch the boy hard, but was stopped. Within the mountain, none of the practitioners were allowed to hurt each other, as it was strictly forbidden. When confronted physically, Flam mocked the situation. Flam claimed that Sungmin only attacked because he knew no one could be hurt on the mountain due to the rules of the goddess Mercy. Baek Sogo appeared, silently watching everything with attention. Flan justified himself, saying he had only borrowed the spear and that Sungmin had overreacted. He'd also claimed that although the spear technique was excellent, the hero wasn't good enough to master it. The more powerful the martial art, the harder it was to refine, so he stated that Sungmin would have to train a lot. On that mountain, the greater the prohibition, the greater the blessings granted by mercy. Therefore, the boy explained that pushing oneself to the limit was the only way to evolve faster. Suddenly, he was prevented from speaking due to his prohibition. Behind him, Baek Sogo seemed genuinely impressed by his audacity. However, it was already too late, and the protagonist had already understood his next step. Overcome with intense emotions, Sungmin ran toward the temple. Meanwhile, Baek Sogo tried with all her might to use her voice to call out to the boy. But her prohibition prevented her, making her unable to speak. The echo of the word talent resonated in her mind like a hammer crushing her self-esteem. Meanwhile, the young man cried out desperately for the name of the goddess Mercy. A growing sense of inferiority spread, and his frustration turned into despair. Upon hearing his name, Mercy appeared, ready to speak with that human. Holding his spear, his body was full of determination as he said he wanted to add another prohibition. Lee Sungmin was in an unknown space, enveloped by a divine aura. Before him, the entity he had called manifested, Mercy, the goddess of prohibitions. That space belonged to her. It was her home. Curious, the protagonist wanted to be sure he was speaking with Mercy, but it was indeed the goddess who appeared when the boy called her. With curiosity, she asked if the young man wanted to add another prohibition. He already had the prohibitions of taste and weight, which were already very difficult. Despite everything, he was determined to endure another one. Mercy had doubts about the motivations of the human in front of her. His soul was marked by returning through time by being a regressor. The eyes of a god can see through a mortal's causality. All mortals are destined to die the moment they are born, and going against this is the essence of causality. Those who defy the law and break the limits of their own destiny are called transcendental beings. Although the boy was not a transcendental being, he distorted the limits of causality and even after dying returned to the past. All existences are bound by the law of cause and effect. It was not natural to have defied death, as his soul would suffer tremendous karma in the process. Even so, nothing would affect him while he was alive, but after death, he would suffer for millions of hours. That was the true meaning of going against the law, but it didn't seem to concern the protagonist, who appeared indifferent to death. In front of him, Baek Sogo looked extremely irritated by the young man's actions. She realized that he had added a new prohibition, even with two other terrible ones. As he trembled, he noticed how he had made the woman worried. His expression revealed a certain astonishment upon hearing the young man's words. Curious, she asked what kind of prohibition had been added. Now he would have to endure the prohibition of heat and dreams. Prohibitions of senses and abstract concepts were even more severe. The first deprived him of any warmth. Cold took over his body even under the sun or before a fire. The second turned sleep into a land of nightmares, where the most painful memories repeated without respite. His dreams were haunted by his parents, childhood horrors, anxiety, and everything bad. Sleeping no longer meant resting comfortably, with no more solace in body or mind. Baek Sogo realized how terribly insane that boy was. His actions were extremely reckless, and even if he managed to reach a high level at his age, he would suffer terrible consequences. As she argued with him, the young man tried to say something. With a sad expression, he claimed he had no talent whatsoever. His growth was slower than expected, disproportionate to the number of restrictions he carried. The disharmony between talent and skills made Baek Sogo wonder what kind of guy he really was. Lee Sungmin had a goal that was hard to reach with his talent. Therefore, it was through Flam that he realized what had to be done. To stand beside people with talents beyond common sense, he too would have to do something extraordinary. At that moment, the woman understood the young man's motivations. The two remained silent, exchanging no words. With a smile on her face, she realized that the young man's goal was grand. Baek Sogo also wanted to become the strongest person in the world, understanding his feelings. Confused, the boy paid attention. In the past, he had asked her to teach him movement techniques. Even though she said it was just a joke, the woman was determined to teach him. Handing over a book, she showed that it was the secret manual called Shadowless Soul Flight. The martial art was both a movement and a mystical art, and the book contained everything she had learned about locomotion techniques. Turning its pages, the boy realized how incredible it was. Even without knowing why she was passing on her precious teachings, she understood that he wouldn't give up on his goals. From now on, he was to call her senior sister. With a sweet look, the woman revealed she felt sympathy for the young man and cared about him. Moreover, she always considered herself a kind person who helped others. The protagonist trained his skills again, always keeping in mind the affection of Wiji Hoyan. He alternated his stances between the supreme spear of the 9 heavens and the soul pursuit. By the 5th stance, he was already using the deadly lightning. In his mind, he visualized the destruction he would inflict upon his own body while facing Hoyan. After more than 10 years of training, he still wasn't able to defeat the little celestial demon. In the end, Hoyan stated that teaching martial arts to him had been a mistake, having lost all hope. Using her powers, she decided to take back everything she had given him. After destroying his Danshin, the young man would no longer be able to use martial arts from that point on, leaving him completely with nothing. As she walked away, Summin tried to call out desperately to his friend. Every step was a rupture with his body's limits, which left him increasingly terrified. Lee Summin woke up in shock after a nightmare involving Wiji Hoyan. His body was sweaty, his heart racing, but he soon realized it had just been a dream. Feeling a momentary relief, he tried to control the nervousness that was reflected in his hands. Suddenly, he was surprised by the presence of the mysterious girl who seemed to know more than she should. Startled, he stared attentively at Scarlet, who had been watching him closely during his sleep. The woman commented on his recent actions, especially the addition of new prohibitions. Her proximity made him uncomfortable, and the stench she carried seemed to affect even his eyes. With sarcastic remarks about his choice of restrictions, like the prohibition of dreams and heat, she claimed he would die. The protagonist was already feeling sick from that horrible smell when Dak Bijun appeared. They were both there for a reason. To help him confused, the hero didn't seem to understand why the two of them had suddenly appeared. Scarlet repeated that they had come to help Lee Summin. They had been sent by the mute woman and brought magical means with them. Upon noticing that Bak Sogo was planning something, the boy understood everything. Scarlet had prepared magical scrolls with which he could learn spells. By possessing the scrolls, everything could become more convenient in the world of magic. The landscape reflected a glowing lilac from the sky. Dak Bijun offered more physical and direct help to deal with the suffering caused by the prohibitions. Determined, the young man was willing to do the best he could. At that moment, the two were preparing for battle. Scarlet taught 4 types of magical techniques. The first was mental cleansing. It was used to purify his mind, which was contaminated by nightmares. The second technique was a simple magic that could strengthen him faster. It was extremely useful in maintaining the prohibition of weight. By the end of the day, the sky took on a more orange hue with few clouds. While fighting Dak Bijun, he used the third magic to restore fatigue, a magic to recover from fatigue, but excessive use would drain his life force, possibly fatally. However, if he wanted to endure that hellish training, he had no other choice. Even with all the preparation, his performance in combat against an old blind man was still weak. Even without being able to last a mere 100 seconds, someone claimed he would do better next time. Suddenly, the prohibition of heat began to reverberate throughout his entire body. Dakby helped as much as he could, pressing specific points on his body to make him more resistant to the cold. Shortly after, the boy already began to feel a little better. The sword phantom pressed blood vessels that boosted metabolism so he could withstand the prohibition. After helping the boy, the old man calmly walked away. He left saying it was extremely difficult to find a sparring partner on that mountain. Lee Sunmin showed gratitude and realized that without all that help, he would have died a long time ago. Since his regression, the people around him had become warmer and more helpful. Reflecting on it, he realized that attitude was very strange. To him, it wasn't something natural for human beings. Ever since he returned, everyone was much friendlier to him, not matching his memories of the past. As he walked, Scarlet called out to the old man, who noticed her unpleasant smell from afar. Annoyed, the woman hated being treated that way just because she hadn't bathed in a few days. The two talk about the boy, Lee Sunmin, and how they were helping him. For an old man who only cared about martial arts, he was taking care of the boy with all his heart. But the help wasn't coming only from him, since Scarlet had also personally made magical scrolls. Reflecting on it, neither of them understood why they were helping the protagonist. They only knew that when they saw him, they couldn't leave him alone. While reflecting on the help from those around him, Sunmin decided to set those thoughts aside. To him, in this new life, he was just a lucky boy. Half a year later, the landscape was still filled with purple moss. A warrior held his weapon with all his strength. In the middle of the forest, he continued practicing his skills. Alone and in the middle of nowhere, his expression was pure exhaustion. Even so, he would not give up. Beside him, another character called him a larva. Impressed, he said he didn't believe he would last this long. The warrior remained kneeling in the same place. Without saying anything, he had ignored that person since the day they met. One possibility was that he had taken the prohibition of voice, reaching the half-year mark, and had been added for convenience. Without stopping to talk for a second, the character said he thought he would choose only more complicated prohibitions. Suddenly, the warrior lowered his weapon to the ground. Curiously, the boy watched intently. He was completely different from the person he had been 6 months ago. His evasion, stability, and movements were entirely clean. The movement techniques he had learned from Bak Sogo harmonized very well with the protagonist. Thinking it over, he believed that even a larva could achieve something if it crawled enough. Laughing, he said that would be the only thing he could do after taking on 5 prohibitions. Not paying attention to a single word, the protagonist kept training. Intrigued, the character watched again with his large eyes. Finally, he grabbed his combat instrument. Determined, he asked again why he was being ignored, since he could understand his body language. Tired, the boy wondered if his companion had nothing better to do. Scared, he knew he couldn't be underestimated, but he would be unable to kill him, according to the rule against violence. Despite everything, his companion struck him. Falling to the ground, the warrior didn't even notice the attack. Laughing at the situation, the other realized how pathetic it was, since he was crawling on the ground like a larva. He had been able to cause a kind of damage indirectly. Showing his sword, he stated that the boy wasn't capable of doing things like that. That weapon in his hand was a key sword. He provoked him, saying he would never be able to have such abilities. Therefore, he would have to work hard to get where he wanted, while the other character could get there easily. Even with so many obstacles, the protagonist would continue his mission, which left the other very shocked. To him, there was no end to the despair if he kept insisting he wasn't talented. In the other's view, his hard work was probably useless, but he could fight in a different way. No matter how long it took, he would continue fighting slowly like a larva. Therefore, the other could remain arrogant, since one day he would drive his spear into that confident body. While demonstrating his abilities, the boy remained quiet in his place. With more force, he planted the spear into the tree. He paid attention to everything the protagonist tried to explain, even without words. In front of him, he looked quite imposing. In the end, he simply said that if he truly believed that, he would be waiting anxiously for the day to come. The protagonist would not give up or cry halfway through. 1 month later, Lee Sung-min became a 1-year practitioner on the mountain, and it was time to choose a new prohibition. His choice was the prohibition of hearing. The prohibition of hearing was something torturous. His ears were filled with terrible noises he couldn't get used to. 6 prohibitions. Despite being on the verge of death every day, he continued swinging his spear without fail. With his movements, he could dodge, stay firm, and pierce with ease. His skills were the supreme spear of the 9 heavens, the mystic arts of Violet Dawn, and shadowless soul flight. Besides that, the fights with Dokbi Jun and the training with Bak Sogo helped him on this path. Only Scarlet didn't help much. The stronger Lee Sung-min became, the heavier his body grew, the taste of food became more disgusting, and his dreams more intense. Even greater chills wrapped his body, and there were endless sounds in his ears. However, at times it was even comforting because it blocked Flam's annoying chatter when he came looking for him. And so, slowly like a larva, the protagonist continued improving. Upon meeting Mercy, he wanted to know why she had summoned him, since there were still a few weeks left before adding another prohibition. Yes, she turned to the practitioner and congratulated him for overcoming his test. Confused, he didn't understand what that conversation was about. Suddenly, Flam appeared in front of him. The protagonist was terribly startled. Mercy explained that Flam's existence itself was a test. At that moment, he began to understand everything. Bak Sogo, Scarlet, Dokbi Jun, all of them had become strong and respectable people in area. Even so, he had never heard of Flam, and he couldn't be a nobody due to his enormous amount of power. Though it was strange, he didn't know that Flam didn't truly exist. Flam explained that he used his extraordinary power as a test to drive the practitioners into despair. Even the most talented looked at the character and fell into complete agony. Now they were worried, losing their minds and running away from Flam. But the protagonist was different. Despite having no talent, he threw himself into an even harsher trial and made Flam his goal. That was a very reckless way to deal with a problem, but the boy hadn't been able to drive him to despair. Therefore, his recklessness was something favorable. Mercy asked the warrior not to reveal Flam's identity to the other practitioners, or he would face the wrath of God. In any case, the young man would continue training on that mountain. The reward for overcoming the test would be delivered the day he left the mountain. If Lee Sung-min offered his soul to Mercy, she would grant him a power impossible to obtain even with 100 years of training. However, he refused the offer and preferred to keep crawling slowly, training hard. Lee Sung-min grew a bit thoughtful about what he could do. He truly hated the word effort, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't keep up with all those geniuses. But being a genius didn't mean he didn't have to make an effort. In the end, he hated those who dismissed the difference between what had happened and what hadn't by attributing everything to effort. But at the same time, he clung to the word effort since his previous life where he made defeatism his refuge. In this life, he had many fateful encounters, and there were no more excuses for having a different starting point. Having lost his refuge, he had no choice but to move forward, and only now was he beginning to put effort into something. Even so, he stated that he would be able to endure until the end because he liked the word effort very much. Mercy's face lit up as she noticed the young man's determination. She turned around, asking if she should speak to herself for a moment. She said that there was no such thing as coincidence in Area. There was a reason for everything. Area summoned travelers from other worlds and dimensions while granting benefits in the form of abilities. Even so, the reason behind it was still unknown. The protagonist realized that Mercy wasn't talking to herself but to him. That meant she was saying something that couldn't be told to him directly. The girl fell silent for a while. If the protagonist had returned, it meant something was about to happen that required his return. Therefore, he would need to be prepared to be worthy of the reason for his regression. In the end, she concluded her thought with a smile on her face. Even so, her gaze revealed a certain worry. With one hand, she declared that this was her territory, and asked for someone to leave unless they wanted to be destroyed. A fragment began to be destroyed, and holes began to appear through cracks. Not understanding, the protagonist remained standing in place. Mercy asked him to return at that very moment. He had to finish his training since there was no time to waste. Before he could say anything, she sent him away. She wasn't sure if Lee Sung-min would be able to stop everything that was happening. He needed to understand the final destiny. Days later, the 6th chosen prohibition was smell. The smell from the top of Scarlet's head kept stimulating the warrior's nose. Perhaps he shouldn't have chosen the sense of smell. A woman appeared beside him with a mysterious air. The stricter the prohibition, the greater the power gained, and despite the nausea and occasional vomiting, he was fine. Bak Sogo now had the prohibitions of taste and hearing, and the pain of having her senses scattered everywhere. Compared to everything the woman had endured before, this was an even more terrible experience for her. The prohibition of senses was worse than she had imagined. The boy paid attention as she said she had something to say. Decidedly, she said she would be leaving that mountain very soon. Without reacting, the two exchanged curious glances. In truth, Baksogo didn't need to go through so much suffering, as she was well-ranked among the geniuses. Having been on the mountain for 2 years, she had likely achieved her goals. The protagonist asked if she was really going to leave, and the woman confirmed it. As for him, he would stay a while longer. With sadness in her eyes, she understood the two would part. Even so, she said she was sure they would meet again. Attentively, Baksogo watched the protagonist who had shared the mountain with her for so long. The little boy from before had become a stronger person. Despite that, if she left, he might die as he would continue taking on prohibitions while pushing himself. The woman thought she should stay a bit longer to finish teaching shadowless soul flight. Lee Sungmin said he would be fine without her. Thanks to Baksogo, he had endured pain for a long time and could now bear his own burden. Thanking Nume, he said that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't be alive in that moment. Realizing her friend's gratitude, her face filled with joy and a gentle smile. Getting closer, she hugged him to show her affection. Surprised by the gesture, the protagonist felt a bit awkward. Letting go of his tough side, his expression softened, and gladly, he accepted the sincere hug. The forest was quiet, with the wind moving the trees. Stepping back a little from the boy, Baksogo said that he was the toughest person she had ever met. Getting to know the protagonist better, she realized he wasn't as desperate as the others. Disagreeing with that, he said he fell into despair again and again, always returning. Impressed, she said he was an incredible person, since she had given up facing the flames after meeting him. Finally, while looking closely at him, she sincerely asked that Sungmin not die. Returning the request, the protagonist said he would never die. Besides Baksogo, Dokbijun and Scarlet also left the mountain. It had been a long time since he had felt the feeling of loneliness. Remembering his cautious side from the early days of his past life, he didn't trust anyone. But now he was sure that humans couldn't live alone. Without them, he wouldn't be alive now. Standing still, he attentively watched a light in the sky. Something had changed in his heart, and an invisible wall had crumbled. At that moment, there was no smell, no weight, and no noise. The feeling of freedom was fleeting, but it felt like it would last forever, and the usual scenery looked different. Just as the protagonist had changed, the world had changed too. The arrival of summer brought the song of cicadas. 7 years later, Baksogo would meet Wiji Hoyan in the dungeon and be killed by her. To repay Baksogo's kindness, he would prevent that from happening. With a kick, he struck the insect directly. Even so, the cicada managed to escape. Cicada larvae spent 10 years buried in the ground before becoming cicadas, so he had 7 years to prevent the disaster. In 7 years, he might be very strong or not. Despite that, he was determined to make sure it didn't happen. Even though the level of his martial arts had increased day by day, it still wasn't enough. He wanted more and increased the intensity every day, even stopping sleeping. The secret to being able to move even without seeing isn't anything special. The protagonist had to sharpen his other senses and remember the surrounding terrain to endure the prohibition of sight. The world had become dark, and the only sense Lee Sungmin could still rely on was touch. After a week, he was able to move little by little, and the only thing he could hear in the dark world were noises. At some point, the noises began to sound like the singing of cicadas. With the sound of the cicada's song, he didn't notice time passing and just kept swinging his spear. His body began to use martial arts automatically, and he started to think more. Being a larva, he wished to become a cicada. After singing while on the ground for a short period of time, they desired to become cicadas. However, that wasn't enough for the protagonist, who wanted more and more. Confused, he didn't know what he wanted to become or the reason for his regression. The season changed, and the temperature of the wind felt different on his skin. Yet his daily life hadn't changed, and he simply spun his spear around. As the season passed, he grew more accustomed to the dark world. In her home, where she was summoned, Lee Sungmin wished to stop the trial. Dazed, he noticed something different in his body. Mercy had returned his senses after so long. Now he could see, and the awful smells and noises had stopped. His body was light, and the chills had vanished. Still, the girl continued to watch him. She was thinking she didn't know how to reward him. Sungmin had spent 3 years on the mountain and had done an amazing job enduring all the prohibitions. Many who got too excited ended up dying or giving up. That's why she was very happy to see someone like him appear occasionally, deserving of a special gift. With all the calm in the world, Mercy asked what he wished for. Excited, he asked to fight like Luspree, but it wasn't quite like that. Reflecting, he began to reason a bit about his desires. His time was running out, so he needed to grow stronger. With enthusiasm, the protagonist said he wished to become much stronger, even if he wasn't certain about it. He questioned whether Mercy would be able to give him what he needed. Meanwhile, the girl thought carefully, and replied that he needed more time. He was shocked to realize that she could give him the time he needed. Placing a mark on his body, she asked him to show it to Danir, who would be waiting for him in Dremor. Danir was the god of time and would test him. As a friendly tip, she warned him to stay sharp since Danir's trials were much harder than hers. In the end, everything would depend on the protagonist, who would face a very dangerous fate. With a smile on his face, he replied that he liked everything just the way it was. Having decided everything, they could now proceed so he could receive the reward for enduring 3 years on the mountain. Happily, he said that Mercy was a very generous goddess. bringing his reward, she placed a man in a suit and tie in front of him. That was Neville, a negotiator from Regressed, and he was delighted to meet the protagonist. He asked Mercy if that man was her recommendation as a new member. Even so, the man said he wasn't sure if the boy was qualified to join the guild. The goddess asked Neville to take a closer look. He apologized upon realizing that the boy was extremely qualified. The man had merely observed the level of his martial arts. At Summon's age, his level of martial arts would be respected wherever he went. The two began talking about the great guild Regressed, a guild specialized in brokering deals, requests, auctions, and information. They could get whatever their clients wanted. Curious, the warrior asked if they sold elixirs and martial arts manuals, and Neville confirmed. The guild had the great healing elixir of Shilin and the cherry blossom sword technique from Manhwa's league. Regressed specialized in that type of negotiation, selling other varieties of rare items. Mercy wasn't a member, but she could buy some goods from time to time. A brokerage guild the god as a client was quite strange. Extending his hand with confidence, Neville asked if he would join the guild. Having nothing to lose, the warrior accepted the proposal. Handing him a paper, he asked him to sign at the bottom. Now he was officially a member of Regressed. Neville snapped his fingers and gave him a house gift. The protagonist's appearance changed completely, making him more presentable, with new clothes and a more modern haircut. Neville took his leave and told the young man to consult him if he had any questions. Mercy asked if he liked the gift, and Summon said he was satisfied. Becoming a member of Regressed was a great achievement, so he should be happy. The protagonist stated that his first destination would be Behenger. However, the goddess warned him about his objectives. She told him not to forget what she said when she was talking to herself. As he walked, the young man remembered the words that said there was a reason for the regression. The young man was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the approach of some fierce animals. Even with monsters in front of him, he didn't show despair. He was interested in understanding what wasn't a coincidence. While fighting the enemies, he wanted to know who had planned those events. Charging with his weapon, he decided to push those thoughts aside for now. After training for 3 years in the mountains, he had become a peak martial artist. Even if his body was only 18 years old, being at the peak of martial arts at that age was impressive. People might think he was a genius, but he knew he only achieved those feats by receiving blessings and pushing through obstacles. His goal was to become stronger and stronger using his destined encounters. After defeating his opponents, he walked away, determined to reach Behenger. With a smile on his face, he decided he would become a mercenary. The magical armor, Devnark, was found in the Black Mage's dungeon near Behenger. A rank C mercenary found it by chance. The Devnark armor's ability is fantastic. Rank C mercenaries between the 2nd and 3rd category could become peak martial artists in an instant. If a peak martial artist got that armor, they might even reach the supreme peak as a result. Even though the protagonist could still do more on the mountain, he couldn't miss that opportunity. In a year and a half, the Black Mage's dungeon would be cleared, and until then, in Behenger, he needed to establish himself as a mercenary. At the mercenary guild in Behenger, the boy made his request. In front of him, the bartender didn't understand why the boy was telling that story. To become a mercenary, he had to go upstairs and speak to the receptionist. A customer who was eating laughed at the boy who wanted to become a mercenary. Not understanding anything, the fork was only in his hands. Suddenly, the boy was holding the object while the customer looked for his fork. By showing his skills, the bartender understood he was a peak martial artist. Apologizing for his manners, he asked someone to take a seat. Around them, the curious began to gather. Meanwhile, the two characters sat down. The bartender introduced himself as Mage Baron and head of the Behenger branch of the Mercenary Guild. The protagonist wasn't impressed when he explained that he worked as a bartender on the first floor as a hobby. In his past life, the first place he worked as a mercenary was in Behenger. Looking at the documents, he said a peak martial artist usually received the rank as mercenary position. However, Baron knew he was talking to a young, inexperienced boy who had only trained in the mountains. They needed a warrior, so it would be necessary to test the boy's skills. The bartender decided to assign a suitable mission for the test, which would be accompanied by another rank as mercenary. If you were able to fulfill the request, you would receive the title of rank as mercenary. The next day, the mission had already begun. The mercenary realized that his companion was very annoying as he didn't talk much. The man thought he was dealing with the funny guy for stealing that fool's fork at the guild, but he realized he was wrong. Hearing his words, the boy showed no reaction. Even so, his companion still admitted that he would be popular. The name of that man was Lude, an S-rank mercenary of the guild, and even though he had no contact with him in his previous life, he knew his name. He was the designated teammate to complete this request and was likely monitoring the protagonist's actions. Curious, Lude asked if the young man had ever fought an ogre. With a serious expression on his face, he replied that he had not. Ogres were among the most powerful monsters in Iria, possessing some magical resistance and skin as tough as steel. The mission was to subdue an ogre seen in the forest near the village. While walking, the mercenary claimed that 2 S ranks would be more than enough to kill an ogre. Even so, there was something strange about that forest. It seemed too small for an ogre. Confused, the protagonist asked where the man was going with those conclusions. He explained that an ogre is at least 3 meters tall and the largest can reach 5 meters. so it would need a lot of food. For him, it would be very difficult for an ogre to fill its stomach in a forest that size. At that moment, the young man asked Lude to wait a moment. Nervous, the man wanted to understand what the boy was observing. On the ground, a deer had been completely torn into 1,000 pieces. That kind of destruction could have been caused by an ogre. However, there were no traces that an ogre had eaten the animal. Not smelling anything, Lude stated that the situation was very strange. The two grew nervous upon hearing some unusual noises. Quickly, something approached the two of them. The warriors grabbed their defensive gear. Prepared for the attack, they looked at each other. Furious, the two ran forward with their weapons drawn. A massive creature could be seen destroying everything around it. Frozen, they were left with no reaction, not knowing how to proceed. Desperate, Lude declared that it was totally different from what he had heard. Unable to handle it, he realized that the best thing to do was to run. The monster had enormous claws, along with a muscular and extremely strong body. It was a chimera ogre, which had undergone modifications. A chimera is a magical creature created with the goal of becoming the final species. The limitations that living beings have can be overcome artificially by combining with other species. So even a chimera based on a rank F goblin would have a difficulty level starting at rank B. Because its risk couldn't be measured, however, with the base being an ogre, the story was different. Not even its S-rank mercenaries would be able to handle it. Sweet and cold, the protagonist showed a bit of nervousness. Meanwhile, the giant creature continued destroying trees. Debris flew through the surroundings, but someone decided he couldn't run. Suddenly, the ogre charged toward him. The punch was already very close to his face. The mercenary Lu continued his escape, warning the young man of the imminent danger. Seeing that giant hand coming his way, the protagonist became fully alert. Determined, he jumped and dodged the monster's strike. He used the shadowless soul flight technique combined with untraceable steps. Realizing the boy's courage, Lude watched everything from behind a tree. Impressed, even he couldn't understand how he had moved so fast. He knew that place wasn't Mercy's mountain, and the weight prohibition that slowed him down no longer existed. In that case, he would be able to defeat the monster with ease. His second stance was again the shadowless soul flight, combined with shadow dance. As he climbed the monster's body, his movements were noticed. Getting closer, he used the supreme spear of the 9 heavens. Upon striking the creature, he unleashed the soul-chasing killing blow. Lee Sungmin realized the difficulty he was facing as he noticed the ogre's skin seemed impenetrable. Even with his attack, striking it was very difficult. The attack with the key sword hadn't even left a scratch. Realizing that the reward for capturing that giant ogre would be the same as for capturing a regular one, Lu knew it wasn't worth it. Even so, he knew it was too late to flee and decided to join the protagonist. However, he remained in place after receiving a message telling him he didn't have to do it. Noticing it was a sound message, he stayed where he was. The boy was aware of the size of his opponent, but he didn't want the mercenary to get close. With the sound transmission, he remembered that the boy had never fought an ogre before. However, the protagonist was fully aware of what he was facing, despite not understanding why the sword hadn't caused any injuries. Lee Sungmin knew that he would be able to defeat that chimera. With his weapon in hand, he used the supreme spear technique of the 9 heavens combined with a lightning-splitting attack. At that moment, the creature took the full impact of the blow. Upon pulling the sword out, the ogre remained imposing. Lu grew even more desperate upon realizing that nothing had managed to hurt it. Nervous, he knew that nothing he did would help. But Sungmin didn't give up and still held his weapon. The monster's gaze revealed a certain impatience. Once again, he brought his weapon closer. With a leap, he ended up above the creature. His goal was to strike its eyes, which didn't seem as tough as its skin. The creature felt the impact of the sword when one of its eyes was struck with extreme precision. After distracting it with a red thread, he attacked the ogre's weakest part. Even though he was young, he could fight skillfully. The creature pulled out the object that was causing it pain. Realizing that part of the spear had pierced his enemy, he decided to continue the fight. However, something strange began to happen. Suddenly, the injured eye of that creature returned to normal, completely reconstructed. At that moment, he realized his enemy had the ability to regenerate. That chimera possessed the regenerative abilities of a troll, being a chimera made of trolls. The possibility of victory grew more distant. Thoughtful, Sungmin wanted to find a way to defeat his opponent, but the chimera was already preparing its next attack. Desperate, Lude shouted at his friend, but the warrior continued to hold his ground. Remembering Bak Sogo, he knew there were still things he had to do. Thus, he couldn't die in a place like that. The 3 basic things needed to use a spear were something he trained every day until he could materialize them. As the creature approached, he remembered Wiji Hoyan and all the intense training. Pointing his spear toward the enemy's hands, he realized now was the perfect time to reap the rewards. He would need strength to spin and deflect the opponent's attack. Without wasting time, he did what had to be done. The chimera still appeared imposing without a single scratch. Running, he charged toward his enemy. With his weapon raised, he recognized the best place to aim. He would need control to spin the spear, sailing around the enemy's attack. With a touch, he got close to those massive claws. Now he had the necessary control to do what needed to be done. Meanwhile, the mercenary Lude watched all his movements with intense focus. With a precise strike, the boy confused the creature. Gripping his weapon with all his strength, he decided to use slashing attacks. While his enemy struggled to regain balance, Lee Sungmin drove his spear into the chimera's leg to stab it. At that moment, he realized he had been hit. Feeling the blow, the chimera let out a scream of pain through its stitched mouth. As expected, the creature's joints were quite weak. When it tried to lunge forward to grab him, the boy was already prepared for the next attack. Confused, the creature decided to try hitting him with precision. Showing all its strength, it attempted to crush him with one of its hands, but he dodged the blow. Now he wondered how long it would take for a broken joint to regenerate. However, there was no time to waste and he struck again. Due to the impact, his spear broke in two. Even so, he managed to hit his opponent, who dropped to one knee. With the spear embedded in its body, it wouldn't be able to regenerate. Realizing his strike had been accurate, Lee Sungmin revealed a smile on his face. With the weapon still in hand, he managed to hit the creature's arm, preventing it from being able to move its legs and right arm. Now the chimera rested one of its hands on the ground as it felt the pain from the impact. Determined, the young man needed just one more strike. He activated the supreme spear of the nine heavens, Sungmin style, along with a lightning-splitting strike. With extreme precision, the chimera was hit. Totally wounded, it could no longer stand, but it still had one arm left. With its massive claws, it tried to strike the protagonist. However, the chimera was too slow and couldn't reach him. Feeling no weight at all, he realized how fast he had become after leaving the mountain. The hero could hear the chirping of the cicadas, the same symphony from Mount Mercy. Getting closer to his enemy, he realized he didn't want to become a cicada, that on the mountain, he was a larva. He knew he hadn't trained for so long just to become a coconut candy or something like that. Despite all this, the protagonist still didn't know what he wanted to become. At that moment, he managed to strike the chimera's eyes, causing it to fall to the ground. With his weapon in hand, he realized he didn't want to have regrets after having experienced all of that in his past life. He would keep moving forward as he prepared for his final destiny. The mercenary Lude was completely stunned by the scene he had witnessed. With extreme rage, the boy drove his weapon into his opponent. While watching, he was shocked by the strength of that young man and asked what he was. The boy's expression of exhaustion showed all his effort. Looking at his calloused and injured hands, not even the boy himself could answer the question of what he was. Even so, one thing was very clear to him, that he was definitely not a larva. The mercenary Lu didn't understand his words and thought he was a very interesting young man. Meanwhile, a cicada could be seen on the ground. The warrior showed a gentle smile on his face, realizing that the cicada's song had stopped. Confused, the bartender didn't understand anything. While observing the giant chimera, the mercenary Lude explained everything that had happened. Defeating a chimera ogre was an SS rank achievement, but there were no precedents to grant that rank right away. Even so, the warrior was satisfied with the S rank. The subjugation reward for the chimera ogre was 27 million urs, along with an S rank insignia. The chimera ogre's body was delivered to the mercenary guild for investigation, providing a reward of 20 million. Handing over the reward to his companion, Lude said everything should go to the warrior, who received a total of 47 million urs. Walking through the streets, he felt victorious. To him, that was a huge amount. In his past life, he had risked everything to complete missions, but the most he had ever received was 1 million urs. Therefore, he didn't know what to do with so much money in his hands, until a thought came to his mind. Looking at his weapon, he had a brilliant idea. In an establishment, the conversation continued. The bartender was curious to hear the details of the mission. Lude said the boy was excellent, but the man would have to see for himself. With his staff, he touched his head. Suddenly, he saw everything that had happened inside the forest during the time they were away. His expression showed a mix of surprise and admiration. The mercenary Lude stated that the young man deserved to receive the SS rank. Decided, the man realized he should suggest it, since he couldn't make the decision alone. Noticing that the boy had reached the commercial peak even without a class, he was sure Zeon would be interested. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood in a slightly dark place. His voice called for Neville. Suddenly, the man appeared in front of him. After saying it was a pleasure to see Sungmin, he asked why he had been called. The hero had never been truly obsessed with weapons, always looking for something he could stab or strike with. But while dealing with the ogre, he felt the fight would have been easier if he had a better weapon. He wished to never face a situation again where weapons would be his greatest regret. That's why he needed a good weapon. Neville asked what his preferences were and how much he was planning to spend. Offering 47 million urs, he said he wanted to craft a weapon, even if it took a bit longer. However, the amount offered wasn't enough. All the blacksmiths hired by Erebrisa were first class and, as a result, very expensive. Neville suggested the boy offer his soul as collateral, even if the interest was high. Lee Sungmin wasn't interested in that proposal and asked if there wasn't another way. Given the conditions, the man realized he could introduce someone who might help him find a weapon. When the warrior accepted the offer, he pointed his finger upward. A beam of dark light could be seen coming from his index finger. Suddenly, something appeared in front of the warrior. As the man hit, he said he would leave the two of them to talk in that space. Without understanding what had just happened, he began to analyze that agent's ability to tear space. On the other side, a voice realized the young man was just a child. Even without being sure how many times they would meet, Sulgerus introduced himself to him. He asked the boy not to space out and to enter the rift. Looking more closely, he realized it was a dark elf. Entering his space, he revealed his name and said he wanted to order a spear. Handing over his weapon, He said he wanted something similar. Looking more closely, the elf noticed it was a spear with a central playing style, and asked if the warrior could show what kind of techniques he used. Confused, he didn't understand the point of that, since for martial artists, showing techniques to others was a taboo. Stating that she would have to see what kind of techniques he used in order to create a spear accordingly, the elf affirmed it was necessary. Depending on his style, the details could vary drastically. Losing her patience, she realized she was talking just a kid. The elf was 400 years old and loved hammering, which is why she had been a blacksmith for over 350 years, even though she didn't have a natural talent for forging. The protagonist seemed confused by the situation. Despite everything, she stated that she was confident her skills were not inferior to those of the dwarves. Hearing those words, the warrior remembered a bit of his own past, and he thought the two of them were similar characters. After her outburst, she didn't understand why she was saying all that to a child she had just met, so she asked him to look for the dwarves and request a weapon from them. However, Lee Summon was determined to show his martial style. After being convinced so quickly, she found it strange that he hadn't left. The boy said he was convinced upon hearing that her 350 years of experience were real. Face to face, the elf was still at a loss for words. Laughing, she realized the boy was too naive for trusting others so easily. Even so, he didn't feel intimidated. Turning her back, the elf realized he was great with words. Anxious, she suddenly changed her expression, while the boy waited patiently for her. Although she was the calculating type, she decided she would create something better than he could afford with the money he had just because she liked him. With a smile on her face, she realized he might become a regular customer. The weapon would take a few months to be completed, so the protagonist just needed to relax and wait. Sitting on his bed, he meditated for a while. His battle with the Chimera Ogre had been his first real fight as a supreme master at the martial peak. Now he needed to digest the information. According to Wiji Hoyan, his situational awareness was a kind of talent. It had evolved into a sixth sense ability after his long years training in the mountains. During the battle against the creature, he felt the sense that allowed him to move his body without even realizing it. This was the sixth sense. Even though it was a powerful ally, he knew he couldn't rely on that alone. The experience in the mountains had improved his sense of touch and sixth sense, but there was still an imbalance. If he didn't improve his other senses, the situation could become complicated. His feeling was that something difficult to undo was about to happen. At the mercenary guild, everything was very quiet. Shuffling some bottles, the man asked if the next order would already be made. Curious, Lee Summon wanted to know what happened to the body of the Chimera Ogre. Since it was a chimera, that meant someone had created it. As it was something that needed to be investigated independently, the bartender said he was checking it out with the Mage Guild. No Chimera Ogre had been found in his past life. Either no one accepted the request, or the mercenary guild had been defeated. Judging by the circumstances, it must have been the dungeon's master, who would have been discovered 6 months after the chimera was created. Maybe in his past life he had retrieved the chimera, but now that the boy had killed it, the future could change. At the Behanger Mage Guild, a voice said it was a pleasure to meet the young man. A mage cast a few spells while being observed. He introduced himself as the Dark Mage Kim Jong-yen. At that moment, he was investigating the chimera. Lee Sungmin introduced himself as the person who had killed the creature. Realizing the boy was Korean, he asked if there had been a portal crisis in his world. It was a portal that connects to another dimension and allows monsters to come out of it. Leaving that subject aside, the mage realized the boy came from a different dimension than his own, but was happy to see another Korean. Returning to the main topic, his expression changed. That was not the only reason for his happiness, but he wouldn't reveal his intentions just yet. Seriously, the boy said he would like to see the chimera's body. To obtain the Demonarch armor, he would need more information. The mage decided to share a bit of what he had discovered. The creature was not completely dead, so there was no way to uncover all the details. The dark mage who created the chimera was probably someone with the rank of great mage. Additionally, that thing's mouth had been sewn shut, and it was created with a fierce hunger to test the chimera's performance. Until he heard those words, the image of the corpse split in half came to his mind as a justification. Falling silent, the mage noticed the boy wasn't interested in the topic of synthetic monsters. Standing still, he showed no reaction. He decided to return to the previous topic, in which the man had said he was happy for another reason. With confidence in his voice, Kim Jong-un stated that the protagonist's causality was a mess. A dark mage was capable of opening someone's soul. Giving advice, he approached the warrior, saying that if he were in his shoes, he would have fallen into despair or gone mad. Curious, he asked if the boy was understanding. With a simple phrase, Lee Sungmin said that after death, he would suffer forever. Curious, the mage asked why the character's causality was so distorted. However, he seemed very suspicious of the situation and decided not to reveal anything. To earn the boy's trust, the mage decided to make a mana oath to never speak about it. While he made the preparations, the young man seemed very confused about the situation. Since the mage was willing to go that far, maybe it was a good opportunity. In the end, he revealed he was a regressor who had returned to the past after dying. By violating fundamental rules and accumulating too much karma, his causality had become heavily distorted. Determined, the mage revealed one more thing to the protagonist. Anxious, he waited for his words. The man began by saying he was very peculiar, and that not only was his causality distorted, but he was as well. Without finishing the sentence, the words echoed throughout the place. Lee Summon felt some pain in his ears. The mage realized he couldn't say what he wanted. It would be impossible to tell the boy anything. He seemed extremely confused. If he said anything, he would end up dead. Kim Jong-un's face was covered in blood from the words he had spoken. He knew the boy's life no longer belonged to him. Shocked by the information he had received, the boy didn't know how to react. Apologizing for not being able to say anything, he asked him to come back another time. Without understanding what had happened, Summon was extremely confused. At that moment, he remembered a situation he had lived through with Mercy, who tried to annihilate anyone who invaded her territory. Turning his back, he left the place, but a voice called out to him. Turning to see who it was, he saw a woman. Getting closer, she recognized him from the mountains of Mercy. Despite that, the boy didn't seem to know who the person walking toward him was. Angry for not being recognized, she said her name was Scarlet Lizard. At that moment, he began to think more carefully, since the differences were significant. The two exchanged just a few words. The protagonist asked the woman not to keep nagging him. Furious, she struck him with all of her strength. After taking the punch to the face, he recognized Scarlet. Curious, she wanted to know what he was doing at the Mage Guild. The boy said he just had some business to take care of in that place. Upon mentioning the limited Kim Jong-un, she paid closer attention. All dark mages were a bit scary, but he was extremely bizarre and only someone out of their mind would get involved with him. Finally, the girl asked him to be very careful where he went, and said it was nice to see a familiar face after so long. As she walked away, she asked him to visit her lab on the 3rd floor when he got bored. She also asked him to tell her if anyone messed with her friend. Waving goodbye to his friend, he found himself alone again. He remembered Mercy's words when she was alone, and the sentence Kim Jong-un didn't finish. As a premonition, he felt that those people favored him in such a strange way it felt unnatural. He was sure something was happening, but didn't know exactly what. Many elements had become complicated and made things harder, but he decided to focus on what was happening. A two-headed troll had an S-rank difficulty level, with a reward of 60 million ers. Lute appeared in front of him, greeting him. The two would subjugate the trolls together again, and he wanted to show how useful he could be. The young man said he was looking forward to it. What he had realized in his second life was that people couldn't live alone. Lute was a good friend to have around, and his heart, which had hardened, felt comforted by his presence. They had been traveling together for 3 months, receiving numerous rewards for missions. In the last one, they split 50 million ers between them. To celebrate, they decided to drink a bit at the bar. However, the bartender informed them that someone wanted to see Summon. It was the captain of the mercenary forces, Xian. Summon and Lute exchanged glances upon hearing that information. There was no way someone wouldn't know the famous man. He was the captain of Flare, a force with over 100 mercenaries and one of the 3 SS-rank mercenaries in Behanger. He is a master at the commercial peak who perfected the 100 mystic steps of the Sholen Fist, admired by Summon in his previous life. Even with so many other heroes, he admired him for one reason. Upon meeting the man, he introduced himself as the captain of Flare, Xian. And that reason was because that man was classless. Now that the boy was a master at the martial peak, he knew it. That man would soon become a supreme master of the martial peak. Stating that they were both classless, just like the warrior, he said he knew how cruel the world was to people like them. And even at 18 years old, the boy sitting in front of him had become a master of the martial peak. Getting straight to the point, he asked him to join Flare. He would receive the position of vice captain, answering only to Zan. Knowing it was a sudden offer, he noticed the young man's confusion. Handing him something, he asked him to make his decision after analyzing it carefully. The boy's eyes widened as he realized what it was. Inside the box was a lesser revitalization pill, an elixir created by the Shaolin Temple that boosts internal energy. If he agreed to the conditions, the captain would give that pill to him. Handing him a sheet, he asked him to sign the contract. With no magical effects, it seemed very simple, just obey Zan's orders. If the contract was broken, he would be held accountable in various ways. Furthermore, if the protagonist told him which martial arts he had learned, he would receive a greater revitalization pill. Confused, the protagonist asked if anyone would be willing to accept those terms. With a fearful expression, the man said that anyone who wanted to become a mercenary in Behanger had to accept the conditions. Curious, Lute asked what response his friend gave. The protagonist refused that offer of slavery made to him. His friend realized the moment was bad and advised him to leave for Behanger. Depending on the situation, he could be at risk of death since Xian did suspicious things. But even if the boy followed him, the man would make things difficult for him. In the past, Lute refused an offer when he was rank A and everyone stopped giving him commissions because they belonged to Flare. Thus, he became rank S in another city and then returned. But even so, Xian was already rank SS. While the protagonist thought, Lute drank more and more. He had known that Xian was that kind of person, even after all the admiration he felt. Lute asked that his friend wanted to go to Mikthor with him. A man in the bar informed them that the Dark Mage's dungeon had been discovered. It was probably the dungeon of the Dark Mage who created the Chimera Ogre. Now they were looking for a team to subjugate the dungeon with Flare in command. A voice said it had taken longer than expected. Despite the time, the protagonist said he would need a weapon urgently. Holding the object, she handed it over. The main material used was mithril, and the exterior was composed of black iron, both excellent conductors of mana and ki. Observing the object, the boy felt overwhelmed and hadn't expected something so good. Neville said that Lady Selgerus liked the hero. The agent explained that the materials used to create the weapon were extremely expensive. Although he had provided extra funds for her to make a better weapon, the elf had practically not charged for labor. But Neville understood the reason she had done that. The protagonist had a strange magnetism, making people feel a desire to help him. Noticing the boy's expression, he apologized for saying it as if it were something strange. In the end, he said he would be leaving and asked him to get in touch if he needed anything else. Now the young man found himself alone and quite reflective. He wasn't surprised because he thought what was said was strange, but because the words confirmed his suspicions. The first time he felt something unusual was at Mount Mercy, but at the time he thought it was just luck. However, he began to wonder if there was something within him. And if that was something that made people like him more, then everyone he had met and everything he had experienced could be considered false. While his thoughts soared, Lude approached his friend. He noticed the strange expression on Sunman's face. If his suspicions were true, then even his friendship would be false. Hugging his companion, he asked if he was worried about the dungeon raid. At that moment, he remembered. In the end, his concerns were confirmed when the future changed because he had killed the Chimera Ogre. Thus, the guild began searching for the Dark Mage, and the dungeon was discovered 3 months earlier than in his past life. Furthermore, something else had completely changed. Xian is happy to see the rising star who was joining them on the raid. Upon noticing the boy's presence, he stated that it would be a very easy raid. The mercenary corps of Flair had not participated in the expedition because they were on another mission during his past life. Now he could participate since it was moved forward by 3 months. Xian noticed that Lude was accompanying him. Smiling, he asked the two of them to be very careful. That dungeon was a very dangerous place, and there was no way to know when or how they might die in the end. After receiving the orders, everyone walked in a line. Lude noticed the threat made by the captain when he said he could kill them amidst the chaos of the expedition. For a moment, the hero considered joining the expedition because of the situation, and in the end, he joined due to the terrifying skills involved. It had been 3 months since he returned from the mountain, but he hadn't made any progress since then. To break the status quo, he would need the magical armored Devnarch, which could turn a third-rate warrior into a master. Returning to the previous conversation, Lude stated that Xian wouldn't be able to act rashly with so many people around. The raid had a total of 27 people, including 1 S rank, 4 S ranks, and 12 A ranks who would join the Flair Mercenary Corps. Even the leader of the guild, Baron, wanted to join. With his spiritual sword technique, Lude said he would cut off the head of anyone who tried to pull any tricks. Since there was no reason for Lude to join the raid, he probably came because he was worried about a friend. Lei Sunman was extremely grateful for that, as it meant he was in trouble with Xian too. At that moment, he remembered something extremely crucial. He decided to stop thinking and start acting. The leader announced that the Behanger Mercenary Guild would enter the Black Sea Dungeon. Without knowing what they would find, they only had the certainty that they were the best in Behanger. They should stand firm to be able to handle anything that crossed their path, ready to do their job. With an order, he told everyone to enter the dungeon. The beginning of it all happened quietly, with people walking side by side. At the vanguard was the A-rank mercenary, Jungchul, the master of external arts that made his body as hard as stone. However, despite having lasted a long time, his body was sliced in half like tofu, causing the companions just behind him to stop moving. Unable to do anything, Jungchul was caught off guard by the attack. In the end, his body was split into 2 pieces and his friend only held the upper half. The leader became extremely furious with what had happened. Looking around, he realized that several monsters were approaching and understood it would be a very long night. Upon realizing they were chimeras, the men fell into despair. Zio noticed that everyone was going to have a rough start. The monsters were larger and had extreme alterations in their bodies, which made them stronger. One of the creatures was cut in half by an attack from the captain. The protagonist noticed that he had used the mystic steps and fist technique. From behind, he observed all of his movements. Realizing Xian's strength, he was certain he wasn't strong enough to fight him. Lost in thought, he didn't notice when a chimera came toward him. That dungeon had been empty in his previous life, so there had been nothing there. Therefore, the master of the dungeon might be in that place. Tired and bleeding, the hero realized something was wrong. The fight was relentless and many bodies were scattered across the ground. Xian realized they had suffered many casualties and might not be able to continue the raid that way. Provoking the leader, he claimed his squad was much stronger. Lude noticed that Xian had only protected his own men amidst all that chaos. An hour after entering the dungeon, the raid team had lost 2 A-rank mercenaries. Among the survivors, there remained only a solo A-rank hunter who didn't belong to Flair, Tang Masuk. Lude introduced himself to the frightened girl, saying she no longer needed to worry. His friend returned to Sunman's side after noticing the hunter had become even more scared upon seeing him. Meanwhile, a voice was calling for the guild leader. The hunter reported that the raid team was badly wounded. Hearing the information, the leader prepared to respond. Apologizing, he said it would not be possible to stop at that moment. There should be no major issues in continuing forward, since the main forces, the S-rank and S-rank hunters, were still alive. Noticing the girl's fear, he told her to turn back if she didn't feel comfortable staying. Even so, there would be no one to protect her on the way back. Noticing the bodies on the ground, she became much more nervous. Calculating the possibilities, she decided to continue with them. Slowly, everyone began walking, observing their surroundings. Everything seemed extremely quiet, silent, and they began to think that the appearance of the monsters was a distraction so the dungeon master could escape. Using so many chimeras to buy time would make sense, but even so, they shouldn't let their guard down due to unconfirmed information. One of the men noticed something ahead. It was a large closed door. It didn't seem to be any kind of trap, just a door. Even so, the protagonist was suspicious. Behind that piece of wood, there was a room filled with books. Carrying a candle, the man reported that there was nothing special in the place, it was just a library. The leader decided they should split up to look for more clues, since it was a large area. However, Sungmin had a strange feeling upon entering that place. He knew it was the location where the man had found the magical armor that had changed his life for the better. While Sungmin listened from the corner, the man said that after walking through the cave for hours, he saw a door. When he entered, he saw an enormous library, the same library that he now stood in. Now he would need to figure out which book he had touched while in that place. After searching the shelves a bit more, a door opened in front of him. Revealing a staircase, he realized the magical armored Devnark was hidden down below. Zio noticed that the boy had found the secret passage. Saying that he had done a good job, the boy grew desperate. Turning around, the protagonist said he had found the passage by coincidence. With a strange expression on his face, the captain said he liked people like him. At that moment, Lee Sungmin became increasingly shocked by his reaction. Suddenly, the man punched him in the stomach. The protagonist rolled down the stairs. Zio knew that if he couldn't have the boy on his side, he had to get rid of him as he would be a threat due to his talent. Baron was in another room with the captain's subordinates, so no one would interfere. However, Lud appeared at the top of the staircase, showing he was still there. He had used the spiritual sword technique to get rid of the subordinate guarding the entrance. The man was sure Zeon had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to reveal his true self. Besides, Lud knew he would be the next to die after Sungmin. Suddenly, his friend was thrown down the stairs. Zeon couldn't believe those two thought they could defeat him. The hero knew his chances were slim, especially if the other members of Flare helped. Even so, his gaze showed he wouldn't give up so easily. With urgency, he grabbed his companion and started running. Without understanding anything, he simply said they had to reach the lower level as quickly as possible. The magical armored Devnark, which boosts the user's abilities, would give them a chance at victory. Quickly, the two reached their destination. The protagonist's eyes scanned everything around him. Suddenly, he saw the armor in front of him. While Lud guarded the entrance to the lower level, he walked toward the rare item. Quickly, his friend noticed Zeon approaching rapidly, who delivered a punch to his chest. His hand passed completely through Lud's body. Totally shocked, the protagonist watched the scene. In the end, Zeon pulled his hand out and let the body fall to the ground. Before dying, Lud managed to strike his shoulder. Stunned, the hero was still trying to understand what had happened. He remembered his best moments with his friend, who now lay lifeless at his side. Gathering all his rage, he showed his anger. But Zeon was not concerned with his reaction. Since they were both classless, they knew that strength was everything. Therefore, they couldn't trust anyone, as even scattered trash could betray you. The boy tried to strike his opponent with a kick. Tired of talking, Zeon simply wished for Sungmin's death. After being hit, the boy fell near a pile of rocks. His weapon was good, blocking many of the opponent's blows. While punching him in the face, he demanded that the boy hand over his fighting instrument. Touching the weapon, he realized it was much lighter than it looked. Observing its components, he noted it was made of mithril. Suddenly, he sensed something strange around him. Pieces of the armor began sticking to the protagonist's body. Upon receiving the Devnark armor, he began to recover all his strength. Zeon realized that it was magical armor. Now the protagonist seems stronger than ever. Afraid, Zeon notices a dark energy surrounding his body, unable to tell if it was dangerous within his aura. Sungmin waits for the perfect moment to begin his attack. At that moment, the magical armor was already fully on his body. Standing still, the two stare at each other for a while, until an explosion occurs. Not knowing what that dark energy was, the man doesn't understand why it suddenly disappeared. With a punch, he hits his enemy, asking to fight again. Confused, the protagonist realizes there was no change in his physical or internal energy. Regardless, Zeon declares that the boy had done a good job so far in dodging his attacks. Even so, he would be the next to die. Upon seeing his fallen companion, he realizes the situation is complicated. A hand approaches his body, deciding to finish him off. The mystical creature defends him from the attack. For obtaining the Devnark armor, he would have to pay a huge price. Even so, the contract with Devnark had not been established. When trying to strike the creature, Zeon seemed very weak and powerless. The sixth sense the boy had been sharpening until now screamed at him not to fight that thing. Upon hearing a thunderous noise coming from underground, the men start to run. The leader asks if that was the dark mage. However, the masked one says nothing to him, only showing his fingers. At that moment, the leader realizes it was a lich. Sensing the imminent danger, a man urges everyone to flee quickly. However, the monster is much faster than everyone in the room. With a simple spell, it manages to kill Baron. As they try to leave, they realize the exit is blocked. The creature warns them they were only in that place because it allowed it. It was feeling great that day for having acquired a better offering than the Chimera Ogre. As it approaches the characters, it reflects on its destiny. It declares that the day of satisfaction for those who believed in it was not far off. This was the Lich Preskin. The battle ended quickly, and the Dark Mage killed everyone, including the dozens of rank S mercenaries. Baron, who was in front of a great mage, was cut in half in a single instant, and even Xion was easily defeated. By then, the protagonist wonders how it came to this point. He thought things would be different for him, compared to his past life. That he would no longer be a larva or a cicada because he had become something else. With sad eyes, he watches the body of his friend in front of him. The protagonist realizes he was mistaken and was still just a larva. The creature was extremely terrifying. Meanwhile, the protagonist is chained to a wall. The Lich welcomes him to its workshop and asks the boy not to waste his energy as he won't break the chains easily. Letting out a frightening laugh, it watches him try. The monster makes a strange confession. It says it wishes to become a woman. To it, women are so incredible that they are capable of achieving something extraordinary that many alchemists can accomplish in a lifetime. Because of that, it tried to become a woman in every way, but got lost in magic and offered its soul and flesh to obtain eternity. Eventually, it ended up finding its answer. Even if it couldn't give birth, there was still a way to create life. Hearing those words, the hero seems stunned. To the Lich, that was a perfect day. The companion it once met, whose karma was a mess, had become a monster. If it used someone like the warrior, a person with distorted karma, as an offering, it would probably be closer to achieving its dream. Holding the boy's face, it reveals its intentions. Desperate, the protagonist doesn't know how he could escape that situation. His eyes watch everything happening around him. The Lich decides to offer its offering. At that moment, the boy's breathing becomes erratic. Displaying all its powers, the Lich senses something strange. Not understanding what was happening, it becomes confused. All of that was something extremely impossible to it. Turning its back on the boy, it becomes very reflective. Meanwhile, the boy's breathing grows more and more labored. It realizes its offering had been rejected. Grabbing the boy's neck, it comes closer. Curious, it questions who the boy was and why the Demon King of Fear had rejected him. That soul with distorted karma held great value as an offering. Desperate, the Lich decides to search through his memories to discover who he was. Amidst the confusion in its mind, the creature demands that he show everything. When the boy woke up, the Lich was already gone. Lee Summon was relieved to be alive, and in the next moment he realized he was completely alone in the darkness. But the noises and sounds continued in his head. He remembered everything that had happened before and couldn't relax. He recalled the expression on his friend Lude's face as he fell dead. The sound of the cicada, which had disappeared after he defeated the Chimera, had returned. However, he was soon able to move, not because of his experience in this life, but due to his willpower as a third-class mercenary in his previous life. Moreover, he had made a promise to his friends and could not die. While his eyes bled, he repeated the promise he had made to himself, trying to gain strength. The hero was used to this kind of situation. Regret, shame, and self-pity were things he could only feel after surviving. While standing still, he receives a telepathic communication. Lloyd, the master of the Tower of the Golden Mage, was trying to ask for help. The man was far below where the protagonist was at that moment. Revisiting memories from his past life, he remembers the disappearance of that master. The man states he needed the warrior's help. He was seriously injured, unable to move, and asked the boy to get him out of that place. Curious about the Lich, the boy informs him it had disappeared. However, the boy was still a little suspicious of the man's words, unsure if that was a safe place. Swearing by his mana, he promises the boy would be greatly rewarded if he helped. Meanwhile, the boy continues descending. After some time, he at last arrives at the location where his presence was requested. Claiming to be lucky for managing to contact the hero, Lloyd awaited him anxiously. Those ruins indicated that a great battle had taken place. At that moment, the boy notices something strange. Looking down, he sees Xion dead with a hole in his chest. He asks Lloyd what had happened. Saying he would explain the trivial details later, he asks for the protagonist's help. Without moving from his spot, he asks how he could be useful. The mage informs him that he must get him out of the dungeon. Furthermore, with his index finger, he points to something on his left. Pleading, he orders someone to destroy that thing. Apparently, it was a heart made by Preskin. Because it was a very dangerous item, it had to be destroyed. With his spear, he tries to strike that heart. However, there is a protective barrier surrounding it. As he tries to get closer, that heart transforms into something dangerous. Suddenly, claws try to reach the protagonist, but his sharp spear makes the heart vanish from his sight. Not understanding what happened, the boy is left speechless, until he realizes that the heart ended up inside his own body. He had obtained the black heart within him. Hours before Lee Sungmin obtained the heart, the Lich Preskin stumbled as he was leaving that place. He used a type of magic that distracted people's minds to extract their memories, but the magic somehow ricocheted, and even the Demon King of Fear rejected the boy as an offering. That way, the Lich realized he had used too much mana. Observing the two hearts in front of him, he thinks of a new plan. decided he would use one of the fallen men on the ground to recharge his mana. However, Xian was still alive. While holding the man by the neck, the Lich unleashes all his powers to recharge his mana. After draining the energy of 2 of them, the creature feels better. Looking at the third lying on the ground, it realizes he was pretending to be asleep. Desperate, Xian was sweating cold, trembling because of his cruel fate. He was able to break free from the chain magic, revealing himself to be an extremely strong person. Decided the Lich would dare use him in a much more valuable way, due to the level of his soul. Lloyd asks what Preskin was going to do this time. The mage realizes he was still conducting disgusting and disrespectful research. After 10 years, the mage had found the Lich. Because of his persistence, one mage kept hunting him. Realizing he was weak, he decides to destroy his body and then find his life force core. Xian recognizes Lloyd as the master of the Tower of the Golden Mage, the Archmage. Determined, Xian reveals that he would help in the mission to defeat the Lich. But the best thing for him would be to just watch, as he wasn't strong enough. Desperate, the Lich realizes that it was a very bad day for him, due to the rejected offering and Lloyd's appearance. At that moment, he remembers his 2 hearts. Although incomplete, he had no other choice. At that very moment, he begins to cast a spell. Desperate about what had been created, the mage doesn't understand that mana flow. However, that was the result of his research. With a smile on his face, he reveals it to be the supreme existence. A small explosion occurs underground. Suddenly, a foot can be seen. Desperate, Lloyd doesn't understand what's happening. Finally, the Lich was able to create a woman. Although the physical body and the heart were not ready, he still had another heart. He would just have to use the incomplete product to overcome the crisis and work to perfect the other heart later. Realizing the futile resistance, the master of the Tower of the Golden Mage decides to completely get rid of that thing. Casting a powerful spell, he threatens everyone around him. The Lich asks the girl to take care of that bastard, while he casts yet another of his spells. The girl watches for the best opportunity. His magic is not able to scratch her, not even slightly. Nervous, they realize his spell was completely dissipated and with extreme ease. Happy, the Lich sees that the girl did an excellent job. While calling him daddy, she says she is very hungry. At that moment, her attention turns to Xian. With a single strike, she gets his heart precisely. That was how the captain of the strongest mercenary guild in Behenger, about to become the master at the martial peak, died. Heart ripped out without being able to offer any kind of resistance. What happened next was pure insanity. Realizing the girl's powers, the master panics. Meanwhile, the Lich laughs at the situation he created. That monster would be capable of anything. The battle continued, and the master used all of his magic and all of his mana on the girl, and after being gravely wounded, the 2 fled. That was the full account of what had happened in the cave. Lloyd expresses only gratitude for the boy who saved his life. Furthermore, he was grateful for destroying that heart. Having fainted after calling for help, the master didn't see anything that happened. Despite everything, the boy was confused about that thing inside his body. Lloyd thanked him and promised to reward his heroic act. It was like a blank check given by a great mage. But since he needed nothing, he simply kept that reward. Besides, Lloyd couldn't know about the heart. Preskin was the master of the Black Magic Tower, but another execution order had been placed on him because he acted against the rules. The person who accepted the mission was the master of the Golden Magic Tower, Lloyd. At the end of a 10-year pursuit, there happened to be a chance during a raid. However, in his previous life, he died in the cave. Since the raid was originally going to occur a few months later, that's how he disappeared. Someone who was supposed to be dead was now alive due to the boy's regression. And furthermore, someone who should be alive is now dead. The boy feels extremely guilty for the death of his lewd. He was like a frog in a well, where the hero of his world was Xian. To them, there were many monsters that could be easily killed, and what he thought was the sky was only the exit of a well. There was always someone whose sky was much vaster than his own. Now he wonders what level Wijihoyan had reached. When he was on Mercy Mountain, the protagonist became aware that he was just a worm. Therefore, he would not despair over what he couldn't have, crawling little by little like a worm. As he walks, a voice calls out to him, apparently happy to see him. Kim Jong-un states that most of the raid team died, but the boy returns safely. Noticing his armor, he realizes it was an unparalleled artifact. Curious, he asks to take a closer look. The protagonist allows him to observe as he needed to ask him some things. That armor is a type of forced contract tool that creates a link between the Transcendent, the Demon King, or the Demon God. The armor bypasses the official ways of making an agreement and forces the wearer into a slave contract. Drawing on the board, a mage tries to explain in more detail by showing that a martial artist would have their potential increased. However, after their death, that person's soul would belong to the Demon King. Since nothing had happened to a character after using the armor, in that situation it was quite interesting. The mage explains that there were 2 possibilities. One was that he no longer had the potential to be. The second explanation was that he made a contract with a master even stronger than the master of the demonic armor. The mage's opinion pointed to the second option as the most likely. In his mind, the question that came was why the Demon King of Fear had rejected him. If the contract wasn't active, it would be fine to use the armor that way. With a snap, he removes the armor from the boy's body. By transforming the object into a bracelet, he declares that it could be used that way, returning to its previous form with mana. Continuing the conversation, the protagonist states that he was offered as a sacrifice to the Demon King by the Lich. It was extremely remarkable that the boy was able to maintain his sanity even after facing him. With a smile on his face, he asks if he understood where he was going with that. The boy questions whether his soul was at a higher level than the Demon King of Fear, but he couldn't answer his question. At that moment, everything starts to become extremely clear. Moreover, he mentions that his body absorbed something strange and the mage already knows it is a dark heart. Even so, he states that he didn't feel any different energy inside him. Prescott researched the ultimate form of life and his heart was the product of that desire. Therefore, that bracelet could result in something that is on a different level compared to the demonic armor. Apologizing for not being able to give a good answer, the mage says that if it's a god, maybe they could give a more suitable response. At that moment, he remembers Mershi's words, who told him to go to Drimor in search of Dinir, the King of Time. Perhaps Dinir, the god of time, would be able to answer his questions. Thanking Kim Jong-un for his help, he says goodbye. As a warning, the mage says that he likes him very much and could be sought out anytime. Feeling a certain pressure, the protagonist believes he understood. As he leaves the room, he closes the door. He had discovered many things during that conversation, but now had many other questions. His next step would be to go to Drimor. A voice calls for Lee Sungmin as it runs quickly through the corridors. Kicking him in the neck, Scarlet reminds him of the warning not to get involved with that mage. Rubbing his new injury, the boy doesn't understand why he always got beaten whenever he met her. With an angry expression, Scarlet warns that nothing good would come to him if he got involved with that guy. But he replies that he has a few questions for the mage. Telling him to direct the questions to her instead, she starts by asking what kind of question he has. He begins by asking how old the girl is. Extremely irritated, she immediately changes her expression. That wasn't the kind of question to ask a lady. As they walk, she says he survived the raid alone. Even after everything he had faced, she stated that he was fine. But his expression revealed a deep sadness. He reveals that his next step would be to go to Drimor since he had some pending matters. Upon hearing that, the girl offers to accompany him on his journey. She says that she also had business in Drimor, and since they were both going to the same place, it would be great to have someone to talk to. Noticing his nervous expression, she asks if he doesn't want her company. In truth, the protagonist just didn't know how to respond because he was caught off guard. He didn't dislike the idea since she was a genius with magic that belonged only to her and would soon become the master of the Crimson Magic Tower. To him, it would be a great idea to become friends with someone like that. However, he didn't understand why people were so friendly around him, thinking it might be something inside him. All the connections he had made until that moment were nothing but lies. He thinks that Lude's death might have been in vain. Even so, he had no concrete proof. It was only a suspicion, but Scarlet might be going on this trip for the same reason. Moreover, if something goes wrong and she meets the same fate as his friend, the protagonist would never forgive himself, and that's why he didn't want to travel with her. When he saved Lloyd and gained the Black Heart, he searched Xian's corpse. Someone like him, who distrusted everyone, would definitely keep precious items with him. He had a lesser revitalization pill, a greater revitalization pill, and the secret Shaolin manual of ultimate martial arts. All those items were priceless. Regardless of what the protagonist was worried about, he needed to become stronger first. Decided, he swallows one of the pills. Anxious, he waits for the changes in his body. On top of his bed, he begins to meditate calmly. However, when he stands up, he feels no change at all. Normally, when someone takes an elixir at the level of a lesser revitalization pill, internal energy emerges within the body. Since no major change occurred, he realizes it might be a fake item. At that moment, something begins to shine in his stomach. To sum it up, his internal energy increased exponentially, and the pill was not fake. When taking an elixir, the internal energy that is acquired explodes, and the person must circulate the energy in order for it to become theirs. Without doing anything, the protagonist managed to absorb all the internal energy from the lesser revitalization pill. It wasn't difficult at all, and he made all the internal energy his own. Therefore, what happened might be related to the heart inside his body. At that moment, he turns to a small box. He takes the greater revitalization pill in his hands. He was able to perfectly absorb both the internal energies of the lesser and greater revitalization pills. He was nearly on par with the martial arts master at the supreme peak in terms of internal energy. The only plausible explanation for the absorption of all that energy would be the effect of the dark heart. Without being certain of anything, he realizes he was able to solve the internal energy deficiency he had always struggled with. However, he would need to do something about it. His eyes become more focused as he has an incredible idea. In front of him, Scarlet questions why he's going to Britain instead of Drimor. The protagonist says the trip with her would no longer be possible and apologizes. After obtaining a secret martial arts manual from the Shaolin Temple, he decides to return the item to Brayden. Realizing he was just a kid, Scarlet says there are tons of people selling martial arts in the market. That's why the protagonist states he intends to return it to the Shaolin Temple and receive a reward for it. Since the girl only had business in Dronzer, she couldn't accompany him on his trip. However, her expression completely changes as she claims she also had business in that place. They weren't really business, she just wanted to see the world. She didn't think she fit into cities and preferred training in places like mountains. She confesses that she would settle in a nice place after traveling for a while. Annoyed, she says she'll take a bath to join him on the trip. Some houses are seen while the two talk. Now the two could travel together again. Moving Sungmin's head back and forth, she says the boy was agreeing and giving his word. After receiving blows from the woman, he decides that she would be his travel companion. The departure was scheduled for a week from then, and the boy tried to see it as something positive, since he would have someone to talk to along the way, and it would be less dangerous. A mysterious girl approaches, asking who was in front of her. In the dark night, the two characters stand still, watching attentively. Confused, they don't really understand the situation. The girl starts to transform, saying that after meeting him, she felt very strange. Her hands take the shape of something giant and grotesque. Curious, she asks who that boy was. Some time ago, while walking through the forest, the Lich thought that Lloyd was a truly strong person. He knew the word genius had been invented to describe someone like him. If he hadn't awakened the girl in time, he wouldn't have survived. That child was his greatest creation. Meanwhile, the girl seemed to completely ignore him. He calls to her as he realizes what she's doing. He wasn't able to control the girl properly since she had been awakened in a hurry, and he realized she didn't follow his orders. The only thing he was sure of was the obedience seal, which guaranteed that the girl wouldn't attack. Wiping his face, he said she would need to go to the place where she was awakened to retrieve the Lich's heart. That mission would be crucial for her survival. The girl was supposed to get the heart and return to the same place. Realizing that she understood his orders, he commands her to go in the pointed direction. However, the girl runs in a completely opposite direction. Confused, the Lich doesn't understand where she was going and believes not even she knew. Even though her father had told her to go somewhere else, she felt something strange in that direction. Her heart was beating very fast, and she had no idea what that sensation was until she saw two people in front of her. Sungmin turns around, noticing a frightening presence approaching. Placing one foot in front of the other, the girl appears curious to know who that outsider was. Nervous, the boy feels a strange sensation upon seeing that face. Her hands start to turn into something extremely disturbing. Sungmin notices the desperation in her eyes. Suddenly, the girl begins to expand her own body. Scarlet doesn't understand why her companion was standing in the same spot, not reacting at all. Casting a spell, she fires something in the direction of that girl. The spell hits her tentacles, which were shattered from her hand. However, the protagonist felt pain in his heart and knew he had to recover. Scarlet's expression revealed confusion about that girl. She had never seen anything of that scale before. That might be Preston's Tremira, the one Lloyd had spoken of, and perhaps she wanted to retrieve the heart. That girl killed Xian in an instant, and the great mage Lloyd barely survived after facing the two of them. Determined, he tries to use his bracelet. For his survival and Scarlet's, he would have to manage to use the armor. Suddenly, energy is released and the suit forms on his body. Meanwhile, the girl is already preparing her next attack. With her dark tentacles, she tries to get closer to the protagonist. Wielding his weapon, he notices the strike and turns in the right direction. With a leap, he needs to get closer to that child. In every possible way, he tries to inflict injuries on his enemy. Her attacks were not conventional, and her fists were much stronger than the ogre Tremira's. If he hadn't increased his internal energy with the elixir, the situation would be in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Scarlet asks Sungmin to get out of her way so she can cast a spell. Her body is thrown back with force as she casts a fire spell. The girl had already noticed her movement and tries to escape, but she is hit and feels extreme pain. Scarlet says she felt a great magical resistance coming from the child. Even if she could neutralize most magic, hers was still somewhat special. Standard resistance didn't work because she placed an enchantment to create her secret magic. However, she didn't expect a strike coming in her direction. Quickly, the protagonist places himself in front of her. Burning everything around, he protects her. Thinking for a moment, he reflects on the situation. Remembering Xian, he realizes it might be the mystic fists of 100 steps. Lloyd had said the girl ate Xian's heart. Therefore, she could learn the abilities of everything she consumed. Now he was certain that she was a monster. Feeling the pressure, the protagonist appears dazed. Meanwhile, the girl doesn't stop for even a second. Again, she tries to strike him. He couldn't use control or strength to counter those attacks. As they fought, the girl says she had asked him something. Curious, she wanted to know who he was. While defending himself, the protagonist thought only about escaping that place. Ready to cast a new spell, Scarlet tried to draw the girl's attention. After hitting her in the face, she says she should spend her luck more wisely. Provoking the girl, she says she made her really angry. Upon hearing those words, the child changes her expression completely. Her gaze notices something unusual. Suddenly, hands grab her feet, preventing her from moving. It was the spell cast by the red-haired girl. Meanwhile, the protagonist approaches without the girl noticing. With a strike, he tries to hit her face. At that very moment, the girl frees herself from those hands by cutting off her own legs. Confused, the boy is shocked by what his eyes are seeing. After mutilating her body, the girl begins to fall. However, she quickly transforms her body through new magic. Without them realizing, her legs were already back in place. The two were infuriated by this, realizing the fight would be long. In a short time, she was able to regenerate both her legs. Even the burned parts have been regenerated. For Scarlet, that situation was extremely irritating. The exceptional regeneration ability had a mana limit. After fighting her, they had the advantage of fighting together to deal heavy damage. In that way, her mana would hit the limit, and they could emerge victorious. At that moment, the girl reveals her powers. Seeing the amount of mana, Scarlet asks someone to forget that plan. That was a major problem. Meanwhile, the battle continues. The protagonist tries to defend himself even though he is very tired. Falling to the ground, Scarlet asks if he is okay. Angrily, she says he can't die and leave her alone. At that moment, the boy realized that a change had to be made. He had changed the world around him, having transformed into something else in the mountains. However, that wasn't enough because he dreamed of things he could never reach. A larva should only crawl, and if one step is not enough, tens of thousands must be taken. Therefore, he thought he was incapable of doing it because he was satisfied with just one step. In the mountains, he didn't leave because he wanted to get the maniac's armor, and when he hit a wall, it seemed too high. In the end, he wanted to take an easier path and made the excuse that he would get the demonic armor to leave the mountain. The price he had to pay for that decision was enormous. He lost his loyal companion. Therefore, the protagonist considered himself useless and pathetic, and because of that, he had to fight. Realizing he had chosen to run away, he reflects that he shouldn't have done that. The heavy weight of the spear he hadn't felt in so long, the static noises and the cicadas. He only wanted to be side by side with her. He wanted to change his destiny by all means. In the end, he just didn't want to die. He had a dream too big for a larva, but even so, he didn't want his life to end. All of that was very hard to do. In that case, if he managed to gain possession of something he didn't deserve, he shouldn't have taken just one step. While reflecting on his life, his sword became increasingly powerful. By realizing he wanted more, he managed to strike the enemy with precision. Suddenly, the spear pierces the girl's arm. Protecting his friend, he wouldn't let anything happen to her. Irritated, the girl wants to know who that figure in front of her was. Meanwhile, the spear continues destroying her body. Scarlet listens attentively to her companion's words. With blood all over his face, he says his name is Lee Sungmin. At that moment, an arrow hits the girl. Revealing her name, she says she is Ain. With the spear in hand, he does not lower his guard. After being hit, a bit of blood comes from the girl's mouth and her body is also wounded. Suddenly, she turns and begins to flee. After the intense battle, the warrior is extremely tired. A piece of wood can be seen. When he opens his eyes, Lee Sungmin is lying in a bed. At his side, Scarlet is attentively reading a book. Saying he was lucky not to have died, she says he passed out for about 3 days and they were in a nearby village. She had called a doctor and used a potion on the boy's external wounds. When he says he can move without problems, she is shocked by the brat since he had broken several bones. Apparently, his fractured bones recovered in just 3 days. That could also be an effect of the Black Heart. Confused, Scarlet starts to observe him more intently. She asks if there was something he was hiding. Also, she wants to know who that monster child was since it seemed like he knew something. Asking him not to hide anything, she demands answers. However, the warrior remains silent in his place. After telling everything to Scarlet, the girl understands why he kept meeting that psychopath Jongyun. Her friend had been through hell and obtained a piece of mana containing incredible powers. Even so, she says he's very lucky to have such a strong companion like her, capable of helping him. Noticing his reaction, she says she wants to receive a big thank you. At that moment, the protagonist becomes curious as to why the girl didn't run away. The situation was life or death, but the child was only after Lee Sungmin. Therefore, Scarlet could have fled at any moment, but that character couldn't bear to let him die alone in that place. As she stands up, she says she didn't want to do that at the time. She puts some distance between herself and the boy. While thinking, she asks if he had ever experienced war. Choosing her words carefully, she takes a little time. She says that when she was young before being as hot as she is now, she didn't know when or where, but a war began. The girl says that war was a brutal thing capable of taking away everything most precious, even the village where she grew up. All the precious people that mattered to her had disappeared. Lee Sungmin watches her outburst closely. For her, it was hard to get used to the sense of loss, and she preferred never to get close to anyone. Finally, she says she couldn't have left him alone since everything happened right in front of her. Looking at the hero's expression, she asks if he had ever lost someone. Sitting there, he doesn't say a word. Smiling, she says not to worry about unnecessary things and that her friend wasn't dead. She had survived war and all sorts of trouble up to that moment, having some really good luck. Besides, she didn't even get the chance to use her secret technique to defeat the girl. Scarlet knew the boy would prefer to travel alone out of fear of losing the people around him. Therefore, if he didn't want to lose important people, he should get stronger. As she points at him, she says he should become strong enough to never have to get into a situation like that again. Smiling, the boy says he already knew that. By the end of the conversation, he was feeling much better. Asking to rest a little more, Scarlet leaves, saying they would depart for Britain the next day. He thanks her for the help. He thinks about that situation as his friend walks away. Holding his weapon, he decides that he will become stronger. Suddenly, his memories take him back to the previous night. At that final moment, what came from his spear was a reinforced energy. Therefore, the protagonist didn't need to think about trivial things. As energy bursts from his sword again, he is determined to keep getting stronger. The red-haired girl says that she finally and celebrates that they arrived in the city of Brendan. Excited, she says it's her first time in the central district city and celebrates that they weren't attacked like last time. Without stopping talking, the young woman asks Lee what they're going to do first, and the boy says he hasn't decided yet. Then she suggests they rest a bit and take the opportunity to eat something. Upon arriving in a building, the two are welcomed. Sitting at the table, the duo discusses what they should eat, but the protagonist isn't sure. Thoughtfully, the red-haired girl says she's never eaten anything from the central district before, and that's why she's unsure. Besides that, she says she doesn't know how to deal with the flies in the place. There are two men watching, and Lee notices, asking Scarlet if she noticed too. The boy says that the moment they entered the restaurant, the two men scanned them from head to toe. The girl asks why they are doing that, and Lee says it's probably because of him, leaving the girl confused. Then he explains that when a martial artist reaches the supreme level, they achieve origin reversal and other people can't see the energy they have. While Lee Sungmin achieved one of the requirements to be a supreme martial master, he hasn't fulfilled the others. Scarlet then concludes that the protagonist's inner energy is overflowing, and that's why it attracted those flies. Hearing the conversation, a man questions the word flies he just heard. He says the girl has a sharp tongue and asks if that's what makes her more charming. Irritated, she asks what the hell the man is talking about and what's in his head. Laughing awkwardly, the guy says that, as expected, beautiful flowers have thorns, but the girl tells him to shut up. Scarlet says she's begging him to stop talking and focus on eating, and that every word he says only increases her desire to kill him. Lee says the man got really angry for being confronted. Before they could react, the guy grabs a sword and says he'll give the girl a chance to take back what she said. But she says she won't take it back and asks what he's going to do, calling him an idiot. Furious, the guy jumps toward the duo wielding the sword, and the young woman asks her friend Sungmin to save her. Analyzing the opponent, the protagonist says he seems to be a first-class martial artist. The opponent attacks while the young man tries to figure out exactly how to get out of that situation. Suddenly, another person appears and questions how someone can be so rude in an inn, and also have such poor judgment besides attacking head on an opponent who is much stronger. While he talks, the man who tried to attack falls to the ground and is knocked out. Observing the scene, someone realizes that the knockout happened using a coin. The guy who just arrived apologizes for interfering and introduces himself as Namgon Hwon. Scarlet asks if he's part of the clan that has many strong martial artists. Lee says he had no intention of killing the opponent. Then Hwon says he'd like to join the duo at their table and asks if it's okay. They all look at each other. Confused, someone asks why they're looking at him, and the newcomer asks how old the young man is. He replies that he's 18 years old, surprising Namgon as he's already close to being a peak supreme martial artist. Still surprised, he says the protagonist is incredibly talented, and asks if perhaps he is the little celestial demon Wiji Hoyan, making the young man spit out his coffee. The man keeps talking and says that's the only monster he can think of that could reach that martial arts level at such a young age. Lee asks if the guy knows the little celestial demon, and he replies yes, after all, he's famous. Besides that, there are only 3 martial artists called celestial demons in area: the bloodthirsty Bakwusion, the berserker Bia Wonpei, and the little demon Wiji Hoyan. And he says there's a rumor that the celestial demon is a woman. Then he decides to ask all at once who exactly the protagonist is. He introduces himself as Lee Sungmin, and Namgon says he's never heard of him. Curious, the boy asks what else the guy knows about the little celestial demon, and he says he already told everything, and that if he wants to know more details, he'll have to ask around. Then Hwon asks to fight Sungmin. The proposal surprises the boy, and the guy says he has no bad intentions, and that he just feels competitive when facing a strong martial artist. Lee says that if it's a friendly fight, he accepts, and the answer makes the martial artist happy. However, he makes another proposal and says that just fighting is boring, suggesting they bet something. Thoughtfully, the protagonist asks if he wants to bet something, and the guy says something not too serious, and he suggests that the loser becomes the winner's brother. After accepting the fight, the two men go to a battle center and decide to begin the duel. Sungmin says he doesn't know if he'll be able to meet the expectations of his new friend, but he laughs and says the young man is too humble. Analyzing the opponent, the protagonist notices that the energy around him has completely changed. Then he concludes that his opponent is quite strong and is at least at the level of a peak martial artist, or maybe he is a peak supreme martial artist. Both prepare for the battle between them, and Namgon makes a few movements. Lee notices that there are some strange moves being made, but decides not to be dazzled so as not to lose his rhythm. He performs the shadowless Soul Flight Strike first form, but is surprised as the opponent destroys the illusory movements with great speed. The battle between them continues, and Hwon tries to land another blow, claiming he's enjoying the situation. He uses an energy absorption technique, leaving the boy a bit anxious. To defend himself, the protagonist chooses to use the Spear of the Nine Supreme Heavens first form with a soul-chasing lethal strike. The fact that the opponent moved his sword in the middle of an attack is impressive. Namgon explains that if the attack had been made with a real spear, it would have been much more intense, and that he would be in danger if he were messing around, and that he doesn't intend to call someone younger than him Kyun. Sungmin says that, in the first place, the bet is no longer in his favor, and that he wouldn't lose anything by losing the bet. While Scarlet watches, the opponent asks if the young man is still going to give it his all, since martial artists don't like to lose. Both decide to continue with the attacks and the fight. After launching a powerful blow, Lee says that the opponent is trapped, but he manages to break free, and the protagonist says he doesn't want to admit, but the opponent's energy control is better than his, so he decides to use his internal energy to push the opponent away. The power of the Spear of the Nine Supreme Heavens is unleashed. Many movement images begin to appear to deceive the opponent's eyes. Lee knows that even though many images appear, there is only one real one, and he needs to find and face it. However, Namboon overpowers the boy and declares that he won the duel. With a sword to his neck, Subman says that he lost, but he knows he still has a long journey ahead. Laughing, Huon says the boy was very skilled in their fight, and that the difference in skill between them isn't that big, and that the boy's spear technique is incredible, but that the advanced techniques weren't very effective, and that he believes the young man hasn't had many chances to use them against martial masters. He goes on to say that the boy still isn't used to controlling internal energy, and that because of this he's taking more damage from smaller attacks. In conclusion, the guy says he's saying this from experience, and that the young man can quickly fix these problems by fighting more. Namgoong says that now that they're brothers, he hopes the young man can go with him to a place, the Shaolin Temple. Surprised, Lee says he was actually heading there. Near the location, Scarlet hears the conversation between the two, says they're noisy, and asks if the fight is over. Seeing the two laughing, she asks what's wrong with them and says she doesn't like it. Far from there, an old man sitting and meditating says he can feel it and that something is coming. He claims it's the omnipotent god of chaos approaching. They say that's why Namboong Huon is going to visit the Shaolin Temple. Lee says he always visits the temple at this time of year to see Master Abbot Bolian. His friend says he also does that together with the other generations of the other 3 great clans, and that he does it because of a promise from a long time ago, but that he'll explain it another time. Thus, the trio went together to the Shaolin Temple. They talk about the 4 great clans, Namgon, Jaegal, Moyan, and Tang, and that the heirs are more or less the same age, while the patriarchs of those clans already tried to unify all of them into one great clan. However, when they finally tried to make it work, they began to question who should be the leader. Due to arguments, they decided to leave the decision for the next generation, and the Shaolin Abbot, Master Bolian, would be the judge, also being responsible for deciding who would be the leader among the heirs chosen by each clan. Arriving at the place, Huon greets those at the temple and says he was late because he had to take care of some things first. Observing, Lee realizes that everyone there is famous and well-known from his past life. Meanwhile, Tang asks if the protagonist was the reason for Namboong's delay. He scolds the girl and asks who she thinks she is to call him that guy. Then he introduces Lee as his little brother and a martial master close to reaching the supreme martial peak before the age of 20. The girl asks how such a skilled martial artist is the guy's brother. But then she understands that this is a plan to raise his status among the rising stars of each clan. Then Lee realizes what happened and asks if that's why he wanted brother. The man agrees. Besides, for the protagonist to say he's the guy's brother is no problem at all. Jeagle interrupts and asks how long the two are going to keep stalling. Turning to the group, Yuan says he's going to visit Master Bolian and that his friend can rest a bit in the meantime. As they leave the place, Scarlet says she wishes she were the friend, since even after losing the fight, he still came out on top. A man approaches, calls the two over, and says he prepared meals for them, and both hope the temple food is still delicious. Sitting and eating, Scarlet says there's no meat in the food, and the protagonist says of course, after all, they don't eat that here. Immersed in his thoughts, Lee thinks that all he needs to do is get the secret scroll and return it to Dremor. He is interrupted by a man who enters the room. It receives the information that the abbot would like to speak with him. Following the man, the protagonist is confused about what is happening and doesn't understand why the master wants to speak with him. Someone thinks that he doesn't know much about Master Bolian even in his past life, but he knows the nickname very well, and it's Eccentric Buddha. Upon arriving at the place, the man asks if the boy is adored by the omnipotent god of chaos. Lee doesn't understand and asks if that's Master Bolian and what he means by the omnipotent god of chaos, and asks the man to explain better what that means. But the old man says it's impossible because if he explained, he would either die or be purged from the physical plane and become a god in the heavens. Driven by curiosity, Salman asks where he needs to go to get the answer he seeks. Something happens and the young man doesn't understand what it is. Then, he is ordered to go north, within 5 years, to the place where the eternal snow never melts, and there you will find someone extremely important. After the old man returns to normal, Lee asks what that was that he did, but the master dodges the question. He says it wasn't him who did it, but the spirit that resides in his body. Someone asks if he's a servant of Buddha but carries a spirit within him, and the old man laughs, saying that's exactly why they call him the eccentric Buddha. But he says he doesn't know why the spirit spoke to the boy through his body, only that some questions were answered. Continuing the conversation, the man asks if the young man came to return a secret scroll, and he agrees. Laughing, the old man says the boy must have thought he'd get something in return, and that's why he came to return it. and then he gives him a superior circulation elixir. Lee is ecstatic with the gift and can't believe it. The Buddha says the boy is making a fuss and that he's just like how Wijihoyan described him. Sunbin asks what name the old man just said, but he says the protagonist heard it clearly. Then the boy asks if Wiji was around there. But again the man avoids the question, while the boy begs him to tell what he knows. Noticing the young man's desperation, the Buddha begins to speak. An image appears behind Lee. It is the future Shaolin Jai Hack, and they are ordered to battle, and then the old man will say what he knows. The protagonist is shown fallen on the ground and says he lost. He remembers people saying that even after training for years, he still keeps losing, in a pathetic state. The young man says he can't say anything, not even to the voices in his head. Lee thinks that he lost a Nambong, but at least he managed to have a duel. While against Jahak, it was as if he were being made a fool of, and he had never even heard the man's name in his past life. The Buddha asks Hak what he thought of the opponent, and the man replies that the boy still has much to learn, concluding that the young man still needs more experience even though he has good spear techniques, adding that he also doesn't seem to know how to control his internal energy properly, and because of that, he can't manage large amounts of internal energy. Touching the boy, the Buddha says that's why his internal energy will be unbalanced. Annoyed, the boy asks what the old man is doing, and he says the brat should just let him do it already. With a piece of wood tied to his foot, the old man orders the protagonist to walk, but he can't. Then the Buddha says it's hard to move like that, and that's the current state of the boy's body. They explain the difference between intellect, energy, and physique, and that even if the boy has an advanced intellect, the energy is trapped in his body. Thoughtfully, Lee believes that his energy increased because he used elixirs, and his intellect as well because he learned to transfer energy to the weapon. The Buddha continues his lesson to the boy using the stick tied to his leg as a way to teach him something. Eager to learn, Sunman asks how he can fix this imbalance between intellect and energy in his body, and understands that he'll need to undergo a body restructuring, and that this will probably be the easiest way. Decided, the old man says that Jahak will help the protagonist with martial arts. Thinking, the Buddha says that if he left the boy like that, he would suffer, and that goes against Buddhist practices. And that besides that, a child he likes asked him to help when he arrived there, referring to Wijihoyan. Later, Sunbin and Hak are walking, and the golden man asks what the boy was thinking about after the fight. The protagonist says he believes he's become a little stronger, and that he managed to reach the martial peak after years of training and hard work, and also recently learned to do something incredible. But even so, he lost to him and to Nambong Hiwan. Hak asks if the newcomer isn't being a bit too hasty, and says it's rare for people to reach that level at 18 years old. In his opinion, he says the young man just had bad luck having them as opponents, and that he is called the future Shaolin even though he still has a lot to learn. Lee concludes that his starting line compared to Hak's is completely different, but the man continues and says he couldn't defeat the little celestial demon. Surprised, Sunman asks if the new friend has fought her before, and the man says yes, when she came to the temple. Curious, he asks why Wijihoyan came there, and that it sounded like pure arrogance from a 17-year-old girl. However, no one was able to reprimand her, since the girl's presence was so overwhelming that people simply accepted her request. Hak says the result of his duel with Wiji was shocking, and that he literally couldn't do anything, losing in a much worse way than the opponent he had that day. Doubtful, Lee asks how strong Wijihoyan might be now, and the man says he can't say precisely, but he believes she has already surpassed the supreme martial peak. Curious, Hak asks what Sunman's relationship is with her, and the boy says they're just friends, and that his only goal is to reach her level. Then Hak says now he understands the boy's urgency, concluding that what the boy lacks most is experience, but over time he'll be able to fix that. Advising him, the man says that the young one will still face many defeats and despair before he reaches her, but he'll be ready. Lee says he's already used to despair, especially feeling desperate, but even so, it's not easy to get back up. That he thought he was finally catching up to the girl, but he's still far from getting there. And while he was still crawling, Wijihoyan had already flown far ahead. Determined, he begs to be allowed to fight Hak again. Later, the protagonist appears with a swollen face and says he plans to stay a little longer at the Shaolin Temple. Upon meeting Scarlet and Hiwan, the two don't recognize the boy and ask who he is. Then, upon finding out their friend fought Jai Hak, Namgong is stunned. He says that Master Buliang has gone senile, and didn't let him fight the man when he asked. Curious, Sunman says that even though his opponent is strong, he's never heard of him and wants to know more information. Hiwan explains that even though the 4 clans are known throughout Iria, they are still weaker than the 10 great sects. Then he explains about the 3 main rising stars of the orthodox sects, being Chui Gul, Chung Myung, and Jai Hak as the leaders. He also explains that all the sect leaders are focused on training their disciples, and they are the secret weapons that should never leave their sects. Nambong asks if his friend will stay at the temple, and says he wanted to introduce him to his clan. But Lee says he'll get in touch with his brother about it later. Scarlet says that if the boy is going to stay there, then she will also have to say goodbye. Not understanding, the protagonist asks where his friend is going, and she says she doesn't have a destination in mind, she's just going to travel. The young woman says she liked the place, but doesn't know how staying there would help her. Tickling her friend, she asks if he's sad about being separated from his great friend. Then, speaking seriously, she asks why Lee tries so hard since he trains every day and still keeps getting beaten. She asks if the boy will survive without her. Then she puts a bracelet on the boy's arm and says the object is connected to her soul, and that no matter where he is, whenever she wants to see him, the bracelet will send a signal, and that she also gave the item to Bak Sogo. Before leaving, the girl says her friend should train a lot so that next time, he'll be the one to save her. Watching the scene, Namboon wonders why things like that never happen to him. The next day, both Scarlet and Heewon say their goodbyes. But before they leave, Lee calls out to his friend, asking why she's so kind to him. Not understanding much, the young woman gets a bit tired of that topic again. She says that they've already talked about this before, but since her friend is so worried, she'll tell him again. Scarlet says that for some reason the boy caught her attention since they first met, and that she usually doesn't try to get close to people, but she became interested in the young man. However, after traveling with him, she realized the boy is really nice, concluding that she always feels like cheering for him when she sees him working hard. The girl says she likes to tease him and notices that her friend is very sincere, and also very handsome. Laughing a lot, Lee asks if something bitter, leaving her confused about what's going on. But she finishes by asking Sunmin not to live like a weakling, and that he must always walk with his head held high. The young man agrees with her. Later, Lee focuses on his preparation and says he has decided that while at the temple, he won't use the spear or the demonic armor, and that he will leave behind his weak mentality and equipment. He also decides to set aside the superior circulation elixir that Master Bullion gave him. He remembers the Buddha's instructions saying he will find a person of extreme importance in the place where the snow never melts. Thinking, Lee remembers that he and Wiji Hoyan agreed to meet in 6 years. Sungmin says that the important person from the prophecy is definitely Bak Sogo, but knowing he only has 5 years, he wonders how far he'll be able to get by then. Jae-hak approaches and asks if the protagonist abandoned the spear and armor and why. The boy responds that it would be inappropriate to use those tools during training. Hak explains that martial arts are a study about how to use the body, but what really controls it is the heart. He continues, saying that the heart fills your body and becomes the necessary energy. He asks the boy to pay attention to what a Shaolin is like, and to experience it for himself. Lee thinks he still hears the sounds of cicadas, and that this noise is stuck in his ears. But before he leaves, he will try to resolve that issue. While fighting, Hak says the boy's basic fundamentals are impressive, and that it's clear how hard he worked to reach that level. However, the spear style he learned, although advanced, seems a bit sloppy. The boy says it's like that because he ran away, and that no matter how much he trained, he couldn't improve anymore, so he ran away and focused on simpler and easier techniques to learn. Hak says that if someone could become an advanced martial artist using only triple sword techniques, there would be no reason to learn advanced techniques. They continue battling while talking during some moments. Lee says that's why he will never run away again. His friend explains that the path of martial arts is infinite, and the duty is to discover what weakness can still be improved. He says the young man is not a genius, and that true geniuses had already flown while the boy was still crawling. He instructs the boy that he must not despair or let despair take over. Hak says he thought he was flying, but after seeing the little celestial demon, he realized he wasn't even close to flying. Confused, Sunmin asks what he, as an insect on the ground, is supposed to do, and that for now, all he can do is crawl. Reflective, the protagonist thinks that Wiji Hoyan and Bak Sogo weren't very good at teaching, because they could only teach from a genius point of view, concluding that Jae-hak is a better teacher, since from birth, he was taught by countless monks, learning more than 72 different martial arts. While he tries to attack Hak, he gets punched in the mouth, and the man says the boy's senses are confused. Besides that, he's still not used to energy circulation and needs to improve that. After all, the boy's understanding ability is still weak, and for that reason, he needs to work even harder. Lee says that on that day, he realized how insignificant he was, but he didn't run away. He continued training the Supreme Spear of the Nine Heavens as if there were no tomorrow. He also trained his internal energy circulation, but it didn't go well. After all, it was difficult. He worked on his 5 senses and finally managed to balance them. Sungmin says that whenever he felt that way, he trained even more. Time passed, and so did the seasons. He was never able to surpass Jae-hak, not even once. So he decided to observe the Shaolin and learn from him. Watching, the protagonist thinks that the world is immense, and he is tiny, and that he wants to be in the sky, flying, seeing everything from up above in the vast world. Someone approaches, interrupts the young man's thoughts, and asks if he'll be able to get out of the well or not. It's Master Bullion arriving to speak with the young man. He says that Lee is different now, surprising the boy. The Buddha says that with martial arts, the boy could live peacefully inside the well, but asks what his real goal is. Sungmin says he wants to see the world, and the old man says anyone can do that. Lee then says he wants to fly and see the world from above. Bullion says that's quite an ambition, and that he's far too small to talk about that. The protagonist continues, saying he wants to dream, but flying isn't a dream. Questioning him, the master asks what the young man has learned over the past 6 months, and he replies that he has learned how to crawl the right way. After saying that it's a good start, the old man says it's time to learn how to walk. Time passed, and Lee has now been at the temple for over a year. Now the young man is 20 years old and has decided to ask Jae-hak a question. He asks why helping isn't a burden. The protagonist says one of his biggest flaws is being weak, even though he has become stronger through training. Sungmin says that helping him probably doesn't contribute much to Hak's growth as a martial artist. But the man replies that he doesn't understand why the boy thinks that way since the duels between them were very helpful. He continues saying that thanks to those confrontations, he was able to review everything he had already learned, and that there are no limits to what can be learned as he aims for a much higher place in life, asking if the boy doesn't share the same dream. After the answer, it started to dawn on Lee why he had asked such a question. He thought that maybe he was still stuck in his past life. That's why he still doubted people who were kind to him. Despite everything that had happened, he was still afraid to move on to face certain situations. But he still thought that all the kindness others showed him was because of some unknown charm. Upon hearing Hak's question about the dream, the boy became pensive. He said that now his true goal was not to get better at martial arts, nor to be recognized by Wiji Hoyan, but instead to stop running away from himself. Approaching the master, the protagonist asks what more he knows about the blessing mentioned earlier. The old man says that he finally found the courage to ask about that subject. Lee recalls the first time he saw Master Bouillon and asked about the being who was helping him. Then he reflects on whether he had been asking not about the being itself, but about the effects of the blessing. The Buddha says it's been 2 years since the boy arrived at the temple and asks why he's asking about that now. Sungmin says he was afraid to face the truth, that it used to haunt him, but now he doesn't want to run away anymore. Bouillon says he liked that expression on the boy's face, and says that among the many effects of the blessing, there is one that makes others feel more compassion for you, but that this blessing only changes the way others see the boy. The statement confuses him, and then the master explains that basically this blessing only helps with people's first impression of him. If people don't like the boy, they would abandon him. With that, he concludes that all the relationships he's built so far are genuine. Lee thanks him, and the old man says that if he wants, he can remove the effect of the blessing, and from then on, no one will have a good first impression of the boy. That way, he could form honest connections without feeling guilty. Listening carefully, the boy says he accepts that option. Sometime later, Sungmin reunites with Hyewon, and the man asks if he's decided to become a monk. But he makes a little joke, saying that so far he still has hair. Since it's been a long time since they last saw each other, Namgong suggests they get together for a drink, and then throws an object toward his brother, telling him to think fast. The boy manages to catch the object but says it was a mean prank. Hyewon says his friend has gotten stronger over time, and congratulates him for reaching the supreme peak. Then he says that Lady Moyeon married Jaegal Taerium, and had also said she didn't like how arrogant and loud Namgong was. After that, the man began to train like crazy to forget his heartbreak and reach the supreme peak. The man also says that even so, he's still not satisfied and asks how things have been for his friend, asking if he liked training at the temple. Lee says he liked the time he spent there. Analyzing his brother, Namgong says he's changed a lot. Hyewon says he no longer feels that strange sensation he had when he first saw his friend. But thinking about it, ever since they met, he felt something strange in his heart, and even thought he might be homosexual for feeling something for his brother. Their conversation continues normally. Another year passed, and when Lee turned 22, he left the temple. An old man holds an object while asking the protagonist to deliver the letter to the leader of the Manhwa sect in Drumor. Sungmin received a mission and was lucky that his destination was Drumor, since the temple of the temple god was located there. Thoughtful, wonders if the power of prophecy might have been used. In that case, he decides to call for Neville. At that very moment, the agent appears asking what his master needs. The protagonist was looking to buy some information. He wanted to know about the Phantom Sword, Dakbijun, Baksogo, the Lightning. He also wanted information about Wiji Hoyan, a little celestial demon. Regarding Baksogo, she's been doing good deeds and missions to help the needy. Thanks to that, she ended up becoming a bit famous, and it's been a week since she was last in the great city of Rubes. As for the Phantom Sword, Dakbijun, he's been spreading his name through challenges. He's on a journey seeking duels against martial artists from prestigious sects and has even gone to the Manhwa sect. Looking into the crystal ball, the protagonist reflects on what he just heard. Since his destination was also Drumor, he might meet the man on the way. However, there was still the matter of the information on the little celestial demon. Eagerly awaiting Neville's answers, Sungmin puts a smile on his face. Wiji Hoyan has gathered some followers due to her great strength and charisma. In total, there are 20 followers, but all of them are at least at the martial peak or above. So many groups are on alert. For example, the Blood Celestial Demon, Bakmusian, is the governor of the northernmost region. Wiji Hoyan's group is marching north toward his territory, and they are about to face off. Neville says he believes that the Blood Celestial Demon, who has ruled the area for a long time, has a better chance of winning the battle. Despite his certainty, the hero disagrees. For him, the victory will be Wiji's. While sitting, he continues looking at the crystal ball. He thinks it's already been 8 years since he last saw Wiji Hoyan. Embarrassed, he realizes how beautiful she had become. After a while, he realizes that his thoughts were getting weird. He had never met the little celestial demon and the blood celestial demon before returning. Moreover, Wiji Hoyan disguised herself as a man in her past life, but now she was openly walking around as a woman. In this life, even her personality might be different. Worried, he thinks about the battle against the blood celestial demon. His will is to go north and help her right away. However, they could only meet again in 2 years. He remembers the words of the girl who told him to make her his goal. Because of the promise they made, she would always be his goal. Therefore, he needed to continue what he was doing and was certain the girl would resolve the battle and wait for him at the peak. Confident, he needed to keep his promise to become stronger. While walking through the forest, he began to have other kinds of thoughts. The protagonist felt as if he had already broken one of his promises. Meanwhile, Wiji Hoyan touches her body with one of her hands. In the end, she realizes that her breasts hadn't grown as big as she wanted. A voice calls out to her, asking if she's already awake. A man says it would be better for her to rest a bit longer. Turning to him, she asks him not to call her Miss, since she doesn't consider any of them her subordinates. She wouldn't stop them from following her, but they shouldn't expect anything from her. Thus, the two continue walking side by side. The girl notices that everyone is looking at her with intrigued gazes. She hated those looks full of expectations and remembers the people who looked at her when she was the young master of the demonic cult. Missing Sunman, she says she could kill all those damn worms. However, someone asks if she is the little celestial demon. Baekmusion appears in front of her, saying the girl seemed full of energy to fight him. She replies by saying she'd like to know how strong her fellow blood celestial demon is. Placing one of her hands on her chin, she realizes her colleague was very unlucky to be the only one found so easily by her. Noticing the girl's arrogance, Baekmusion wonders if she has enough skill to defeat him. Before the fight begins, she shows unusual curiosity by asking with which hand he held his fork. But it was just a provocation, warning that she would leave that hand intact. In the Manhwa sect, the low vegetation covers some parts of the place. One of the guards asks what the protagonist's purpose was for entering that place. Holding something in his hands, he says he needed to deliver a letter sent by Master Bullion. The guard apologizes for his ignorance and accompanies him to the sect leader's quarters. After completing his mission, the protagonist needed to find the god of time, Dronzer. However, a character calls out asking if he was the boy from the Mercy Mountains. That was Baekmusion, and the protagonist recognized him immediately. Happy to be recognized, he starts talking to the man who says he would never forget the things that happened on that mountain. He explains it was the period in his life when he suffered the most and would remember everything until the day he died. Even so, he doesn't understand how he was recognized so easily, since he was under the vision prohibition at the time. The old man explains he remembered the internal energy the boy exuded. Enjoying the conversation, the two continue face to face, until Baekmusion asks the young man to go resolve his matters in the sect. That way, they could talk more later. Impatient, the sentinels wait for him with looks of fury on their faces. The boy walks away and the old man remains seated on that rock, leaning on his sword. He seems very thoughtful about something strange. His hands appear to tremble incessantly as he holds the sword's hilt. He kneels down, realizing something strange within his body. A monster appears behind him, that child created by the Lich Preskin. Inside the Manhwa sect, a person says, "It is a pleasure to meet the colleague." A sage, Sunhat, introduces himself as the sect leader. Lee Sunman also introduces himself, saying he came to do a favor for Master Bullion. While handing over the letter, the man says the leader of the Muram Alliance has renounced his position, so Master Bullion would now be the leader. Upon opening the letter, he realizes the elder had declined his proposal. Throwing the piece of paper behind him, he says he already knew the old man would do that. Changing the subject, he says the disciples who brought the protagonist to his room mentioned that the boy knows the ghost sword. Stating they met earlier, he says the boy was sitting right in front of the sect's entrance. Sunha says that the ghost sword wanted to duel him, but the sage had no intention of doing that. Curious, the hero asks why. As a martial artist, he enjoyed fighting strong people and didn't mind accepting duels. However, the ghost sword is very dangerous. Returning to talk with Baekmusion, the young man starts the conversation. He asks if it was true that he used dark magic. Laughing, the old man asks if Sunha had told the boy that. After confirming he used dark magic, the boy becomes curious, thinking he only knew sword techniques. The man asks if he had ever reached the limit before, and Sunman confirms. Although the boy was too young to say he had reached his limit at any point, he realizes he's getting old. He says that even if he used internal energy to slow aging, it would still be possible to feel strength slipping through his fingers. Confused, he realizes the boy has no idea what it feels like to experience that kind of despair. Having to rely on dark magic and throw away all his pride as a martial artist was desperate. Showing his shame, the old man remains silent. In the end, he orders the boy to get out of his sight. He didn't want him to see that side of him at all. Sunman decided to leave silently, since he wasn't in a position to say anything and preferred to leave it alone. He went looking for Dronzer's temple, which Mercy had mentioned, and stopped in front of a shack. Upon entering the house, he saw the god of time, Dronzer. He was very confused to realize that it was just a simple child. Confused, the boy asks if the protagonist was sent by Mercy after realizing he was quite problematic. Probably he had crossed the boundaries of time to be in that place. As expected of a god, Dronzer was able to sense that right away. With a more formal introduction, he says he is the god of time and that's why certain things were obvious to him. Naturally, Dinner would feel uncomfortable near someone who had broken the rules of time like the hero, who disturbed the flow of the world. Not understanding his words, the warrior asks what he meant by that. For not living this life as if it were his last, doing the same things, eating the same food, meeting the same people. The god explains that each small change made could cause an even bigger one, like a snowball effect. Luigi stopped dressing like a man and ended up facing the blood celestial demon, which never happened in the past life. Furious, Denier states that the mere fact of his existence was enough to distort that world. Moreover, there were many differences in events, which would continue increasing more and more with no foreseeable end. His mere existence was distorting the order of the world. The protagonist says he chose to return when he awakened something inside himself. Even when asked, a god of time wouldn't tell him anything. The gods are neither omniscient nor omnipotent. They are simple life forms that cannot avoid the cold embrace of death. That's why they stayed quiet or lied, since revealing the truth would put targets on their heads. The protagonist's expression changes completely all of a sudden. Suddenly, the god of time feels the presence of the apostle because of that conversation. It was the same sensation he felt with Mercy and Kim Jong-un. Asking him to leave, Denner says they would not talk about that matter anymore. After his apologies, the apostle disappears completely from the scene. Wanting to know what that was all about, Denner avoids the subject unless the protagonist is willing to visit Judas. He says that neither god nor mortal would be able to answer. Confused, he asks if it was impossible for him to know the truth. Denner replies no and asks him to look for Enverus, the one who fled the mansion of the dead, besides being a special case but different from the protagonist. After giving those hints, Denner asks the protagonist to leave. Before leaving, someone asks for a trial. At that moment, the god's gaze changes completely. Realizing the true motives of the hero, he imagines that he has completed Mercy's trials. However, the boy would not have his wish granted. His trial wasn't for training like Mercy's. Everyone who went through Denir's trial would be capable of ending the protagonist in the blink of an eye. Moreover, they all went insane and died. The protagonist leaves the shack after being expelled by the god of time, who told him to get lost and get his head straight before coming back. He chose to return and rest as he suggested. However, the atmosphere in the village was the worst. Jun ambushed the Taoist Sungha that same night and killed him. Returning to his memories, he realized that the ghost sword and Sungha never fought in the past life. The following year, Jun faced Wiji Hoyan in a dungeon and died there. Originally, that's how everything happened and things had changed because of summon. While walking, he arrived at the Mount Hua sect before he realized it, but a man ordered him not to proceed. The formation of the inescapable web was initiated from that point, and the guards were chasing the ghost sword, who had used low sorcery to assassinate the sect leader after his request for a duel was denied. Therefore, the protagonist could not proceed on his path. Desperate, one of the subordinates states that Summon was seen talking with the ghost sword yesterday. Upon realizing he could be an enemy, everyone takes a combat stance. Because of the regression, Sungha had died and the ghost sword was being hunted. But the protagonist didn't know if he should take responsibility for that, nor did he understand his own feelings. Even so, he needed to defend himself and meet with the ghost sword immediately. While fighting, a voice calls his name, saying it was quite the coincidence to meet the young man in that place. Kim Jong-un explains that the encounter must be the work of fate. Stopping the fight, a mage says he knew that young man very well. The area was under quarantine, but the boy kept getting in the way by insisting on entering. Everyone thought he came to help the ghost sword. Curious, Kim Jong-un asks if that was true, and the protagonist gives no clear answer. Meanwhile, the two remain standing face to face. Decided, the mage says he will accompany Lee Sungmin on his journey. Shocking everyone, he asks them to let the two pass. Asking them to trust him, he explains that at the slightest sign of threat, he would be able to cut off his head. The protagonist thanks the mage for his help. Now he asks for an explanation about Jun. However, the character changes the subject and says he expected something unusual. Lying in front of them, a dead body reveals the use of low sorcery. Vital Drain was the name given to the ability that absorbs a target's energy. Thus, it was no wonder they called him a demonic sword. Jun was responsible for that, and now it wouldn't be just the Mount Hua sect that would go after him. The entire era would want his head. Even if the heavens blessed him, he wouldn't escape alive. While they talk, a crow landed on the mage's shoulder. That was his familiar, which had been scouting the area. With the bird's return, Kim Jong-un made a new discovery. Looking at his friend, he shows a terrifying expression. He explains that the Taoist sect of Mount Hua would be delayed. Stating he had disrupted their communications, he asked the protagonist to speak with someone privately. Even if he sent martial masters, the vital drain would kill them all and strengthen the enemy. Thus, the mage's goal was to help the boy out of pure curiosity. He wanted to witness the change in the flow of life that he would cause. Upon hearing those words, the hero shows a hint of suspicion in his eyes. Holding an instrument, a voice asks if they had finished. Sunmin and Dokbi had just fought. Even tired, the boy wouldn't give up so easily. Getting up, he summons the Supreme Spear of the Heavens as his fifth stance. Meanwhile, his opponent waits patiently. His expression changes when he notices something strange. The attack wasn't strong enough to cause any damage to his opponent and ends up slipping. With only his sword, he manages to strike the boy's head. Apparently, that technique was too much of a burden for the young man's shoulders. With a bump on his head, he remains lying on the ground too weak to get up. Now the warrior had encountered Jun in the middle of the forest. The old man senses the boy's presence. In the darkness, the two exchange no words for the moment. The boy starts the conversation, saying he had something to ask. Curious, he wants to know what the man would have done if he hadn't met him at the entrance of the sect, and what his attitude would have been if he hadn't told him the reason the leader rejected his requests. After the questions, Jun says nothing. Gathering his courage, he states he would have given up on challenging him. He thought he was too weak to face the leader of the greatest sect, but later discovered the reason his requests were rejected. It wasn't because of his strength, but because of his sorcery. In the end, since he couldn't face him, he invaded the sect in the middle of the night. And then he got to enjoy his fight with the Taoist Sungha. The boy is shocked to notice the strange expression on his friend's face, with his face covered in blood and his eyes carrying a cursed tone. The old man realized that the world is very vast and the leader was the strongest person he had ever faced. Therefore, it was a wonderful experience with an ending that left him completely satisfied. As he spoke, the young man's face showed how shocked he was by this situation, remembering his friend from the mountains and all his teachings. He closes his eyes upon noticing the strange creature in front of him. He realizes that because of him, the Taoist died and now everyone wanted Jun's head. The old man says that even if that's true, all those choices were still his own. The world is full of things we'll never truly know, so he said the boy couldn't take responsibility. Even so, he felt that part of it was his fault. To him, the situation wasn't as the old man described. Noticing that the young man was quite convinced, the old man believed he was full of himself. The protagonist was sure that Jun was much stronger than him. There were millions of people in different lives simply because they got involved with Lee Sungmin. He was holding his spear purely out of self-satisfaction. However, he was certain that all the deaths he caused would weigh on his shoulders, and he knew that was a burden far too heavy to bear. His goal was to face the demonic sword and kill that man. Realizing it would be a difficult fight, he asks Kim Jong-un to summon the Taoists from the Manhwa sect. In this case, he was much stronger now that he had absorbed the energy of more than 10 people. Wielding his sword, the old man wished to see the growth of that boy he met in the mountains. The hero realizes that the old man had become something far more terrifying. In the darkness, he said the night was still young and he was ready for battle. Looking at his dreadful face, he realized that Jun was a vampire. It seems that the vampire, a blood relative of the demonic sword, was either very strong or simply not interested enough. It's possible to overcome aging by becoming a vampire and drinking the blood of superior species. Even so, he was still an old man. While the two fought, their abilities were displayed. Jun was very skilled and knew how to defend against high-impact spells. However, just because the demonic sword is weak as a vampire doesn't mean it is truly weak. It's a combination of the power of a transcendent vampire master, and one could not lower their guard. In the first place, there was no reason to be careless. The vampire rushes in, aiming to strike his opponent. With the soul-purging assassin strike, he tries a new type of attack. Losing his balance, the sword wobbles in the old man's hand. Suddenly, he drives the weapon into the ground. Meanwhile, Sungmin leaps forward with a giant jump. He tries to thrust the spear at Jun, but with all his agility, the old man dodges the blow. Sensing the boy's intention, he charges toward him. Desperate, the boy realizes how fast the vampire is. He grips his spear with extreme strength and spins it around himself. Quickly, the old man tries to strike the boy, but he evades. Without his opponent noticing, he manages to pierce his chest with the spear, causing him to lose balance. Confused, he can't follow the boy's movements. He had learned very well the new technique of Lee Kangwon and Bak Sogo. With blood in his eyes, the boy points his weapon at the enemy. Not letting the moment slip by, he grips his sword with one hand. With his power, he tries to strike Sungmin. With several steps, he prepares the supreme spear of the 9 heavens together with the strike of the hidden serpent. Not understanding those movements, the old warrior waits for the attack. At that moment, his vampire eyes could see many things that normal eyes could not. However, he did not expect the intense blow he received. Suddenly, a supreme force begins to rise from the ground. The old man lets out a long laugh and says he never imagined a spear would come from beneath his feet. If he could delay even a little longer to dodge, his head would have been pierced. The rage grew inside the protagonist, and his fury was shown through his brutal gaze. Jun realizes that the ignorant mountain boy had grown quite a bit. As the two fought, the red moon rose in the sky. Unexpectedly, the old warrior says he invited the boy. Hearing his words, the boy was confused. Getting closer, the man says he invited his talent. Sensing his opponent's approach, he prepared his spear. However, he ended up being wounded in the arm. Falling to the ground, Jun stood still like a shadow in front of him. Launching another strike in the darkness, the protagonist realized that he had broken his spear into 2 pieces. Confused, the big guy didn't understand what was happening and asked for explanations. At that moment, the vampire paused the battle for a moment and began to tell his story. After descending the mountain, he became desperate with the body he had. He He didn't want to grow old at all, he wanted to do more and go further, but his old body held him back. He wielded a sword for 50 years and thought that one day he would be the best in the world, but that was too big a dream. His body no longer allowed him to fight, and he had to find another way to overcome his aging. So he chose to become a vampire. Laughing, Dakbiju knew that someone was waiting for reinforcements. Eager, he wanted them to arrive quickly so he could drink everyone's blood and regain his youth. Upon hearing that, the hero gathered all the anger he had inside. Wielding his ring, he unleashed all his power. The boy truly respected that friend. Seeing his movements, the vampire got excited that they hadn't yet reached the peak of the fight. He realized that fighting that boy would be much more fun than he had thought. When a martial artist reaches their peak, they can diffuse their own energy into a weapon. This is called energy sword. Such energy exponentially increases destructive power, and someone proficient can cut steel like a hot knife through butter. If one is able to surpass the peak, the energy takes form, being called enhanced energy sword. The destructive power of the enhanced energy sword is much greater than the normal energy sword, capable of killing with one blow. However, there is a way to defend against it with enhanced protection energy, a technique that uses enhanced energy to cover the entire body, being able to defend against an opponent's energy. But someone is unable to use it, as he only possesses enhanced energy in its incomplete form acquired through understanding. A path to victory is out of sight. Despite the difficulties, Lee Sunman would not give up on that battle. In every possible way, he tried to strike his opponent. Tired and panting, he didn't stop for even a second. Even when hit and knocked down, he kept standing. However, the vampire was extremely fast and disappeared from his view. Suddenly, he appeared behind him. Even sensing that presence, he was still too weak to fight against it. The power of his spear surged through the space. Suddenly, he found a gap in the barrier to strike his opponent. However, the enhanced protection technique didn't allow his arrow to go through. While Dakbijun could endure several attacks with that energy, his head would hit the ground from the first strike without it. The opponent had the full characteristics of a full moon vampire, along with enhanced protection energy. Not to mention the massive difference in skill between the two. When he gave thanks for the miracle of surviving this long, his spear struck only air and a fatal opening was left. In a battle between masters, even the smallest opening means death. In an instant less than 1,000th of a second, Lee Sunman instinctively felt that it was his last moment of life. However, the boy was still alive. The demonic sword backed off despite the perfect opportunity in front of him. Only after seeing that psychotic smile did Lee Sunman realize the demonic sword was toying with him, thinking that was extremely infuriating. For 4 whole years, he had trained with the Shaolins. Lee Sunman's martial arts stabilized as he fought Jai-Hack daily, progressing to the supreme peak. It's extremely rare for people of Sunman's age to reach such a level. In short, the protagonist is by no means weak. The problem is that he encountered people far stronger than him. Meeting geniuses he would need several lifetimes to catch up with, combined with the memories of his past life, created an inferiority complex. His life would have been easier if he had focused on being mediocre, living in a mediocre world. His training with the Shaolins allowed him to overcome that complex. Meanwhile, the fight between the two continued intensely. Thus, the protagonist might have become stronger. However, he still felt very weak, and that was simply the reality. The problem wasn't his weakness, he just couldn't take responsibility for the lives lost due to his arrogance. But the demonic sword loved to toy with Lee Sunman. At that moment, the hero realized his situation was dire. That's why Lee Sunman trained even harder, because he refused to remain weak, because he didn't want to feel shame, because he wanted to rid himself of that inferiority complex once and for all. The hero gathered all the remaining strength in his body and launched an attack. He tried to get closer to his enemy, who seemed out of reach. Around his body, the protection was becoming stronger and stronger. However, Sunman wanted to change. With his ring wielded, he reveals all of his powers. Meanwhile, the demonic sword remained in place. Suddenly, the boy manages to strike his enemy's chest, leaving him completely confused. Even the boy didn't understand how he had accomplished such a feat. The vampire felt the impact of the spear. His feet could no longer hold firm to the ground, causing him to lose balance. Seeing the spear embedded in his chest, he was startled. He couldn't understand how his opponent had managed to strike him with such precision. Lee Sunman noticed the tension lingering in the atmosphere. The boy asked himself the same question Dakbijun had. He didn't know how he managed to do that, and the answer that appeared quickly vanished from his mind. The thrust of the spear during that trance-like moment was faster than the blade of the demonic sword and pierced through the protection. However, Lee Sunman had no idea how he had done it. He believed it might have been an epiphany, like the moment he awakened his enhanced energy. Meanwhile, his opponent was feeling intense pain caused by the blow. In every possible way, he tried to free himself from the spear. Desperate, Lee Sunman didn't know what his next move should be. The old warrior said it felt like he had just stumbled over a stone. That thrust wasn't something someone at the boy's level should have been able to perform. After pulling the spear from his chest, he chased after the unimaginable talent standing in front of him. That spear that had just pierced his body was even stronger, faster, and quieter than the blade of Taoist Samha. Foreseeing his death, he knew his blood wouldn't be enough for regeneration. Therefore, he continued gripping his sword tightly. Changing the color of his sword to a vibrant blue, he asked the boy to show him more. As he walked, his aura turned blue like the sky. Dakbi-jun wanted Sungmin to show him the power he had never reached in life. The innate energy core was a type of energy that comes from birth, but if used, one would die or sacrifice nearly all of their life. As he was using that energy, he would die soon, and the protagonist could run and let him die alone. However, his eyes were filled with joy and passion. Seeing those eyes, the hero could no longer run. Dakbi-jun was not a demon controlled by sorcery, but merely a seeker of truth who longed to surpass his limits. He knew the old man had lied about envying his youth and talent. He was someone who ran away while pretending to overcome his inferiority complex, and for that, he would wield his spear with full strength. By recreating the miraculous strike he had landed by sheer luck, he would deliver a satisfying death to a great martial artist. At that moment, the old man no longer had any strength and blood flowed from his mouth. Before dying, he stated he was disappointed in the boy. As he weakened, the old man said that the blow that killed him should have been stronger and more impressive than Sun Ha's. Once again, with the spear embedded in his chest, the old warrior didn't understand why he was in that state. By his side, the protagonist watched his final words. Before he could finish his sentence, his hand dropped to the side. Now, Dakbi-jun was truly dead. The protagonist was filled with expectations he knew he had to fulfill. In that world, the demonic sword died with a smile on his face. By his side, the boy knelt down and asked for forgiveness. Tired of so many losses, he took responsibility for each death. While crying over his fallen friend, he noticed the light coming toward him. Realizing it was Sogo, he ran into her warm embrace. As the woman said, he had grown a lot. The protagonist was in shock to see his friend in the forest. Suspicious, he pulled away from the hug for a moment and asked what the woman was doing in that place. She stood and remained silent at his side. While gathering flowers, she said she had heard rumors about the demonic path. The hero listened carefully to her words. The woman laid the flowers on Dakbi-jun's body. With one of her hands, she closed his eyes. Sad for the passing of her friend, she remained silent. Sungmin and Sogo hadn't seen each other for about 5 years, and now they had reunited in a place like that. Back Sogo had noticed that the boy from the mountains was much stronger. Sensing something demonic, she said she watched his fight with a demonic sword and saw when he was losing. Even if he died, she wouldn't get involved in that battle. With a smile, the boy said he understood her reasons, as she was a martial artist. However, the protagonist believed that he should have died. He had only run away the whole time, but a lucky strike allowed him to succeed despite the difference in strength. The demonic sword was consumed by his ambitions and did everything possible to surpass his limits. Back Sogo says that their friend was wrong. Not understanding her words, the boy asks what she meant. The woman explains that the demonic sword's mistake was hurting innocent people, and nothing justified who they were. She didn't know his problems, nor his reasons. However, none of that mattered since he had sinned unforgivably with the deaths he caused along the way. In silence, the two remained side by side. Back Sogo's sense of justice seemed quite different from the protagonist's. Sungmin says he was after the demonic sword out of the sense of responsibility. With a look of sorrow, she understands. She says she belongs to the Mirim Alliance, a perfect place to witness her kind of justice, where she obtained valuable information. Knowing that man, she wanted to stop him, but she didn't know the protagonist was there. While a bit of blood ran from his mouth, he called out to Sogo. Curious, he asks how he looked to her. The woman says Sungmin looked very different, several levels above compared to their last encounter. Finally, she says she was happy with that change. Realizing she had left a mission unfinished, she needed to leave. When she mentioned that, Lee Sungmin's attention turned completely to that mission. Back Sogo was chasing the little celestial demon, Wiji Hoyan. Upon hearing that name, the warrior's pupils widened. Leaving, she says she could no longer give any details. Without making any promises, she says the two would meet again soon. Before Sungmin could say anything, she disappeared. Alone, he reflects on Back Sogo's mission. Most likely, she had been killed in his past life because of that mission. Joining the Mirim Alliance in pursuit of her own justice wasn't a belief easily shaken. At that moment, the boy realized he would be unable to convince her. After the elimination of the demonic sword, who had used low sorcery, rumors of a young hero began to spread. The hero who killed a vampire at the Supreme Martial Peak during the full moon, nicknamed the Demonic Spear. Upon returning to the shack, a voice sounded very surprised. Confident, Lee Sungmin asked the God of Time to grant him the trial, even if it means his death. Shocked by the determination of the man before him, Denner is left speechless. The warrior's only goal is to complete that trial. Observing the character more closely, he seemed well prepared. It looked as if he had arrived like a madman. The pain he was about to experience and the trial was unlike anything he had ever seen or felt before. Determined, the protagonist didn't care about anything else. He orders Denner to begin the trial once and for all. Sensing the young man's anguish, the God of Time gives a small smile. Decided he would begin the trial at that very moment. Suddenly, the two are in a very different space. That was the world that resides within the protagonist's consciousness. The training done in that place would not affect Sungmin's brain in any way. In that place, only his mind would be trained, and it would be impossible to use benefits like the status window or any abilities. To leave that place, one must train using only memory and talent. Until the sand in the hard glass ran out, he would remain in that world. However, that trial would last a century. Unable to regret it, he would stay in that empty space for at least 100 years. The god of time realized that the young man's behavior was worthy of punishment. He might remain there for longer than a century. Dronzer explains that he could stay as long as he wished. Once the sand completely fell, he would have two choices. The first, to end the training and return to the real world. And the second, to flip the hard glass upside down, adding another century to the total time each time it was turned. Even so, there would be no turning back after flipping the hard glass, and he would have to stay there until all the sand fell. Out of every 10 people, 3 survived, and all the others went mad or died. Many make it through the first 100 years and become confident and flip the hard glass. But during the second 100 years, they begin to go insane. Thus, the god of time needed to know how long the protagonist could last. Those were Dronzer's final words before he disappeared and the century began. At first, he felt fine, having a chance to grow stronger with infinite time to do so. No matter how much he moved, he didn't get tired, didn't feel hunger, and didn't sleep, and it didn't take long for that to become suffering. He missed hunger, tiredness, and thirst, and above all, he missed pain. But no matter what he did, he felt nothing. He never imagined that not feeling pain would end up causing more pain. Upon realizing his situation, he was in utter despair. That wasn't just pain. He didn't know if he was doing things right, and there was no one there to correct his mistakes. Ouiji Huoyan, Baksogo, and Jai-Hak weren't there. Even if he launched his spear in a way that seemed wrong, he wasn't sure of anything. Every time he thought all his suffering was for nothing, he nearly went insane. Lee Sunman needed to be sure he was doing it correctly. In that way, he found himself completely lost. There was no answer for him. And when he thought most of the time had already passed, he looked at the hard glass and realized that not a single grain had fallen. Meanwhile, his body stood before the sun god. Dronzer was already thinking of a way to get rid of his body, knowing he wouldn't pass the trial. However, he felt something strange and peculiar. When he looked ahead, he noticed something very common as his pupils dilated. Sweating cold, he realized he was dealing with a complete madman. Only 10 people had accepted that trial in the past, and all passed the first century easily. The protagonist reflected on having less talent and less willpower than all of them. Consequently, his thoughts led him straight to the past, remembering the reason he hadn't given up. In the end, he was just a larva and couldn't be angry about crawling. When he was on the mountain of Mercy, the hero accepted to keep crawling until he surpassed the geniuses. Even if he was heading toward a wall, he could destroy it and make his own path. His training with the Shaolins was nothing, needing to recover and move on. Even a massive rock turns to sand with the ocean's beat and the passage of time. The supreme spear of the 9 heavens didn't seem to improve even with the training. In the end, he realized that people don't change. That's why everyone wore masks and acted like someone else. No matter how much he thrust or swum, he wouldn't gain handles or feel tired. A spear was made to thrust and neutralize, being a powerful monk technique, which wasn't his case. Thus, the protagonist found himself confused amid so many questions. With less than half the time left, he didn't know if he had completed the mission. But he didn't give up and kept trying. Even if he left that place, nothing could change. Now he was certain he needed to kill the weak like him. Kneeling, he asked forgiveness for killing the Lord, who shouldn't have been killed by someone as weak as him. Changing was truly hard, and he wanted to kill the weakness inside him, even if that was all he was. Putting his head in the right place, he decided to stop lamenting since time was almost up. He trained tirelessly for 2 centuries, but didn't improve at all, being just another classless man. He couldn't even remember how many times he fell into despair and wanted to give up during those 200 years. However, he was determined not to run anymore, aiming for changes in his future. With weariness on his face, he turned the heavy hard glass once more. That was the weight of his hesitation. By turning the object, another 2 centuries began. The protagonist's expression revealed his pain, which ran through his entire body. When he came back to his senses, much more sand had fallen. He had probably gone insane for a good while before pulling himself together. He had felt that countless times before, but probably felt disgusted by his own weakness. Having all the time in the world, he saw no problem as long as he didn't go permanently mad. The 100 years that passed that time were much better spent, feeling like he was advancing in some direction, even if slowly. This time, he would train the mystical art of the Violet Dawn and the flight of the shadowless soul. Once he set his goals, he managed to feel good for a few moments amidst those centuries. Thus, another 2 centuries passed, and he didn't improve at all, just as he had expected. Following his goal, he added another 3 centuries. The first century felt like hell, but it seemed way cooler now. At that moment, he believed he had gone mad for living in that place. In truth, he wanted to aim a bit higher after noticing some improvement, trying to replicate the attack that killed the demonic sword. But obviously, he couldn't replicate those movements perfectly, adding another 400 years. Suddenly, a millennium had passed. The protagonist's gaze no longer revealed his true feelings. He stared at the wall at the level of the supreme peak. He laughed upon realizing he had found the structure after just 1,000 years and added another 500 years. Since it took 1,000 years to find the wall, the time to cross it would be much greater. With that, he began to train day after day, incessantly. And after nearly 1,500 years, he finally replicated the strike that killed the demonic sword. It was just a cheap imitation since he couldn't use the same power and speed in any other spear attack. The young man wondered when he would become a supreme peak martial master. Looking at the object beside him, he added a few more years. The god of time became increasingly shocked by Sunman's actions. To him, Sunman was a complete madman. Lee Sunman had a single goal in mind and wanted to complete the mission he had been given. In the end, his gaze revealed all his will to not fail. Dinner kept secret the fact that the realm of consciousness drastically slowed the growth of those who trained in it. Because of that, even geniuses would have difficulty evolving, making it easier to fall into despair. The previous participants were much stronger than the hero, even so, no one endured more than a millennium. Amazingly, that young man had lasted a very long time. In the end, he trained for a long 2100 years. Upon returning, Rainier was curious to know how he had endured for so long. Realizing his weakness, a bit of blood dripped from his nose as a side effect. His brain overloaded. It wasn't easy to receive 2100 years of memories all at once. Rainier was confused to realize that the warrior went insane several times but managed to recover. To the god, an airhead like him should have given up due to lack of talent. At that moment, he thought that might have been the reason he managed to endure 2100 years. The other participants were like eagles, flying freely through the skies, but birds don't usually walk, let alone crawl. Lee Sunman not only crawled from the beginning, but still had weights on his back. He got used to being knocked down and getting back up continuously, experiencing despair countless times. All that anguish he felt made him immune. The god of time was truly shocked by the figure in front of him. Even so, he knew that wasn't the only reason. The protagonist's body was very heavy, since he hadn't had one for 2 millennia. The last one who survived for 1000 years couldn't even remember how to speak. Daenerys gave him his memories up until now, which would help fill the void. Suddenly, the protagonist received a full load of memories. His face changed, remembering extremely important facts. He still remembered that pathetic version of himself, but even so, he was grateful. The trial of the god of time only trained Sunman's mind and couldn't alter his physical body. But thanks to the memories and personalities he acquired during the trial, becoming stronger would be easy. From now on, the hero wanted Rainier to take care of him. He had no roof to keep over his head, so he would like to stay in the house until he got used to his body. Having been isolated for 2100 years, he needed some help to recover. Irritated, the god of time said he should do whatever he wanted. A year later, at the Sheldon Temple, vegetation surrounded the entire region. Meanwhile, a practitioner trained tirelessly without rest. Jahank was stunned to hear a voice he had known a long time ago. Beside him, Sunman was curious to know about the man. But his expression showed all his shock at seeing the boy next to him. Determined, the protagonist had the perfect plan traced in his mind. Confused, the warrior didn't understand what had happened to him. Apparently, a lot had changed during all that time. Jahank had heard the rumor that Lee Sunman was the one responsible for defeating the demonic sword. He didn't believe that killing a great martial artist, who had eliminated the leader of the Manhwa sect, was just luck. The hero reached the supreme peak in the middle of the year, and the fighter showed some curiosity about his newly acquired skills. Even trying to deflect the subject, it took him a while to say what he really felt. Looking into Sunman's eyes, it seemed like he had lived ridiculously longer. Meanwhile, the two remained silent for a while. Suddenly, the warrior gripped his weapon more tightly, showing his intentions. At that moment, Jahank wanted to duel against Sunman, but the boy was already ready for that kind of fight, stating that was the reason for his appearance. As they positioned themselves, a voice told them to stop immediately. The old man said that if the two fought, the Shivalin could have its future destroyed. Listening to Master Biliam's words, the men stopped. Intrigued, the old man noticed how the boy had improved his martial arts. The reason for the protagonist's return was because he was curious to know how close he was. With determination, he tried to get as close as possible to Wiji Hoyan. Biliang stated that the girl's talent must have already allowed her to go much further. Jahank waits for the old man's thoughts to conclude. He states that Hoyan should be far ahead of Sunman, thinking of her 17-year-old version. However, the protagonist already expected that kind of answer, so it wasn't a surprise. He never imagined that his current power could come close to hers. However, the realm of consciousness allowed him to greatly increase his strength. With that body, he was determined to reach another level, with 2 months remaining until the dungeon opened. Jahank asked him to stay the night, but the boy left after retrieving the demonic armor and his spear. He had to learn more about the Black Heart, prevent Bak Sogo's death, find Enverus, and recover his martial power. With so many tasks to complete, he needed to be as efficient as possible. His first task would be to find Enverus, an existence with completely messed up causality, but different from his own. The master had escaped the embrace of death, so he should ask him for help. Determined, the protagonist searched for the master who could answer his questions. Based on Erebus's information, the merchant known as Enverus was seen in the Forest of the Sleepers. That place was known for driving everyone insane due to the spectral screams. No one knew what was inside that forest, as everyone avoided the monster-filled region. To him, there was no way a simple merchant would come to such a place. While ordinary humans would go mad from the scream, Sunman found it no different from a mosquito's buzz. Turning his back, nothing in that forest could fully affect him. Suddenly, something strange appeared behind him. Startled, he threw a punch with all his strength. With strikes, he destroyed the monsters he encountered along the way. Meanwhile, mysterious people observed from a distance. Curious, They wanted to know how he managed to defeat monsters so easily. To them, he was a supreme peak martial master, not from an unorthodox faction, since he had no demonic energy. Realizing they couldn't defeat the boy, they looked for reinforcements, but some men had already found those curious onlookers. With a simple question, he wanted to know if they knew someone named Enverus. Afraid, the men drew their weapons, trying to defend themselves from the outsider. With a strike, a dart was thrown straight at him. Dodging the attack, the protagonist didn't understand the reason for such aggression. Even so, the men were not intimidated and fought with all their might. One of them created an intense flame that headed toward the young man, but he didn't seem to care about anything, knowing he could endure it all. The man was shocked to see Eddie replicated his attack by simply waving his hand. Approaching, the boy tried a new kind of approach. He just wanted to talk, showing that they didn't need to be afraid. His gaze completely intimidated the man. However, he explained that they were deaf and that he had to write something on the ground if he wanted to communicate. At that moment, the protagonist realized the reason for the exaggerated reaction. Thus, they began to converse with writings on the ground. Without anyone noticing, a warrior fell from the sky. With all his strength, he landed his feet on the ground. Shouting, he called the two of them bastards for their actions. They shouldn't share information about the tribe with an incomplete outsider. That man was the tribe's powerful elder. Shortly after, the young man realized they weren't deaf, but his only objective was to know about Enverus. With anger in his eyes, the elder stated he wouldn't tell anything to an outsider. Confused, some men realized he had no choice but to fight. Standing over the man's body, he tried to speak with those men again. Frightened, they still couldn't believe he had managed to defeat the elder. Realizing his quest might be related to the tribe, he asked them to show him the way. That tribe lived in the forest of the sleepers and used a drug to deafen themselves, making them immune to their relentless screams. Soon after, they arrived at the tribe filled with wooden structures. To some men, that place didn't seem pleasant at all. A man introduced himself, saying he was the tribe's chief named Kazuya. Now the two of them looked at each other, trading barbs and thinking about their next steps. The chief was a very strong man, a master at the supreme martial peak, having gone through origin reversal. Irritated, the old man wanted to know what the boy was seeking so desperately, having killed an elder and threatened two youths. He kept insisting he came in peace, with no intention of killing anyone. Even so, it made no sense to stand still against someone who wanted him dead. His statements left the master speechless as he processed everything that had been said. Forgetting the past, he realized that many of his men would die if they tried to stop him. Thus, he would be welcome as a guest in the village. Suspicious, the protagonist accepted that kind of treatment without lowering his guard. The peace agreement between the two was sealed. Thinking about his goals, the boy asked if the old man knew Enverus, but he is informed that the man had left the forest 2 months ago. Despite the information, they had no idea of his whereabouts. Before leaving the village, Enverus was certain that someone would come to the tribe seeking information about him. His final request was to guide the visitor to a certain place. Suddenly, after walking for a few minutes, they arrived at another part of the forest. Kazuya said that countless trees had merged to form that wall. Grabbing his spear, the young man would try to destroy it. Determined, he held the weapon with all his power and will to succeed. Suddenly, he launched his body against the wall. The energy was so intense that the tribe chief covered his eyes to protect his vision. Even with such a powerful strike, the boy's expression showed his desperation. It was impossible to break that barrier with strength alone. Not even Enverus had been able to cross it, as only the tribe chief could open it. Thus, the old man decided to open the wall for the boy. Using his powers, he concentrated all of his energy. Soon after, a dark and mysterious passage opened, but the tribe chief wasn't sure what existed inside. He only knew that an unbelievable power resided there and that even a supreme peak martial master would have difficulty passing through. Before he could finish his explanation, the boy went through the passage. Confused, Kazuya stood still as he watched the boy disappear. The incessant screams would destroy the sanity of anyone who heard them. It was a powerful mental attack, and just as Kazuya had said, even a supreme peak martial master would be unable to resist. But during 2100 years, Lee Summon experienced something worse in the realm of consciousness, with his mind destroyed and rebuilt, that led him to a solid state between sanity and madness. As he walked, he noticed a strange voice trying to speak to him. In front of him, something flickered through the smoke. That energy allowed him to enter, having mistaken him for someone else. Curious, that power asked if the boy was the one who had returned through time. Not understanding what it was that was speaking to him, Summon remained silent. Suddenly, another voice asked the monarch of the void to stop behaving that way. Transforming her body, the girl said the boy was getting scared. Confused, he didn't understand anything that was happening in front of him. At last, he asked who those two enigmatic beings living behind the wall of trees were. Before he could say anything else, the girl began to introduce herself. She was Rubia, Enverus' familiar, and had been waiting for the boy all this time according to her master's instructions. Her appearance was like that because of her master's peculiar taste. Curious, someone asked what the frightening thing behind him was. That was the monarch of the void, a remnant of the great demons. 400 years ago, he was a powerful demon who commanded over 100 demons. Now he was just a spirit without a body. Lee Summon wanted to know why Rubia had waited for him for so long in such a strange place. But the only person who could answer that question was her master, who also had a distorted causality. Despite being his familiar, she couldn't locate him precisely. Thus, the protagonist became a little impatient with his current situation. The master was able to detect Rubia's location, so it would be better if the hero followed her. Confused, he didn't understand why things were becoming so complicated. Besides, he didn't understand why that weird thing was in front of him. But the Monarch of the Void only knew one thing, that the one who returned would look for him one day. His goal was to leave that forest with a regressor. Rumors said that the tribe of that forest had a good god, but those legends made the monarch laugh. As long as the blood of the tribe existed in the forest, the final seal of this place would remain, and even he didn't know if there was an end to the path. Even after so many explanations, the protagonist still had doubts in his mind. Rubia repeated that if he accompanied them, he might eventually be able to meet her master Enverus. The only problem was how they could carry a demon without a physical body. Besides that, her master hadn't explained that part. Suddenly, the Monarch of the Void began to change his form. The protagonist watched those movements carefully. Coming in his direction, he launched his powers at the boy. Not even Rubia understood what the Monarch was doing. His goal was to steal the boy's body, since he had been trapped for 400 years after losing his physical form. Although that body was trash compared to his prime, he would make good use of it. Meanwhile, Rubia awaited the end of the transformation. The Monarch of the Void laughed desperately. Shortly after, he realized he had launched his body toward the bracelet on the boy's arm. Confused, he didn't understand what had happened. The great Monarch of the Void had been rejected and imprisoned within that bracelet. The boy's mind was very strong, the result of 2100 years of training in the realm of consciousness. Besides that, it might be some kind of blessing from someone working behind the scenes. The protagonist didn't know, but he believed the only way to get answers was to meet Enverus. His memories took him back to a time when his friend Lou was still alive. He had created many memories with that item, and now he could no longer use it. His desire was to expel the Monarch of the Void from his bracelet, but the spirit seemed completely desperate. Before the boy could abandon him, he tried to persuade him with a gift. He had once been a very powerful demon who had acquired some war spoils after ruling for centuries. Rubia confirmed that in the past he was truly very wealthy, with a vault full of wonderful riches and mysterious treasures. Thoughtfully, the hero reflected on the offer. In the end, Rubia and the Monarch of the Void became his companions. Thus, they walked together through the forest. The familiar wanted to find a quiet place with a beautiful view to wait for Master Enverus. Even though it wasn't a bad idea, someone needed to go somewhere first. Curious, the girl hoped it wasn't a dangerous place. But the protagonist's expression already revealed his intentions. Lee Sunman needed to go to a dungeon. Dungeons are mysterious places that have appeared over time, and countless spells are embedded within them. The laws that govern them are different for each one. An area after killing a monster, people take byproducts as loot. But dungeons are different, and after killing a monster, its body disappears and loot appears in its place. Loot comes in all shapes and sizes. The stronger the monster, the better the loot. And if you defeat the dungeon master, then you receive an incredible reward and the dungeon will shut down. Rubia asked if he was really going to that place. Without showing any frustration on his face, he replied that he definitely was. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood in front of a giant stone. It had been 2 months since he met Rubia and the Monarch of the Void, and he had found the dungeon's location through Erebris's information. In his past life, he had taken the Stone of Regression, and the Crimson Stone should be at the dungeon entrance. If he touched it, he would be immediately teleported to somewhere inside the dungeon, and from there he could do whatever was needed. Even so, for a moment, his mind faltered at the thought of whether completing the mission was even possible. Despite everything, it would be foolish to give up now after coming so far. Decided, the protagonist brought his hand close to the stone. At that exact moment, he was teleported. Together with Rubia, the two managed to enter the dungeon. Sunman noticed something strange, a familiar sound. Turning around, he saw that someone very large was next to him. Apparently, it was an ambush. The man said nothing, remaining silent. Curious, he asked who that boy in front of him was. The man realized it was the demon spear who had killed the demon sword. Grismo apologized for the attack and said he thought the boy was a martial master from the demonic faction. Grismo's martial prowess was at the supreme peak level. In his past life, he had been killed by Wijihoyam. The protagonist was in that place to stop the little celestial demon. Grismo informed him that she was extremely dangerous, leading powerful individuals. The dungeon's rewards were grand, and if allowed, an invincible demon would be born. Thus, the two needed to stop her for the sake of peace in area. The demon sword Daka of the Lonely Grandmother and the Iron Fist Demon also entered the dungeon as her followers. With the Mirim Alliance, they had Bak Sogov, the Drunken Expedient, the Ace of Expedients, and the Supreme Celestial Swordsman. All of them were in the dungeon as well. Wijivoyan had to be stopped immediately, and Grismo asked if he could count on the protagonist's help. At that moment, he fell into deep silence. But it didn't take long before he revealed he would do whatever he could for justice. Punching him in the back, the big man said he already expected that from the hero who had eliminated the cursed demon sword. This would be Lee Selman's first dungeon. Each dungeon is different, but nearly all have strong monsters, so they needed to be very careful. As they walked, Grismo noticed something strange ahead. Immediately, the two stopped where they were. Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes were filled with a strange light. Someone had arrived at the location. Suddenly, Wiji Huoyan sensed the presence of the boy she hadn't seen in a long time. Face to face, they remained silent, exchanging only dreadful glances. That in front of them was the little celestial demon. Worried, Grismo noticed something strange about that situation. Slowly, Baksogo revealed herself from within the darkness. Quickly, the big guy became excited upon noticing the presence of the woman. However, the two should have looked more closely. That person in front of them didn't seem normal. Observing more carefully, they noticed something strange on her face. The man became completely desperate and his gaze turned intense. With a strike, she lunged at the man and kicked him with all her strength. After receiving the attack, a bit of blood could be seen at his lips. Rubia said it was a doppelganger, a monster capable of copying appearance and mimicking the target's movements. That thing had just used a soul attack despite not having a soul. At that moment, the creature's attention turned elsewhere. With red eyes, it looked intently at the protagonist. Without thinking twice, he activated his bracelet and the armor appeared on his body. Angry, he couldn't believe his friend was being completely imitated. Rubia panicked upon noticing the full fury in her companion. Slowly, the creature began to move. Suddenly, thousands of attacks came toward the protagonist. The deity killed the old demon sword. That day, Baksogo had said that the boy had grown so much. For him, it was almost impossible to accept. That's why, during those 2100 years, he worked hard so she would be proud of him and so he could hear those words again. But he didn't want to hear them from a monster like that, so he spared no effort to defeat that enemy. He explained to Grismo that it was just a copy. A doppelganger that copied even the target's martial art, but was still far inferior compared to the real Sogo. Normally, doppelgangers can only copy appearance, not abilities and martial arts. Rubia said they didn't need to worry, as she would now take on the role of guide. A voice said that little puppet was extremely arrogant. Without wasting time, the hero told the two of them to shut up and stop fighting. At that moment, he had a terrible premonition. They had just faced Sogo's doppelganger. Along the way, they might encounter a copy of someone else. Immediately, someone thought of Wiji Huoyan and his expression showed great nervousness in his veins. The Marim Alliance member, Jiuqiundo, was killed. Meanwhile, his subordinate tried to defend himself at all costs. Enraged, the unmatched warrior of the Marim Alliance showed all his fury against that cursed monster. In front of him was the little celestial demon. Imposing, she appeared ready for her next relentless attack. With that appearance, the man assumed she had learned a few tricks. Determined, he sought to bring justice for all the brutally murdered souls. The warrior wished for Wiji Huoyan's death and screamed at the top of his lungs. The battle between the two began, but the little demon was far more powerful. Without moving, she launched a single attack, which was enough to make the man fall dead to the ground. Upon witnessing that scene, she remained silent. Pensive, her eyes revealed nothing. Suddenly, she thought that it had been 9 years since she last saw that person. On the ground, a copy of Lee Summon lay fallen, and she commented that she was glad it wasn't the real boy. Noticing herself, she thought she should have tidied up a bit more. Analyzing his body, she realized how much stronger he had become. She stated that if he died in that place, she would be extremely sad. Turning her back, she left the body on the ground and wished that Lee Summon wouldn't die. Laughter could be heard inside the dungeon. After an intense battle, Baksogo didn't show much exhaustion on her face. She knew she had been fighting doppelgangers. That was the copy of the weakest among them all, Jiuqiundo. She held a highly pure elixir and realized the thing was inside the copy's body. Now somewhat lost, she didn't know where to go and needed to find the other Marim Alliance members. The way she was, she knew that if she encountered Wiji Huoyan or any of her minions, she would be unable to defeat them. Standing still, two other characters approached. They were followers of the little celestial demon, the lonely phantom, and the iron fist. The two realized the girl was completely alone. The magic stone that fell from the doppelganger of Baksogo's body was a crystal with great magical power. At that moment, a voice called him an idiot for asking why the protagonist didn't eat it. But that would only make the situation worse due to the instability of his core and the lack of balance between ki and his body. Feeling his heart, it seemed perfect, and among the great demons, there had never been one with a heart as pure as his. However, the protagonist still seemed quite confused about the situation. In front of him, the Yokoball of the mountain continued walking calmly. He stopped for a moment, noticing the drunkard in front of him. Lying on the ground, the man had lost one of his arms. That was the member of the beggar's sect, the begging one. The protagonist thought that he was one of the top 3 disciples. He had lost his arm after encountering a copy of the Lonely Phantom and received dozens of sword strikes at once. Realizing he was dying, he asked to borrow some potions. After drinking them, he thanked them for saving his life. If they had an elixir, they could reattach the man's arm. Grismo introduced the young man as the demon spear, Lee Summon, the one responsible for defeating the demon sword. Coming closer, the drunkard said he had heard many stories about the boy. Baksogo talked about him a lot, and besides that, the man said they had a good relationship. The hero stated that a good friend should always be ready to help and grew curious about the drunkard's relationship with Sogo. They exchanged barbs, each claiming to be closer to the woman. Grismo remained between the two, saying nothing. At that moment, the protagonist felt his face growing hot. A voice asked if someone liked the ghostly-looking girl and said it was fun watching 2 grown men fight. The The drunkard realized he had been extremely rude to someone who had just saved his life with a potion. A voice said the two seemed to be having a lot of fun with the situation. That sweet tale of young love had completely blinded them. Coming closer, the follower of the little demon introduced herself as the evil old lady. Grismo noticed the enemy's approach and recognized her immediately. Annoyed, the woman said she could defeat him with a single blow. Sunmin realized she was another follower of Wijihoyan. Rubia informed them that the dungeon's structural analysis was complete. Now they were about to begin a fight. At that moment, Rubia displayed everything she had gathered. The blue dot was the protagonist, the yellow dots were other people, and the red ones were dungeon monsters. That data was enough for them to achieve victory. However, the 3 yellow dots were moving quickly, possibly indicating a fight. The hero's gaze became sharp as he looked at what Rubia was showing. The location was right next to that wall. Thus, one of those dots could be Sogo, and the girl might be fighting Wiji or some other enemy. Thinking carefully, he decided he wanted to try breaking through that thick wall. Meanwhile, the other two were fighting against the evil old lady. Suddenly, they noticed an enormous amount of energy being used. Grismo told the old woman to brace herself for a massive impact. That wall couldn't be broken with normal strength, so the protagonist forced his spear as much as he could. Suddenly, energy began to form. His power was on a much higher level, but he knew he had performed that spell before. More and more, the spear gathered intense energy with vibrant colors. Grismo realized it was time to strike. Terrified, the old woman feared what was coming her way. Using all of his strength, the protagonist's face turned pale. Meanwhile, the enemy could no longer defend herself and could only scream. Shortly after, smoke could be seen seeping from the cracks with the explosion of the wall. All the characters were left confused about what had just happened. Sogo's face showed surprise. Now the hero would fight to save the woman from the enemies and positioned himself in front of her to protect her. Frightened, she could only say that the two hadn't seen each other in a long time. Meanwhile, updates for each character appeared on the screen. Lee Sunmin would not allow anyone to hurt back Sogo. Suspicious, the other two men didn't know him and thought he was someone from the Murem Alliance. Injured, the girl was shocked that her friend had been able to destroy that wall. Holding something in his hands, he said he was there to help. That was the gift from the Buddhist ambassador, kept all this time for fear of losing its power. However, he couldn't let a situation like that continue and decided to bite down on the sphere with all his strength. Upon swallowing it, his body completely transformed. Alert, the men observed the changes. Even eating only half of it, his internal energy was already refilling, confirming Hyuju's suspicions. The strongest would take care of the girl, while the other man would attack the cursed boy with his sword. On the other side, the two warriors prepared for battle. With a leap, the enemies tried to get closer to them. With his spear, Lee Sunmin tried to defend himself. The enemy's sword was very strong and he commanded intense abilities. Upon realizing that the boy had grown much stronger, Baek Sogo was impressed. Holding her spear, the fight was still not over. The venomous demon thought that even though he appeared to be on a lower level, that guy was not easy to face. Even though he didn't seem like a returnee, he felt the boy had trained for a long time. Suddenly, Sunmin jumped at the opponent who defended himself with his sword drawn. The two engaged in an intense battle with no time to rest. Neither of them managed to land a perfect hit on the other. Sunmin dodged the sword coming his way. Meanwhile, the man's eye revealed an intense magic. At that moment, he began swinging his sword in every direction. The protagonist continued holding his spear with both hands. Advancing, he began to run very fast, without stopping for a second. He heard the laughter and provocations of the bearded man coming toward him. Using the 9,000 martyrs in 3 seconds, he tried to injure his enemy. Even so, that sword made extremely abrupt movements. Confused, the character did not recognize that spear movement and could not understand its flow. Suddenly, a blow hit his shoulder with immense brutality. Losing a bit of balance, he tried to stay on his feet. The boy managed to strike from below so suddenly. However, to him, that fight was nothing more than fun, and he began to laugh. Taking into account his martial arts skills, the young man was at the level of a master with years of training. Meanwhile, Baek Sogo was fighting intensely with the other follower of the little celestial demon. Realizing he needed to get rid of Sunmin quickly, the man didn't want to waste any more time. There were 3 things the venomous demon didn't know. That the child before him was a friend of his beloved master, that the abilities he admired in his mind were refined by his master, and that his own life would be taken by his beloved master. The bearded man couldn't withstand the fatal blow dealt by his master even without understanding his motivations. Upon showing his face, Wijihoyan ended that man's life in a second. The man noticed the arrival of the little celestial demon, and was extremely shocked that she was capable of ending the life of the venomous demon, his beloved follower. Even if she didn't like those men, they still considered her their master. Their only request was that she rule the world in some time and that everyone could witness her reign. Therefore, the other didn't understand why she ended the life of the venomous demon who followed her so sincerely. Wijihoyan did not show a trace of regret on her face. Angrily, the character realized it was no longer worth arguing. Because of everything that happened, Meringue Tekken declared death to the little celestial demon, but he was the one who died. That Wijihoyan was just a doppelganger. But the two didn't know it, since they had never encountered copies in the dungeon. The demons who followed Wijihoyan ended up dead. Meanwhile, the copy approached the two characters. Baksogo ordered someone to flee at that very moment. He warned her about the hole he made in the wall, and that if she entered it, she would find the drunk and the mountain Yukbo. The girl's mission would be to call them to help in the upcoming fight in order to have some chance. The protagonist claimed that Sogo was faster than him, so she would have to go. With a slight smile on his face, he asked her please. Unable to go against her comrade, she decided to accept his request. As a final move, she threw him an elixir. Before leaving, she asked the boy not to die. However, the protagonist knew he wouldn't die. Or at least he thought he wouldn't. Face to face, the two men shouted at each other. In the previous life, only Wiji Hoyan came out alive from that dungeon. When asked what happened to the others, she replied that they were all dead. Everyone who heard this thought the little celestial demon had brutally killed them all, but now someone knew the truth. The band Wiji Hoyan was wearing seemed to be an artifact that could expand and contract at will, firing power at speed. This time, the protagonist could prevent everything from happening. Prepared for the clash, he awaited the worst. However, he couldn't give up and decided to face his fears. With his weapon in hand, he approached the enemy. Despite his will, that force was extreme for him, and he realized it felt like his arm was going to fall off. Suddenly, the enemy launched him far away with a blow. Sogo, the drunk, and the mountain Yapbol were still fighting the old woman, so he didn't know if things would be different once they arrived. With another blow, the protagonist was thrown even farther this time. His will to survive was immense. He needed to survive all of that. Because of the promise he made to several people, he knew he needed to endure, he needed to fight. He needed to try to bring that woman down in every possible way. His body might have been weak, but his mind was not. Based on the 2100 years in the spiritual world, he tried to remember everything he had learned. He should attack from the front and from the weakest side. The little celestial demon showed no reaction. Meanwhile, he noticed that the protagonist was preparing for a new attack attempt. He was high up and tried to get as close to her as possible. Wielding his spear, he realized that fight had no end. Even so, he wouldn't give up easily and decided to think about his next steps. A voice called him a brat and asked if he had noticed that. That wretch was playing around, not fighting, just using that band with all her power and all her experience. The copies reproduced the original's movements, and he knew Wiji Hoyan didn't usually use martial arts. Thinking a bit more, he understood that she only used martial arts for opponents who were worth it. Therefore, the protagonist was an opponent worth her time, even if everything seemed like child's play. At that moment, he thought of Sogo and asked her not to come. He realized he was fighting a monster. On the other side, they were defeating the evil old woman. Baksogo was screaming desperately, saying she had to help summon. She got no time to waste, she needed to return for another fight. If none of the men went, she would go back entirely alone. Suddenly, her eyes revealed something strange. The drunk held the woman with his remaining arm and stated that by following her words, they were signing their death sentence. First of all, they had underestimated the opponent, and to defeat Wiji Hoyan, it would take 5 times more power. The drunk said that the best choice for them would be to retreat. Grismo said the only way out would be to defeat the boss monster. But the drunk showed a scroll from the evil old woman. That would be a hard decision, as it meant leaving a friend behind. While they argued, Baksogo remained unconscious in the man's arms. Suddenly, an intense light appeared from the hole. Lastly, a voice asked for forgiveness with a feeling of regret. The warrior continued the fight with the little celestial demon. A lot of blood came from his mouth and his pupils were dilated. His enemy kept attacking, not giving him a moment to rest. She ran in every direction with immense speed. The hero had to stay alert in all directions: the center, the opening, the right, and the left. The voice helped him realize where the attack came from. Even with the tips, he couldn't follow all the instructions. Annoyed, he asked the voice to shut up once and for all. He knew that if he died, he would rot in that place. Besides, Baksogo still hadn't returned. The voice said the girl had betrayed the protagonist. If he hadn't entered that place to save her, he wouldn't be facing such great danger. But he didn't mind dying in Sogo's place. He was sure something must have happened for her not to come back. Anyway, if he hadn't met her, he wouldn't have survived the mountain. The voice let out a sinister laugh. Despite that beautiful speech, the young man couldn't die like that. Therefore, I decided to give a little help. Suddenly, a transformation began to happen. Without understanding anything, some men just accepted the help. That was real power, capable of taking down all the enemies. Wiji Hoyan paid attention to the scene happening in front of her. The power was very easy to use if you had a purpose, being usable however and wherever you wanted. Beams of light came out from his armor. That was part of the voice's spiritual power, and the boy's heart accepted spiritual powers very well. At that moment, his wounds were healing, and even his arm was better. The atmosphere changed, and the original's arrogant and curious nature was also copied. At that moment, the copy recognized him as a great rival. The protagonist felt like that strength could make his veins explode. Meanwhile, the voice asked him to hold on tight. In front of him, Wiji Hoyan was preparing to use her powers with immense fury. It was the first time he had received it, but it still wasn't enough. The protagonist couldn't surrender so easily. Wishing for the voice to give him more strength, the protagonist didn't know if he'd be able to control it. Although it was a power impossible to have with a weak body, he could recognize the power because he had reached it once. If he reached the stage he had achieved in the spiritual world, that doppelganger. Without hesitation, the hero asked for more and more power. His spear became increasingly stronger, and he cast spells in all directions. Wiji Hoyan approached with immense fury. However, her eyes revealed surprise upon realizing what was happening. Suddenly, the protagonist was able to throw his enemy far away, making her crash into a wall. Debris was thrown everywhere, and the girl remained in the middle of the crack that was formed. The 9,000 immortal songs would be used for the sacrificial ceremony. The protagonist just had to endure a few more seconds of that. As the world vented, more explosions were formed. Angrily, the little celestial demon was already back on her feet and showing her moves. In one of her hands, the power could be felt from everywhere. Not expecting to be hit, the blow came toward the protagonist. That was the best power he could use with Hyoji's help. For the second time, he used the 6-second sacrificial ceremony. According to his eyes, power radiated from all over his body. That way, the protagonist sought justice with his own hands. Wiji Hoyan felt the attacks as she was thrown even farther away. Her red eyes revealed something even darker. Suddenly, an intense light could be seen from all corners of the dungeon. The protagonist's expression showed that not even he believed he had won the fight against that copy. Standing still, he began to feel some pain. Sweat ran down his face and his veins were bulging. He had done something 9 years ago, and after thousands of years. He had always been running, thinking about the little celestial demon. With no confidence at all, he wanted to know if he had become even a little bit stronger. Realizing how ridiculous that sounded, the voice stated that he still had to borrow someone else's strength to win. Having power and knowing how to use it were different things. Calling for attention, the voice said the boy should be prepared. The next step would be to withdraw the borrowed power, which could be something extreme and even lead to death. Saying he was used to pain, the power began to be drained. The protagonist's expression revealed something terrifying. His bulging eyes and dilated pupils showed that the pain endured was extreme. Suddenly, his whole body radiated. He screamed in pain while the power left him. A girl stood beside his body. Touching his stomach, Rubia asked if the boy was okay. His body had fought against the pain for an entire hour. Even using the fancy elixir he received from the woman, he wasn't getting better. Without that elixir, he might have died. Therefore, he owed his life to Baksogo once again. The protagonist almost died. Moreover, his limbs, his joints, his blood, and his kai exploded and became wounds. Even though he couldn't move, he tried to stand up. He said he had a place he needed to go. Suddenly, he began walking even without having balance. Looking to the side, he saw the stone fallen on top of the evil old woman. Next to him, Rubia said she could feel the resonance of mana and the movement magic used in that place. Through an escape scroll, the number of people moved was 3. Realizing that Sogo had managed to escape the dungeon, he felt he had fulfilled his purpose in that place. Even so, he needed to walk more without retreating. Looking at the map, he wanted to get closer to the boss. His final goal was Wiji Hoyan. Staggering, he didn't give up for a second and didn't stop to rest. Rubia kept arguing with him in every way but got no response. Losing balance, the hero fell for a second. He was too weak to keep going forward. His 9 and 2100 years were all spent running in that direction, having risked his life based on the words of a 13-year-old child. That's why he wanted to show his efforts and scream that he had grown stronger thanks to Wiji Hoyan. Now not much time was left. The hero's eyes saw something in front of him. Suddenly, he saw Wiji Hoyan and his expression changed. The childish thoughts of wanting to show his growth were immediately forgotten. Upon seeing a movement, a perfect step, more perfect than any move he had imagined in his mind. No doppelganger could be able to copy her, and that was what he had longed for all that time. The one in front of him was the real Wiji Hoyan, imposing with precise movements and unmatched power. The girl realized that he must have been the dungeon boss. While walking, she commented that he was annoyingly strong and in her past life she wouldn't have been able to win. Besides, she encountered a monster that looked like the boy using ancient martial arts. For her, he had been a very fun opponent. She realized that Lee Sungmin had become stronger. Now the young man would know how to respond properly. Hidden behind a wall, he didn't know what the girl was talking about. With a smile on his face, he said he was too dirty to meet Wiji Hoyan. Curious, she asked who he had encountered. She gave some credit to the protagonist for surviving and making it that far. Meanwhile, the girl leaned her back against the wall. She said that Sungmin had achieved his dream and congratulated him. The two continued their conversation, separated by a thick wall. 9 years was a very meaningful time for the warrior. For Sungmin, that time was very significant because of all his effort and dedication. For a moment, the girl didn't say anything until she asked if he didn't want to come with her. As she had said before, the girl hated when others had expectations for her. Even before being summoned to that world, and even after the summoning, those despicable eyes always followed her. But if it had been Sungmin all this time, she wouldn't have minded. The protagonist apologized to the girl. At that moment, she thought he didn't want to go with her, but he said it had nothing to do with that. Lee Sungmin knew that if he went with her, he would always be in her shadow, trying to become someone worthy of her. Even being stronger than Wiji Hoyan expected, it still wasn't enough for him. Smiling, the girl realized how greedy he was. 9 years had passed, and there was only one more left until the time of the promise was over. Therefore, he would have 1 year to reach Wiji Hoyan's level, and then the two could meet. After 10 years, the hero said he would go with the girl. A wide smile opened on her face. Leaving him alone with his greed, she decided to be patient for a while. Before leaving, she warned that it wouldn't be easy at all, and in 1 year, she would become even stronger than him. Noticing the boy's responses, Wiji Hoyan realized how much he had changed. The two stood up and prepared to leave. 1 year from now, they would meet in the promised place. Their expressions showed the goals of each one. In truth, the girl wanted to take him now even by force, wanted to look back and see his face, but she needed to be patient. 1 year from now, they could talk more, they could eat and drink together, openly discussing everything. Besides that, she realized she hadn't managed to say something to him. The light on her face reflected that she was already passing through the portal, without saying that she missed him. Outside the dungeon, someone screamed desperately. Baek Sogo asked why the man had taken her out if someone stayed behind in her place. The drunk man said that was an unavoidable choice and there wasn't much to do in that situation. However, that act was cowardly, not something noble. Turning her back, the woman said she would end the Mirim alliance. She didn't want to stay in a place like that anymore, and that man would never need to look for her again. To her, those actions were extremely disgusting. Speechless, the drunk stood in the same place. Crying, she asked for forgiveness from Lee Sunmin. Determined, she said she needed to become stronger. The beings who live in this world on 2 feet are called humans. They have ethics and rules which they follow to maintain order in the world, but some ignore the rules and surpass them. Beings that feed on the blood of others. Beings that challenge death and continue living in an impure way. Beings that have thrown away all their honor and belief which should be upheld. Beings known as nature's barbarians and who go to the moon. Beings that can't even be considered human. And those who remain on the edge, people call them non-humans. The protagonist's face revealed an expression of astonishment. Lost, he was somewhere he couldn't recognize immediately. He didn't know where he was or what that situation was about. Suddenly, a voice spoke to him saying he looked very pale. His attention was drawn to something coming from behind him. That was the voice of the monarch of the void. Curious, he asked what exactly that place was, and the monarch replied that it was his dream. Earlier, when he had borrowed his power, their spiritual worlds were connected, and upon sleeping, he entered his dreams. Right now, his body was experiencing the side effects of using his power, but he wouldn't die. Relieved, the hero grew nervous, thinking he was still hallucinating, since everything he did after the trial had been a delirium. The form used by the monarch of the void was just to make him feel more comfortable. At that moment, he tried to reveal his true form to the warrior. His energy dissipated around him. Shortly after, an enigmatic figure appeared in front of him. That was the great demon monarch of the void in his original form. Demons are beings that resemble humans. Even though it wasn't his real body, he was happy to use it again after so long. The monarch had a few questions to ask the young man. Curious, he wanted to know what the hell the boy was. The power he had been given shouldn't be something someone like him could endure. Even so, he managed to handle it well and used it as if that power had been his from the beginning. If it weren't for the monarch, the warrior would already be dead for being too weak. When the figure lent him his power, he could feel his emotions, something an invincible being like him had never experienced. Despite everything, Sunmin had a strong enough mental barrier to prevent the monarch from taking over his body. At that moment, the character decided to explain what he was. He told the monarch that he was a regressor and spoke about all the training he received from the gods Mershi and Danir. The protagonist's mental barrier and the talent he possessed not matching his level made total sense now. The monarch couldn't believe he had trained in the mind world for 2100 years, thinking it was pretty idiotic. In the end, the hero was much older than that enigmatic figure, but still just a child to the monarch. His body wasn't capable of withstanding all the experience and training done in the mind world. The big guy still thought the boy was weak, even after living for 2100 years, and continued to belittle him. However, those were the limits of a human. Therefore, the monarch of the void was convinced that the young man should become a demon. Upon making that proposal, the hero grew nervous and speechless. He had probably felt the cost of having borrowed such immense power, not to mention that his heart was that of a monster. If he became a demon, he'd become a very interesting one. If that happened, he could even be stronger than that woman who drove him so crazy. Desperate, the young man began to sway cold. His eyes widened, and his expression showed all his fear. With courage, he refused the offer. Even so, he couldn't forget the non-human energy that lived inside him. Reviewing his memories, he remembered the order to go north. The old man said he should go to the place where the millennial snow never melts to meet someone important in 5 years. Some characters were heading to the great northern city Travia. However, the girl didn't understand why they had to stay in such a cold place for 3 months. While eating something, the hero said there weren't many places where they could stay. The voice offered the option of transforming into an object instead of wasting food, but the girl told it to be quiet. Meanwhile, the warrior kept chewing. Since that day, 3 months had already passed. After escaping the dungeon, he had to pay a high price for borrowing the monarch of the void's power. Even without fully recovering, they began heading north, just as Master Bullion had said. The goal now was to reach the great northern city, Travia, and after traveling for 3 months, they were almost there. According to Neville's information, there was a place that the bloodthirsty celestial demon once ruled. But after losing his arm to a little celestial demon, all kinds of demons and monsters began to spread. Travia was the land of demons, an unorthodox and non-human faction even before the bloodthirsty celestial demon appeared. Travia had always been called the kingdom of non-humans. In that place, there were demons like the monarch of the void, liches, vampires, werewolves, all monsters that resemble humans. After thinking it over, the protagonist understood the reason. It had been a while since he started smelling dogs. In the middle of the forest, a few eyes could be seen in the darkness. That was living proof they were getting close to their destination. Suddenly, several werewolves began coming out from behind the trees and attacking the characters. Prepared for combat, the protagonist realized it was time to get some exercise. The enraged wolves charged with all their fury. The girl shouted for him to be careful, as lycanthropes became stronger at night and common weapons wouldn't hurt them. However, the hero didn't understand her words. At that very moment, he remembered the elf who had forged his spear. The boy had found a mysterious orichalcum with an enormous level of purity. That stone had appeared after he defeated the doppelganger of Wijihoyan inside the dungeon. His goal was to make a spear with that item. As payment, he asked the elf to keep the leftovers. To her, it was an honor to be able to touch that, and she couldn't believe he wanted to use it as payment for a spear. Noticing the elf's anger, he asked her to embed the orichalcum into his armor. Back to the fight against the wolves, the protagonist was sure he didn't possess an ordinary weapon. Because of that, he managed to attack all the animals with intense agility. His spear struck the snouts of those werewolves. With his agile movements, he left them all extremely confused. He spun his spear in a spectacular way, and managed to hit the werewolves right in the chest. Suddenly, he realized he had already defeated half of them. Curious, he asked why those creatures had attacked. One of them noticed the boy's boldness and warned that he would not get away unscathed after everything he had done. The wolf stated that they attacked him for invading the territory of the Ghost Wolf sect. Provoking, the protagonist didn't even know the exact location of that territory. Because of the confusion caused by the boy, the wolves lost their source of income in the village. At that moment, he remembered hitting several people who wanted to sell the girl as a slave. Standing still, the wolf showed no reaction upon hearing those words. While striking another creature, he said they were the real villains of the story. The protagonist said that if they stopped attacking, he would leave the place. However, letting the boy walk away as if nothing had happened didn't seem like a plausible option. Unable to finish an entire sentence, the hero delivered a precise blow. Suddenly, he ended that wolf once and for all by cutting off its head. From his bracelet, the voice asked what was going through the boy's mind. But he replied that he didn't need to think when killing bastards like those. The voice said that with the amount of strength the protagonist had, he could easily kill 10 of them. Not understanding his words, the boy looked extremely confused. While he was killing those dogs, it seemed like he was being arrogant and just wanted to show off his strength. Besides everything, the girl at his side was extremely similar to the wolves. She explained that vampires and lycanthropes must serve a master and create inferior beings away from that place. In that case, because lycanthropes were inferior, they had a home very similar to theirs. If their lord was who the voice was thinking of, they could be in serious trouble. It could be someone the hero would be unable to defeat in his current state, so he should stop acting without thinking. Someone was irritated upon realizing the monarch seemed to be saying that he should have let Rubia be sold as a slave. Crying, the girl began to feel guilty for the situation that had been created, but that fight would have happened anyway upon invading the territory. Without giving more details, the voice continued, offering only a few warnings. In the world, there would always be someone stronger than Lee Sunman. The worries of the Monarch of the Void came true sooner than expected. Getting closer, someone said it was a pleasure to meet them. The bracelet showed the despair and anger contained in the Monarch of the Void. A strange figure with white hair and mysterious overcoat appeared from the shadows. That was the leader of the Ghost Wolf sect. His name was Yuan, known as the Mad Wolf. The warrior's reaction to that situation showed the nervousness rising on his skin. Looking around, the leader saw that all of his followers were dead. Realizing that his family had been defeated, he asked who the boy in front of him was. Sensing a certain tension in the air, the hero said his name. Upon hearing that it was Lee Sunman, the Mad Wolf recognized him as Phantom Spear. Looking at him, he thought the boy was part of the unorthodox sect, even though he looked a lot like them. Despite that, none of it mattered at the moment. An energy began to emanate from Juwon's body. Determined, he wanted to end the boy's life right there as a way to avenge his destroyed family. Realizing the wolf's vengeful intentions, Sunman was left shaken. A voice ordered the Mad Wolf to stop that immediately. The Monarch of the Void asked if that werewolf wasn't too old to be playing around with the weak. Feeling that power resonate through the space, Juwon recognized it immediately. It had been 400 years since he had last seen him and believed he was dead. The wolf grew curious about what had happened to his body that he now dwelled inside that child. However, the figure couldn't answer that question as he wasn't sure if his body had disappeared. Recalling a certain lie, Juwon thought of the humiliating situation from before. The wolf had changed a lot since the last time they met, as he used to be much wilder. The Monarch of the Void demanded that Juwon leave immediately so he wouldn't cause any more disturbance. Observing that scene in front of him, he seemed quite reflective about the situation. If he wanted to fight, the character wouldn't just stand there. Even so, the wolf said he was just passing through and hadn't lost much. This time, he said he'd let it go. He asked if the warrior was heading to Travia. As he left, he told him to be more careful on the way. Others wouldn't be as merciful as he was. Meanwhile, the starry sky reflected the almost instant disappearance of the Mad Wolf. If they had fought, the protagonist probably would have lost. Juwon was a monster who had accumulated power for over 100 years. Among non-humans, he was one of the strongest. Besides, he wouldn't even be alive if not for the Monarch of the Void, since he was weak like an insect. At that moment, the warrior decided to ignore the words of that voice that kept speaking to him. Juwon was just the leader of a small sect. Even having reached the top, there were still many mountains to climb. Even so, the world was big, and realizing that made Lee Sungmin happy. Now he wasn't so afraid, and the fact that there was still a path had excited him. However, he was still thoughtful about the phrase that others would not be as merciful. The warrior didn't understand what other people he might have been talking about. The figure of the mad wolf stood still in the middle of the void in darkness. He had encountered the monarch of the void. Confused, he couldn't believe that even after losing his body, the soul was still alive. So he tried to relive some memories in his mind. Looking at the image, it was clear that it was the true monarch of the void who had managed to survive for 400 long years. That human was the famous Phantom Spear, and the monarch of the void was inside him. It was probably him who destroyed some of Janila's toys. The woman said she hadn't cared much, but now she realized the boy had become very annoying. Observing more closely, she noticed how he looked now. Even though he was human, that boy looked like them. And because of the monarch of the void, the wolf let him go. In any case, the woman would continue watching his journey toward Travia. Despite everything, they couldn't be hasty because of the power that dwelled in that human's body. For now, those were the last pieces of information. If anything happened, the predators would notify Ju-won. Finally, he had found a heart thief. Neville showed that the document contained key information about Travia with patterns and characteristics of the forces. The papers were handed to Lee Sungmin. Predators. No one knows when they were founded, but they've existed for at least 100 years. Vampires, lycanthropes, liches, and the like formed an organization created by non-humans, and the symbol was an inverted pentagram. Even though they didn't show themselves much, they were very powerful. The 5 leaders, known as the Black Stars, possessed incredible power, and he knew the risk was very high. Probably the other guys mentioned by Ju-won were those predators, and the Mad Wolf was one of the 5 leaders called Black Stars. Realizing there were 4 more like him, the hero looked worried. They had already been alive for hundreds of years, so dealing with them would be very difficult. If he didn't want to die, he should let the Monarch of the Void take control next time. Despite that, the boy didn't want to become a monster and wouldn't give the perfect opportunity to that figure in his bracelet. The boy knew his master had walked that path, and for his honor, he would continue like this without losing his essence, who he truly was. The monarch didn't understand the point of refusing his power because of that, but the warrior said he didn't want to gain power without a feeling that it was earned through his own efforts. In the end, the protagonist was lucky that Ju-won let him go that time. The voice said that in that place there was a crazy woman who liked guys like him. Noticing the mess that had been caused, the red-haired girl was shocked. She said everyone tried to approach him when he still had strength, but as soon as he weakened, they attacked him. Even so, the mysterious character was able to kill all of them using that body. The figure became increasingly dazzling in front of her as it displayed all its energy. Touching his face, she called the man a poor wretch. Without mercy, she punched him in the face. Desperate, he didn't want the help of a vampire and asked her to stay away. He was determined not to fall for the charms of a woman like that. He was a celestial being, the former king of Travia, the celestial demon, Baek Mujin. To the vampire, that situation was extremely interesting. Without understanding why, someone like him made her heart race in a way it never had before. Licking her wounds, the Black Star of the Predators, Vampire Queen Janila, wished for Baek Mujin to be hers. If he accepted her proposal, he would get his lost arm back. Furthermore, she would give him the power to defeat the one who left him in that state. At that moment, Baek Mujin felt intense pain throughout all his limbs. While baring his teeth at the girl, he stated that he did not accept her proposal. The woman, who had been eagerly waiting for a positive answer, became very irritated. Even after being defeated by someone younger, his willpower still shimmered intact, and that was why she liked him. Each time he rejected her, that strength would gradually weaken. Therefore, it wouldn't take long until he completely surrendered. Either way, that wouldn't make Janila happy. It had always been the same. She lost interest in her toys as soon as she got her hands on them. After that, she would look for another toy, being a monster who had been playing those little games for a long time. As she walked silently, a man called her master. Suddenly, she turned to see what it was about. The man warned about the arrival of a strange young man in the city. He said he looked like a human but possessed the energy of a non-human. In that instant, Janila knew it was the guy mentioned by Ju-won. She thought that Mad Wolf was a complete idiot for letting the boy go without a scratch. Pretending the matter had nothing to do with her, she decided to at least see it with her own eyes. Near a wall, a character was sitting with a huge wound on his chest, appearing to be dead. Some people walked through the streets, strolling without stopping. Lee Sungmin sensed an atmosphere full of tension in that place. Finally, they had arrived in Travia, but the place had turned into chaos after the attack on the celestial demon. Looking more closely, it noticed the pile of bodies. The Monarch of the Void warned that those were not just corpses. All of them were non-humans, lycanthropes, vampires, all kinds of people were in Travia. Normally, they lived hidden, yet now they walked around openly, showing that the city was not normal. Rubia asked if they really needed to come to such a strange place since the old man could have been wrong. The protagonist froze for a moment upon noticing a different voice speaking to him. Startled, he realized the presence of Janila at his side, who said she was a very important person. With her vibrant yellow eyes, the woman introduced herself as Janila and said it was a strange pleasure to meet the young man.